Chapter 45:18. Long Kiba, you're up to no good. West Mountain Elder's face suddenly turned cold. No, I wouldn't dare. I'm telling the truth. Long Kiba was startled. He was in a hurry to get someone else to do his dirty work, but he forgot that West Mountain Elder was a shrewd person. He couldn't hide his dirty thoughts from him at all. The truth? Is Qi Mingyuan an idiot? Why would he provoke me? The West Mountain Old Master squinted at Long Kiba and said, I have no enmity with the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency. Why did you kill these people so recklessly? Do you think my life is too easy? Do you want to provoke the big shots of the righteous sects to cause trouble for me? Senior, please don't be angry. I didn't think it through. Long Kiba didn't dare to talk back to West Mountain Elder, so he could only sincerely admit his mistake. However, he kept cursing in his heart. A dignified opening stage evil cultivator giant doesn't even dare to destroy the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency. What a coward. If word of this gets out, I'll be laughed at. It's better to be safe than sorry. I'm a famous figure in all the righteous sects on the Heavenly Island. I have to be careful with my every move. If I'm caught, the consequences will be unimaginable, West Mountain Elder said in a deep voice. At his level of strength, he had long passed the stage of recklessness. As the saying goes, a tall tree attracts the wind. He could be unscrupulous in West Mountain, but now that he was out of West Mountain, even in the chaotic South Continent Sea, he had to keep a low profile. After all, the saying that good and evil cannot coexist with each other was not as simple as it sounded. Killing was unavoidable, but it had to be done with a good reason. Shishan Old Master hunting Linny down was to avenge his two disciples. It was a matter of course. No one would think there was anything wrong with it. Even the righteous sects couldn't find fault with it. However, every debt has a debtor. If West Mountain Elder killed innocent people, other than Linny himself, he would also kill the entire Heaven's Equal Escort Agency. Even if he was an opening stage evil cultivator giant and seemed to be invincible. Don't forget that the righteous sects also had opening stage evil cultivators, even if there weren't any in the South Continent Sea. There are always other places. Moreover, the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency was now publicly acknowledged as the leader of the righteous Tao in the South Continent Sea. If the West Mountain Old Sect dared to destroy the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency, it would be equivalent to challenging the entire righteous Tao on Heaven Stage Island. If that really happened, it might be another time when the 6 major sects besieged Light Summit. How could the old and cunning West Mountain Elder do such a stupid thing that would bring trouble upon himself? Putting aside the fact that there was no enmity between him and the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency, even if there was a grudge between them, he would not have dared to attack them for no reason given their current status. Yes, Senior is indeed far-sighted. Compared to you, I am still too childish and impulsive. Long Kiba could only smile apologetically and try to curry favor with him. Then he probed with hope in his heart. Senior, you don't have any other matters this time, right? You must stay in our escort agency for a while, so that our juniors can have the opportunity to show their filial piety. Forget it. Since I've already said so, I'll give it to you. I might as well stay at your Dragon Boat Escort Agency for a period of time. West Mountain Elder nodded. This was the reason why he came here. Otherwise he wouldn't have come. Thank you, Senior. Long Kiba was overjoyed, and the stone in his heart finally fell to the ground. He hurriedly ordered, hurry up and prepare a room for Senior. Remember, it must be the best. If you dare to be negligent in this matter, I'll kill you all. Yes. Everyone hurriedly answered. This was a room prepared for a founding stage evil cultivator. Even if they had 100 guts, they wouldn't dare to be negligent. I have something to say first. I promised to stay here, but it's not for nothing. West Mountain Elder suddenly said, my cultivation requires a female in the nascent soul stage to cooperate with me. So, you have to find some female in the nascent soul stage for me. This is the minimum condition. Female in the nascent soul stage? Where can I find them? Long Kiba was instantly dumbfounded. There were not many female cultivators, and the higher the level, the rarer they were. Moreover, most of them were concentrated in the West Island. In the South Continent Sea, which was famous for its chaos, it was rare to see a few female cultivators in the Golden Core stage, let alone female cultivators in the nascent soul stage. If it was so easy to find, would I still need you? West Mountain Elder glanced at Long Kiba and curled his lips. Do you really think that you don't need to do anything and you can let me stay here for your Dragon Boat Escort Agency? How can there be such a good thing in the world? You're the head of an escort agency. You can't be so childish and naive, right? Senior, you're right. I'll do my best and won't let you down. Long Kiba wanted to cry but had no tears. Where could he find female cultivators in the nascent soul stage? Did he have to go all the way to the West Island to kidnap them? Even if he really dared to go to the West Island, it was impossible for him to capture female cultivators in the nascent soul stage alive. After all, he was only a master in the nascent soul stage. If he was lucky enough to meet one, he might not even be able to defeat her, let alone capture her alive. But now that things had come to this, how could Long Kiba dare to say no? It wasn't easy for him to get West Mountain Elder to stay here, but now that things had come to this, he said he didn't want him. Wasn't that just messing with West Mountain Elder? How many lives did he, Long Kiba, have? How dare he mess with an evil cultivator in the opening mountain period? Then I'll wait for your good news. The West Mountain old ancestor smiled with satisfaction. If he could really find a nascent soul female cultivator, it would be a piece of cake for him with his strength. However, he had too many misgivings. If he let Long Kiba collect them on his behalf, the risk would be much smaller. Even if he caused any trouble, he could let Long Kiba take the blame. Poor Long Kiba didn't know about this. In fact, even if he guessed West Mountain Elder's sinister intentions, he had no other choice. Since he decided to cooperate with West Mountain Elder, an evil cultivator in the opening mountain period, he was bound to pay a corresponding price while getting huge benefits. Taking the blame was just one of them. Long Kiba tried his best to flatter West Mountain Elder. Under his orders, the news that West Mountain Elder was in charge of the Dragon Boat Escort Agency spread like wildfire. Soon it spread all over the streets and alleys. In just an hour, everyone in Wei Arc City knew about it. For a moment, the limelight of the Dragon Boat Escort Agency overshadowed the grand return of the Heavens Equal Escort Agency. It became the focus of everyone's discussion. After all, it was an evil cultivator in the opening mountain period, a super existence that the entire South Continent had to look up to. When the news reached the Heavens Equal Escort Agency, Qi Mingyuan, Qi Wenhan, and the others couldn't help but be shocked. Chapter 45:19. This was good news for the Dragon Boat Escort Agency, but it was bad news for the Heavens Equal Escort Agency. If the West Mountain Elder was unhappy, he could easily wipe out the entire Heavens Equal Escort Agency. What would they do then? This kind of thing wasn't impossible, in fact it was extremely possible. However, in the midst of their fear, other than the bad news of Shishan Elder being in charge of the Dragon Boat Escort Agency, they finally heard a piece of good news. Lin Yi didn't die, at least not at the hands of Shishan Elder. That's great, Brother Ling did not disappoint us. I knew that anything that happened to him would not be strange, ha. Qi Wenhan was overjoyed. In comparison, the threat of the West Mountain Elder was completely ignored by him. Young hero Ling is truly a rare genius, even the West Mountain Elder could not do anything to him, this is really... Qi Mingyuan was overjoyed, but he could not help but be dumbfounded. The West Mountain Elder was an evil cultivator of the mountain opening stage, yet he failed to kill a golden core stage expert. If this did not come from the mouth of the West Mountain Elder, no one would believe it. To be able to escape the West Mountain Elder's pursuit is indeed worthy of celebration. However, young hero Ling is currently trapped in the southern island, it is still very dangerous. Honest Chai, who rushed over after hearing the news, was still worried. Shopkeeper Chai, don't worry about this. Brother Ling is a virtuous person, even the West Mountain Elder could not take his life. The spiritual beasts are the same. Let's just wait for him to return. Qi Wenhan, on the other hand, was full of confidence in Lin Yi. After witnessing so many miracles from Lin Yi, he couldn't help but worship Lin Yi blindly. He was almost treating Lin Yi as his idol. That's right, young hero Ling has been to Lufeng Forest before and has the experience of surviving in the southern island. Who knows, he might be able to survive this time. We don't need to worry too much. Qi Mingyuan agreed. That's true, with young hero Ling's strength, he will definitely be able to return safely. This time, I will definitely be able to return safely. Honest Chai nodded. The sudden appearance of the Western Mountains' old sect master had caused a huge commotion in Velvet Arc City at the beginning, causing everyone in the Heavens Equal Escort Agency to be in a state of panic. After that, he did not do anything else. He merely stayed in the Dragon Boat Escort Agency and did not take a single step out of the agency. As time passed, the focus of the public gradually shifted away from the West Mountain old sect master. It seemed that the appearance of this evil cultivator at the mountain opening period did not have much impact on Wei Arc City. It was just that the Dragon Boat Escort Agency's business had improved a little, that was all. However, even with the presence of the West Mountain old sect leader, the business of the Dragon Boat Escort Agency only recovered to its previous level and did not reach a particularly explosive level. In fact, most of the businesses that came to them were scattered businesses, and they could only earn a small profit. As for the long-term and huge orders like the Hong Chamber of Commerce, there was not a single one. Firstly, the majority of these large orders from the Chamber of Commerce had been placed during the South Continent Escort Agency Alliance Conference that day. The Dragon Boat Escort Agency didn't get to eat the meat at that time. Now it was destined that they could only drink some thin soup. Secondly, most of the Chamber of Commerce trusted the Heavens Equal Escort Agency. After all, it was the true overlord of the escort agencies. Its strength and reputation were top-notch, but it was hard to say for the Dragon Boat Escort Agency. Since they were related to evil cultivators, their reputation was naturally not good. Now that the West Mountain Old Sect leader was in charge, there was no doubt about their strength. The problem was, who could guarantee that the West Mountain Old Sect leader would always stay in the Dragon Boat Escort Agency? What if the Chamber of Commerce signed long-term contracts with them and the West Mountain Old Sect leader suddenly left one day? Wouldn't that be a huge loss for them? Merchants were born to pursue profits. If they couldn't see stable returns, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens for them to fork out large amounts of spiritual jades. Long Kiba, who was looking forward to surpassing the Heavens Equal Escort Agency, was obviously not satisfied with this result. He didn't expect that with the West Mountain Old Sect leader personally in charge, the Dragon Boat Escort Agency's business would be in such a half-dead state. This was completely different from the hot situation he had expected. This enormous disparity simply caused Long Kiba to be depressed to the point of wanting to spit blood. After all, he'd been forced to search for nascent soul-stage female cultivators every single day these past few days. How could he endure such great pressure in exchange for such a small amount of benefits? However, no matter how depressed Long Kiba was, there was nothing he could do. After all, business was a matter of mutual consent. As an escort agency owner, he couldn't use the West Mountain Old Sect leader's name to go out and force those Chamber of Commerce to buy and sell, right? If he really caused an uproar, the first person to look for him would be the West Mountain Old Sect leader. This evil cultivator was determined to keep a low profile. Wasn't Long Kiba looking for trouble for him? Wayark City returned to its usual peace. If there was really a difference, it would be that there were obviously more outsiders coming to the Wayark waters. This was the central effect brought about by the overlord of the escort agency. In the past, everyone went to the Devil Cold Waters, but now, it was the Wayark waters' turn. In the forest of the southern island, after the ghostly thing scared away the West Mountain Old Sect leader, Lin Yi stayed at the same place to rest and recuperate. After healing his injuries, he continued to move forward in the dense forest. Although it was a completely unfamiliar place with a competent guide like the ghostly thing, he didn't have to worry about getting lost. However, what made Lin Yi feel rather strange was that he had been walking in this dense forest for a whole 3 days and 3 nights, but he still hadn't encountered a single spiritual beast. This was the base camp of the spiritual beast. Logically speaking, a powerful spiritual beast should be kicked out at any time. How could there not be a single spiritual beast? This didn't make sense. After all, even in the very edge of Lufeng Forest, traces of spiritual beasts could often be found. Now, according to the ghostly thing, this place was much closer to the core hinterland of the southern island than Lufeng Forest. If Lufeng Forest was said to be a remote mountain village, then this place was at least a junction between the city and the suburbs. However, this scene was a little too abnormal. Not only Lin Yi but even the ghostly thing felt a little strange at this time. No matter how one looked at it, this indeed couldn't be considered normal. If the edge was so empty, it would make sense. However, after walking for 3 days and 3 nights, they were already deep in the hinterland, but it was still as dead as a ghost. It really didn't make sense. Senior, should we continue to walk in? Why don't we go back? I feel that this place is a little weird. Lin Yi couldn't help but frown. There must be something wrong if something was abnormal, especially when this place was the base camp of the spiritual beasts. If they let their guard down, it would be fatal. Chapter 45:20. Lin Yi knew very well that he must not be greedy or curious in a place like the South Island because any one of them would lead to disaster and death. It's indeed abnormal. Seems like something big has happened. Let's go and take a look, the ghost said after a moment of hesitation. Okay. Lin Yi did not object. Although his rationality told him that it might be dangerous to go on like this, since the ghost insisted on taking a look, of course he would accompany it to the end. After all, they were on the same side. Moreover, Lin Yi could see that even though the ghost could not protect itself, it was still very concerned about the spirit beasts. It said that it did not want to go back to the spirit beasts, but it would unconsciously remember the slightest sign of trouble. To a certain extent, this senior spirit beast was actually quite arrogant. Lin Yi continued on his way to the core area, but he was much more careful with every step he took. This place was supposed to be a place where powerful spirit beasts gathered, but it had become so strange. He didn't even need to think to know that something was amiss. One wrong move and he'd be doomed. Along the way another day passed. Lin Yi was more and more surprised. Could something big have happened to the spirit beasts? Just when Lin Yi could not hold back his curiosity, the ghost's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Wait, don't go any further. Lin Yi quickly stopped and found a hidden corner to hide himself. He looked around and found nothing special, so he could not help but ask in surprise, Senior, what did you find? There are many spirit beasts gathered in front, and their auras are not weak. If you continue to go there you'll definitely be discovered, the ghost said in a deep voice. Many spirit beasts gathered in front? Lin Yi was shocked. He did not sense them at all, so there should be a long distance to the gathering place of the spirit beasts. Moreover, the ghost said that these spirit beasts were not weak. They must be extremely powerful existences. Many spirit beasts have very unique auras. Even if they consciously hide their auras, they can't completely hide it. You human cultivators can't sense it, but you can't hide it from my senses, the ghostly thing explained. Then, what do we do now? Lin Yi asked. Since there were peerlessly powerful spiritual beasts in front of him, a human cultivator like him would be courting death if he went over rashly. However, if he retreated now, it would go against his original intention. After all, he only knew that there were many spiritual beasts gathered together, but he did not know what was going on. For the sake of safety we can't go any further. The ghost being pondered for a brief moment. It really wanted to know what had happened to the spirit beasts, but it had to ensure Lin Yi's safety first. It could not let Lin Yi take such a huge risk. Therefore, the ghost creature would rather retreat in this situation. In any case, if something were to happen to the spirit beasts, it would not be able to do anything in its current state. All it could do was watch from the sidelines. All right. Since the ghost had said so, Lin Yi naturally wouldn't force it. Even if he wanted to help, he had to first have the strength to do so. At least with his current strength at the peak of the middle stage of Gold Core, it was far from enough to intervene in the affairs of the spirit beasts. After taking a deep breath, Lin Yi immediately carefully restrained his breath and prepared to withdraw. However, at this moment, the ghost creature suddenly shouted softly, "Don't move." At the same time, a powerful divine sense, like a monstrous blazing wave, suddenly crossed the top of Lin Yi's head. Lin Yi thought that his strength was not weak, but compared with the owner of this divine sense, he was at most a grain of sand. While the ghost creature was at least a vast and boundless sea of sand. There was no comparison between them. At this moment, Lin Yi's heart was even more horrified than when he faced the Shishan Elder sect, the evil cultivator of the mountain opening period. It was much more shocking and horrifying. The feeling of having goosebumps all over his body in an instant once again made Lin Yi deeply understand what it meant to be unreachable and daunting. Lin Yi couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. He carefully used divine sense to communicate with the ghost creature in his mind. The ghost creature was silent for a moment, then it slowly said two words in a very complicated tone. "Je Quebec." Lin Yi suddenly became silent. No wonder it was so horrifying. No wonder a random divine sense was more shocking than the Shishan Elder sect. It turned out to be the top elder of the Spirit Beast clan. No wonder a single divine sense was so hot and terrifying. Even Lin Yi, who had always been accustomed to using frenzied fire, couldn't bear it. It turned out to be Zhu Ke, the ancestor of playing with fire. Apart from the former king of the Spirit Beasts, a top-notch elder like the Vermilion Bird was the pinnacle of the Spirit Beast clan. The Spirit Beast clan had always strictly adhered to the law of the jungle. For a top-notch elder to be able to intimidate so many powerful spirit beasts, one could imagine how terrifying his power was. However, Lin Yi immediately thought that the ghost creature living in the space of the Jade Pendant at the moment was once in existence at the same level as Zhu Quebec. Naturally, their strength should not be too different. Although he had long known that the ghost creature was the top elder of the Spirit Beast clan, Lin Yi had no idea how strong the ghost creature was in its heyday. In private, he had made various speculations about the levels of human cultivators. He had guessed the nascent soul stage, the profound ascension stage, and the mountain opening stage. In the secular world, he had ridiculously thought that it was heaven stage great perfection. But now he finally experienced it. At the same time, Lin Yi unconsciously broke out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, when he first encountered the ghost creature in the secular world, this guy was already in a broken spirit. Otherwise, if it still had 1/10,000th of its strength, he wouldn't even know how he died. After being silent for a long time with lingering fear, Lin Yi finally managed to recover and asked, "Senior, then are we still going?" As the top elder of the Spirit Beast clan, the ghost creature obviously had a friendship with Zhu Quebec. However, whether this friendship was good or bad, enemy or friend, only the ghost creature itself knew. "Are we going or not?" Hearing this, the ghost creature half laughed at itself and half explained, "Let me tell you this, if it was in its heyday in the past, Zhu Ke would have to call me Big Brother. But if we are discovered in this state, it will definitely find a way to make my soul fly away. Of course you will also be burned to ashes." Chapter 45-21. After all, this was the territory of the spirit beasts, which was also the territory of the vermilion bird. It didn't even need to do anything to kill a human cultivator like Lin Yi. Not only would the ghost be of no help, it would also die even faster if it dared to show itself. "No. It's too late to retreat now, the vermilion bird has already discovered you." The ghost stopped him in a deep voice. Lin Yi was shocked. With his current strength, he would definitely die if he was targeted by the vermilion bird. "Since you were scanned by its divine sense just now, it's impossible for the vermilion bird not to know that you're here." The ghost's words made Lin Yi feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. However, the next sentence made him heave a sigh of relief. "But you don't have to be too alarmed. When it scanned you with its divine sense just now, I deliberately disguised a trace of the aura of a spirit beast on your head. So, you should try to hide your own aura as much as possible. In this way to outsiders you'll look like a spirit beast in human form. If nothing goes wrong you should be able to get away with it." "Oh, that's not too bad." Lin Yi nodded with lingering fear. He couldn't guarantee anything else, but if it was just about hiding his own aura, if he claimed to be the second strongest in the world, no one could be the first in the world. But don't be too happy too early. Even if the vermilion bird didn't notice anything strange just now, it's impossible for you to retreat now. The ghost sighed. "Why?" Lin Yi's heart tightened again. "There are so many spirit beasts gathered in front of us. It's obvious that all the spirit beasts in this area have been gathered there. According to my speculation, the vermilion bird is holding a spirit beast conference. In principle, all the spirit beasts in the core area must be present. If you weren't discovered just now, it'd be fine. But if you retreat now, it'd be too suspicious." The ghost smiled bitterly. So I can only brace myself and move forward. "Senior, are you sure it'll be okay?" Lin Yi suddenly felt helpless. He knew that the vermilion bird was holding a spirit beast conference in front of him, but he still dared to move forward. Wasn't this the same as hanging himself? Was he tired of living? Lin Yi had always been bold, but he wasn't stupid. He would be crazy if he jumped into the frying pan even though he knew it was dangerous. There should be no problem. The ghostly thing couldn't be too sure. After all, no matter how one looked at it, this matter was very risky. However, it still comforted Lin Yi. "With your ability to conceal your aura and the spirit beast aura that I've disguised on your body, as long as they don't try to distinguish it, even if you're face to face with the vermilion bird, they won't be able to tell anything." "All right." Lin Yi nodded with a bitter smile. He knew what the ghostly thing was trying to say. As long as no one was targeting him, everything would be fine. However, if he was targeted by a spiritual beast expert, especially if the vermilion bird noticed that something was amiss, then everything would be over. However, since things had developed to this point, there was no other way out. He could only bite the bullet and do as the ghost said. "Kid, you don't have to worry too much. Other than some races with special talents or spirit beasts that don't like human form, many spiritual beasts with a little bit of intelligence can transform into human form. Many spirit beasts with a little bit of intelligence can take on a human form after reaching the heavenly Tao, so even if you go there now, you won't attract too much attention." The ghostly thing continued to comfort him. "Don't worry, Senior. Although this is a little dangerous, it's not a big deal. Although it's a little dangerous, I can still take it." Lin Yi let out a long breath. He was not a person who was afraid of things. Moreover, it was useless to be afraid now that things had come to a head. The more panicked he was, the easier it would be for him to reveal his flaws. Only by dealing with it calmly could he have a chance to get away with it. "Well, that's good. However, just to be safe, you'd better wear the 1,000 silk mask. You'd better wear the 1,000 thread mask. That rough martial appearance is more in line with the aesthetics of spirit beasts. Most spirit beasts have a similar temperament after transforming into human form. Your current appearance is too delicate, and it's easy to attract attention," the ghostly thing warned again. "All right." Lin Yi nodded, took out the 1,000 silk mask and put it on. At the same time, he complained in his heart about the strange aesthetic of the spiritual beasts. He had been cultivating for so long, but this was the first time someone said he looked delicate. Everything was ready. After Lin Yi calmed his mind and held his breath, he immediately walked forward. The ghost released the aura of a spiritual beast at the right time. This was not the aura of the ghost itself, but it was deliberately disguised. Its strength was only equivalent to that of a spiritual beast at the gold core stage. It was better to be careful. If the ghost directly released its own aura, even if he deliberately suppressed the strength, it would still be very dangerous. Other spiritual beasts might not be able to recognize it for a while, but the old enemy of the vermilion bird would definitely be able to detect it in an instant. That would be the real disaster. Along the way, after about the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, Lin Yi finally sensed the aura of a large group of powerful spiritual beasts. Judging from their position, they were not far ahead. From a distance, he could hear some strange cheering and jumping sounds. Sometimes there were hoo-hoo-ha, and sometimes there were hoo-hoo. Ordinary people could not understand what this meant, but it sounded very lively. Taking a deep breath, Lin Yi continued to brace himself and walked forward. After a short while, the original lush primitive jungle suddenly opened up. As far as the eye could see, there was an extremely empty field. There were no dense shrubs, no giant trees, no swamps or deep pools. It was just a green grassland. As Lin Yi and the ghost expected, there were indeed many spiritual beasts gathered here. There were 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Many of them had transformed into human forms, and many of them maintained their original forms. All of them were speaking in human language, laughing and cheering. If he had suddenly seen this scene in the secular world, Lin Yi would definitely have cried out involuntarily. This was simply a group of demons dancing. Even though he was already mentally prepared when he saw so many spiritual beasts at once, and each of them had a strong and extraordinary aura, Lin Yi could not help but be a little dumbfounded. The spiritual beasts he had seen in his life could not even compare to 1% of the spiritual beasts here. At this moment, in the middle of the empty field, there was a group of spiritual beasts in human form singing and dancing. It seemed that they were performing something. The other spiritual beasts in the field were watching with relish and cheering from time to time. However, in the eyes of Lin Yi, this was simply like a primitive tribe. He really could not see what was so beautiful about that strange dance. Chapter 45:22. I've finally seen the legendary Spirit Beast clan today. Is this the Spiritual Beast Convention that you mentioned, Senior? Lin Yi secretly asked the ghost. Just a little on the top, said Little Bitch. You can say that. The ghost's breathing became more hurried and it said in a complicated tone, this can't be considered a complete spiritual beast convention because the spirit beasts from several regions haven't arrived yet. However, the scale of this convention is no small matter. All the spirit beasts nearby have been summoned. It seems that the vermilion bird is really ambitious and is preparing to become the regent. The vermilion bird? Which one is the vermilion bird? Lin Yi looked at the high platform in surprise. Because he wasn't in his original form, he couldn't determine which one it was even though he knew that the vermilion bird was on the platform. He subconsciously looked at the center of the high platform. At this moment, there was a mysterious man wearing a bamboo hat sitting in that seat. It was unknown what he looked like, nor what kind of spirit beast he was. All he knew was that his bamboo hat was made from a variety of colorful feathers, and he was the most conspicuous person present. Moreover, the person sitting in the center seat was undoubtedly the most important person, and it should be the vermilion bird. After all, according to the logic of most people, even though the vermilion bird was a top-rate elder of the spirit beast clan, it was still a bird at the end of the day, so it was very normal and logical for it to like wearing a body of gorgeous feathers. Not that one. The ghost knew what Lin Yi was thinking and pointed out, the one on the left of the man in the bamboo hat is the vermilion bird. Lin Yi looked again, noticing that in the seats closest to the man in the hat, there were 2 weird-looking old men sitting on the left and right of the man in the hat. The one on the left had a face as red as blood, and his eyebrows were furrowed, giving off an intimidating aura. Although he was just sitting there calmly, his entire body seemed to be shrouded in raging flames, making people not dare to look him in the eye. It felt like they would be burned to ashes if they got too close. Although his appearance was rather strange, the vermilion bird's aura was not too surprising. Nonetheless, the vermilion bird's true appearance and aura were not too surprising. At least, to Lin Yi, it was worthy of its status as a top-notch elder among the spirit beasts. At first glance, one could tell that the vermilion bird was like a god among the clouds and would not be regarded as an ordinary spirit beast. Then who's that man in the middle and the one on his right? Lin Yi couldn't help but ask curiously. Putting aside the mysterious bamboo hat man, even the old man standing to his right was as strange and eye-catching as the vermilion bird. He had a green face and sharp fangs and his eyes were a dazzling gold. The terrifying aura he exuded was not much weaker than the vermilion birds. That mysterious bamboo hat man. Looks like he's the new spirit beast monarch that the vermilion bird found. I wonder what kind of spirit beast he is, the ghostly thing sighed. In order to search for the bloodline of the spirit beast monarch in the secular world, it had fallen to such a miserable state. It would be a lie to say that it didn't have any doubts about this new spirit beast monarch. After all, the vermilion bird's reputation had never been very good. Furthermore, there were far too many dramas of the vermilion bird using the emperor as a hostage. If it wasn't for his current state, the ghostly thing would definitely go up and personally examine the quality of this new spirit beast monarch. If it discovered that the bloodline was fake, it would be the first to attack the vermilion bird. However, what could it do? The ghostly thing silently paused for a moment before speaking in a deep voice. As for the one on the right, I don't know him either. Could he be a newly promoted elder of the vermilion bird monarch? From the fact that this person was able to stand side by side with the vermilion bird monarch, it was clear that this person's status was extremely high. It was very likely that he was also an elder. However, this ghostly thing had more or less interacted with the elders of the Spirit Beast clan. However, it had never seen such an existence before. This was a completely unfamiliar face. The ghostly thing couldn't help but fall into deep thought from the strange scene today. From the strange scene today, it could already smell something unusual. All the signs indicated that this Spirit Beast clan was no longer the Spirit Beast clan that it was familiar with. The ghostly thing's heart was filled with a myriad of emotions. However, Linny did not think too much about it. He only quietly blended in with the crowd. Oh no, to be more precise, he should be in the herd of Spirit Beasts. To him, it did not matter what happened to the Spirit Beast clan as long as his human identity was not discovered. What made Linny feel rather gratified was that the surrounding powerful Spirit Beasts had all their attention focused on the high platform and the group of dancing Spirit Beasts in the middle. From the beginning to the end, none of them had even glanced at him. Even if the Spirit Beasts next to him had occasionally noticed him, their gazes would only pass for a brief moment. After all, Lin Yi's body was only emitting the aura of a golden core Spirit Beast. In the eyes of everyone present, this insignificant level of strength could only be considered as an existence at the bottom. No one would waste their time to pay attention to such a weakling, let alone strike up a conversation with him. If this was any other occasion where killing was allowed, it would make sense for him to be eaten by the Spirit Beasts as a snack. No matter what, it seemed like the ghostly thing's disguise was a success. If there were no accidents, it should be able to get away with this successfully. Amidst the heaven-shaking cheers, the human-shaped Spirit Beasts in the middle finally finished their dance and dispersed into the herd of Spirit Beasts. All of the Spirit Beasts present then turned their attention to the high platform. That was just the opening dance. The next part of the show was the most important part. As expected, once all of the Spirit Beasts' attention had been shifted to the high platform, the vermilion bird immediately laughed and took a step forward, leaving the so-called new Spirit Beast King and the other elders behind. Looking at its high-spirited appearance, those who did not know better would have thought that it was the Spirit Beast King. Very good, I'm very happy to see all of the Spirit Beast brothers from Enluo Cultivation City gathered here to pay respects to our new king. As the vermilion bird spoke, a scorching wave of air enveloped the entire place with every move it made. Not only did it show its overwhelming power, it also made the already enthusiastic atmosphere even more hot-blooded. As soon as the vermilion bird finished speaking, the entire place was filled with cheers. All of the Spirit Beasts, regardless of whether they were in human or beast forms, knelt on the ground in unison, shouting, "Long live the king," as they prostrated themselves on the ground. These were all unruly and powerful Spirit Beasts. If any one of them were to be released, they would probably cause chaos in the South Continent Sea. Lin Yi initially thought that based on their temperament, even if they would obey the so-called new Spirit Beast King, it would at most be a formality. He did not expect them to be willing to prostrate themselves on the ground. Such a scene of prostrating oneself on the ground was rare even in the strictly ordered human sections. It was evident that the Spirit Beast clan was not as disunited as most people thought. Chapter 45-23. They might not be disciplined at all, but they absolutely followed the natural law that the strong ruled. As long as the king of the spiritual beasts and the top-notch elders were powerful enough, the cohesion of the spiritual beasts would not be weaker than that of human cultivators. In fact, they might even be more powerful. This was because unlike human cultivators who harbored ulterior motives and plotted against each other, these spiritual beasts were much purer by nature. Since they had chosen to obey, they would sincerely obey before they had the power to launch a counterattack. They would not pretend to agree but oppose in secret. Anlua Cultivation City? While Lin Yi was pretending, he could not help but mutter in confusion. He asked the ghost thing in private, "Senior, what do you mean? The South Island is not like the human territory where there are no complicated divisions such as cities and towns. The entire South Island is divided into 5 areas, and the core of each area is a cultivation city. Anlua District is one of the 5 areas, and it's located near the Dark Devil Sea area of the South Island." The ghost thing explained to Lin Yi. "I see." Lin Yi suddenly thought of Audwa Cultivation City in Lufeng Forest. Although it was now abandoned as a relic, it should have been a large area of the South Island before it was abandoned. However, after it was completely abandoned, there were fewer and fewer spiritual beasts. Instead, it gradually became a place for human cultivators to explore. According to the order of the previous king of spiritual beasts, each cultivation city will be guarded by a top-notch elder. Basically, it can be seen as the top-notch elder's sphere of influence. The ghost thing continued. Initially, it did not want to tell Lin Yi about the spiritual beasts. However, this time it wanted to let Lin Yi know more about the inside story. After all, he was in the South Island now. It had to let Lin Yi know what kind of situation he was in at the very least. "So, there are a total of 5 top-notch elders in the spiritual beasts?" Lin Yi asked. "No, there are always only 4 top-notch elders." The ghost thing paused and explained, "The other 4 cultivation cities have their own top-notch elders, but Anlua Cultivation City is different. Because of the existence of the 4 Seas Escort Agency, the Dark Devil Sea area has always been the center of the South Island, so it's the same for Anlua Cultivation City. There's no need for any elders here because the king of spiritual beasts is here." Lin Yi nodded. Anluo Cultivation City was personally overseen by the Spirit Beast King, and the 4 top-notch elders could be considered as high-ranking officials, each of them guarding a region for the Spirit Beast King. Such an arrangement could not be said to be simple and crude. Nonetheless, it was in line with the Spirit Beast's straightforward style. When the Spirit Beast King isn't around, won't Anluo Cultivation City be ownerless? Lin Yi asked. A country can't live without a king and a city can't live without a master. There was a long period of time between the disappearance of the former king of spirit beasts. As the center of the South Island, Anlua Cultivation City couldn't be in a state of chaos all the time. That won't be the case. Ever since the disappearance of the previous Spirit Beast King, the 4 elders decided to take turns to guard the Spirit Beast King. However, as time went on, everyone began to harbor their own schemes to replace him. In the end, it became more and more intense. Seeing that they were about to fall apart and even kill each other, I proposed to go to the secular world to look for the bloodline of the Spirit Beast King. You know what happened next? The ghost thing sighed. Well, this is actually normal. There will only be so-called loyalty under the deterrence of absolute power. Human cultivators are all like this. Naturally, the spirit beasts are no exception. Lin Yi nodded and sighed. While Lin Yi communicated with the ghost thing secretly, Vermilion Bird looked at all the spirit beasts present who had surrendered. She laughed with satisfaction and said, "Brothers of spirit beasts, the king is still very young now. It's not enough for him to lead the spirit beast clan by himself. As his subordinates, we can't force him. At least we have to give the king space to grow. Therefore, the king has decided to let me and Elder Azure Dragon work together to manage the affairs." Before the Vermilion Bird could finish speaking, the strange old man with a green face and long fangs stepped forward and nodded at the spirit beasts present. He was obviously the Elder Azure Dragon that the Vermilion Bird was referring to. As for the so-called new Spirit Beast King, he had not made a single sound since the beginning. Everything was being controlled by the Vermilion Bird. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that he was a puppet through and through. What? Elder Azure Dragon? Lin Yi did not have much of a reaction. However, after the ghost thing heard this, its already rapid breathing became even more unstable. Lin Yi could clearly sense a monstrous rage from it. Ever since he met the ghost thing, he had never seen it so irritated. "What's wrong, senior?" Lin Yi quickly asked. "Azure Dragon." Azure Dragon, this bastard has promoted a new Elder Azure Dragon." The ghost thing gnashed its teeth in anger. If it was at its peak, Lin Yi had no doubt that it would have rushed forward and stepped on the Vermilion Bird Elder. "What do you mean?" Lin Yi was confused. There were a total of 4 top-notch elders. Since there was a Vermilion Bird Elder, then there was also a Azure Dragon Elder, right? Because I am Elder Azure Dragon." The ghost thing roared. Lin Yi was shocked speechless. This was the first time he knew the ghost thing's true identity. No wonder it was so agitated and angry. It turned out that this was the original Elder Azure Dragon. It was obvious that the person standing on the stage was the Vermilion Bird's newly promoted wing. This was actually not difficult to understand. When the ghost thing descended into the secular world as one of the 4 great elders, no one would dare to do anything to it for a short period of time. However, after disappearing for a long time, its position as a top-notch elder naturally became a fat piece of meat in the eyes of others. It was normal for it to be replaced. Senior, don't be too angry. Since it dared to change the position of the king of spirit beasts, how could it change the position of an elder? Lin Yi could only comfort it with a wry smile. The ghost thing was silent for a long time. Its rapid breathing gradually calmed down. With a hint of relief and helplessness it said, "You're right. I've disappeared for so long, it's normal for a new elder to replace me. It seems that the Vermilion Bird has indeed taken control of the overall situation of the Spirit Beast clan. It's really not easy. Aren't there other top-notch elders? Are they just going to let the Vermilion Bird act so presumptuously?" Lin Yi asked curiously. There are 5 major cultivation cities on the South Island. The Vermilion Bird has its own city, this new elder Azure Dragon has his own city, and this Anlua Cultivation City, which nominally belongs to the King of Spirit Beasts. A total of 3 cities have fallen into the Vermilion Bird's control. The other 2 elders don't agree with it, so it can't go against them. Moreover, this guy is now in a righteous position. He can use the Emperor to order the feudal vassals, Chapter 45-24. The Vermilion Bird occupied 3 out of the 5 great cultivation cities. Furthermore, the Vermilion Bird controlled the Emperor and commanded the feudal vassals. This familiar situation reminded Lin Yi of Cao Cao during the 3 Kingdoms period. He was also extremely powerful. As for whether or not the other 2 elders could stop the Vermilion Bird, it would depend on whether or not they had the qualifications to become Sun Quan and Liu Bei. Senior, don't be impatient. A little impatience will spoil a great plan. Our current strength is insufficient. Even if we jump out, we won't be able to stop the Vermilion Bird. However, one day we will definitely get justice. Lin Yi said in a determined tone. He wasn't just trying to comfort the ghostly thing. He truly had this thought. With his relationship with the ghostly thing, he couldn't just stand by and watch. Lin Yi believed that one day, he would have enough strength to intervene in the affairs of the Spirit Beast clan. When that time comes, he would make the Vermilion Bird spit out everything that the ghostly thing had taken from him. You little brat. The ghostly thing couldn't help but laugh. Its originally gloomy mood was greatly relieved. It laughed and scolded, "Do you think I'm a brainless idiot? How could I not understand this logic? But to be honest, with my original personality, I really didn't know how to endure. However, now that I've been with you every day, I've learned it. You've taught me several lessons." "You're overpraising me, Senior." Lin Yi scratched his head, a little embarrassed. "There's no need to be humble. I'm really not flattering you." The ghostly thing laughed and sighed with deep emotion. "Patience is the most important thing. Once you have enough strength, you will strike with lightning speed. Originally, your strength was far greater than yours, but they were all trampled to death by you one after another. However, they were trampled to death by you one after another. I realized that only by becoming like you can one be truly ruthless." Lin Yi almost spat out his saliva. Fortunately, he forcefully held it back and the other spirit beasts around him didn't notice anything strange. With a strange expression he said, "Cough cough. Senior, are you praising me or insulting me?" "Of course I'm praising you. There aren't many people who can do this. Although cultivators are known to cultivate their body and mind, most of them don't have a high spiritual realm. There are many who are brave and ruthless and there are many who are impulsive. Many people fight for a moment of pride. They would rather die than stand up for themselves, but you are different. If you can't beat them, you'll run. That's why you're still alive today." The ghostly thing sighed. "All right, take it as a compliment." Lin Yi rubbed his nose and asked, "Senior, why did you say that? Are you not planning to reveal your identity? Isn't that obvious? Look at this situation, the Vermilion Bird's words are the law from top to bottom. If I dare to show my face now, not only will my soul be destroyed, you'll also die with me." The ghostly thing curled its lips. "That's true." Lin Yi nodded. That was exactly what he was thinking. He was just afraid that the ghostly thing would be unable to control its anger for a while. Since the ghostly thing was able to control itself, that was for the best. "All right. This time, I've gathered everyone here because I have an important matter regarding our Spirit Beast clan to discuss with all of you. I'll let Elder Azure Dragon explain it to everyone in detail." The Vermilion Bird gave Azure Dragon a meaningful look. Subsequently, it returned to its seat and handed the right to speak to the newly appointed Azure Dragon Elder. Azure Dragon cleared his throat, which had a strange metallic quality to it. He faced all the spirit beasts present and said, "Spirit beast brothers, according to the king's decree, the South Continent has always been the territory of our spirit beast clan. But now, human cultivators were everywhere in the South Continent Sea region. In fact, they've even taken over the dominant position." Why? Of course, the South Continent that he was referring to did not only include the southern island, but also all of the South Continent Sea areas such as the Devil Ling, Zhenduan, Weiqian, and Distant Star. The southern island and the huge sea areas nearby were the complete South Continent. That's right, why? All the spirit beasts present were instantly stirred up. Although the spirit beast clan and the human sects had reached a tacit agreement not to invade each other, and there had been no major turmoil all these years, in reality, the confrontation between the spirit beasts and human cultivators had always existed. In various parts of the 5 heavenly islands, they had always been killing each other. Human cultivators coveted the various materials on the spirit beasts, while the spirit beasts in turn treated the humans as the best delicacies. It could be said that a large number of human cultivators and various spirit beasts died in each other's hands every day. However, these casualties were considered normal natural competitions and were far from the level of war, so everyone turned a blind eye to it. Therefore, the South Continent, which was the base camp of the spirit beast clan, still had a large number of human cultivators living in the surrounding sea areas, and they had always lived in harmony with each other. However, now that Azure Dragon had said this balance would probably be thrown into disarray. Not only that, these shameless human cultivators not only openly occupied the South Continent Sea area that belongs to the Spirit Beast clan, they even had the guts to sneak into our South Island's territory for this so-called adventure, steal our treasures and kill our fellow spirit beasts. Everyone, do you think we can tolerate this? Azure Dragon deliberately stirred up the crowd's emotions. We can't tolerate it. We can't tolerate it. We can't tolerate it. The spirit beasts present were even more enraged. That's right, the South Continent is the territory of the Spirit Beast clan. Only the Spirit Beast clan is the sole overlord of the South Continent. We can't tolerate this. Azure Dragon nodded in satisfaction. He made a hand gesture to calm the crowd of spirit beasts down, then continued, "I also heard that the spirit beasts scattered in the other heavenly islands are often killed wantonly by human cultivators because they are alone and because those places are the humans' territory. Some of them are even taken as spirit pets for the humans to order around. Everyone, don't you think this is a great humiliation for the Spirit Beast clan?" Humiliation. 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 All the spirit beasts present had their necks flushed red and their eyes were bloodshot. It was as if they were going to eat someone at any time. Lin Yi, who was among them, could not help but feel his scalp go numb when he saw the scene of tens of thousands of beasts roaring. He was shocked speechless. If they continued to incite the crowd, a war between the Spirit Beast clan and human cultivators would be inevitable. What were the Vermilion Bird and Azure Dragon trying to do? Were they really going to start a war? What are these two bastards thinking? The ghost creature was also frowning. If the Spirit Beast clan's power could be gathered together, they would be much more powerful than any human sect. However, there were not just a few human sects, there were hundreds and thousands of human sections. If a full-scale war were to start, the Spirit Beast clan was destined to end up in one end, death without a burial place. Chapter 45-25. After all, even the previous spiritual beast king, who was so powerful and invincible, did not dare to start an all-out war with human cultivators. In the end, they reached a tacit understanding of not interfering with each other's business. How could a mere vermilion bird have such guts and ambition? How dare the humans bully us and humiliate the spiritual beast clan? My fellow spiritual beast brothers, what do you think we should do? The Azure Dragon instigated them openly. Damn it, humans, an eye for an eye. Yes, let the humans pay the price. The spiritual beast clan cannot be cowards. Kill, kill, kill. A shocking murderous aura suddenly erupted from the bodies of the spiritual beasts. Even the weather was affected. The weather suddenly changed. The originally clear sky was now covered with dark clouds, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The deliberate instigation had completely aroused the monstrous rage of the spiritual beasts present. Powerful spiritual beasts were wild and untamed to begin with. In their eyes, human cultivators were merely food. Now that they had suddenly realized that they, the dignified spiritual beast clan, had been bullied by humans to this extent, how could they continue to compromise for the sake of the general interest? Everyone be quiet. Seeing that it had achieved its effect, the Azure Dragon gestured for the spiritual beasts to quieten down again. It said in a deep voice, The price of starting a war is too high. We can't take this step unless it's absolutely necessary. However, according to the king's decree, even if the spiritual beast clan does not start a war with the shameless humans, we must at least control our own territory. The South Continent belongs to the spiritual beast clan. We will not allow the humans to come and go as they please. Lin Yi and the ghost were shocked. Judging from the Azure Dragon's tone, could it be that he wanted to expel all the humans in the South Continent's waters and even kill them all? If that was really the case, although it was not as serious as starting a full-scale war, it was definitely not a small matter. If the process was not handled properly, it could develop into an unmanageable situation. The two of them were secretly shocked, but the agitated, powerful spirit beasts did not have such concerns. Other than a few of them who were more cautious, most of them were warmongers and they could not wait for an all-out war. If the higher-ups wanted to exterminate the humans in the South Continent Sea, they would definitely support it with both hands and feet. Therefore, in accordance with the king's decree, Elder Vermilion Bird and I have discussed and decided that we will send castellans and administrative departments to all the main cities in the sea regions of the South Continent. They will be responsible for collecting taxes from the various sea regions of the South Continent. From now on, all human cultivators who come to the South Continent to live and travel must pay taxes to the Spirit Beast clan. The Azure Dragon took advantage of the situation and announced loudly, "Tax." Lin Yi and the ghost were stunned at the same time, and they could not help but have strange expressions on their faces. It turned out that the Vermilion Bird and the new Azure Dragon did not want to start a war, but wanted to use this excuse to amass a fortune. Among all the sea regions in the South Continent, the Cold Devil Sea region is the most prosperous and stable sea region, and it's located closer to Anlua Cultivation City. Therefore, Elder Vermilion Bird and I have discussed and decided that this sea region with the richest profits will be handed over to the Spirit Beast brothers here. The king needs you to maintain law and order, and he needs you to collect taxes on his behalf. Are you willing? The Azure Dragon tempted them. Yes. The group of spirit beasts immediately responded in unison. They danced in joy and jumped in excitement. The king is wise. The shameless humans should have paid tribute to the king long ago. We're willing to serve the king and we guarantee that we'll complete the task. Although the human sects were powerful in the South Continent Sea region alone, all the human cultivators were no match for the spirit beasts even if they gathered together. A few powerful spirit beasts would be enough to suppress all the human cultivators in the South Continent Sea region. There was no doubt about this. Therefore, as soon as the order was given, the fate of the human cultivators in the South Continent Sea region was sealed. Faced with a colossus like the spirit beasts, they had no power to resist at all. Anyone who disobeyed would be crushed into pieces. To the spirit beasts, this was a business that cost nothing at all. There was a naturally juicy piece of meat hanging in front of them, and as long as the higher-ups gave the order, they could swallow it at any time. Listening to the rising and falling voices, the Azure Dragon and the Vermilion Bird looked at each other and smiled. This was a plan that they had arranged a long time ago. Collecting taxes was only the first step in their plan. Judging from the reaction at the scene, this crucial first step had obviously succeeded. As I expected, the Vermilion Bird is an ambitious fellow who doesn't know how to behave. He has just taken control of the spirit beast's power, and he's already starting to amass wealth wantonly. This bastard is too greedy. If we let him do as he pleases, I'm afraid the spirit beasts will not be able to escape. Sigh. The ghost sighed helplessly. Lin Yi nodded in agreement. Collecting taxes from the human cultivators in the South Continent Sea region sounded reasonable and understandable. This was because the South Continent Sea region was attached to the South Island. In theory, it was indeed the territory of the spirit beast. They even had to pay rent to rent a house, let alone so many human cultivators living in the South Continent Sea region. However, the problem was that human cultivators had not just come to the South Continent Sea region in the past 1 or 2 years. Instead, they had been stationed here for thousands of years. Their understanding of the South Continent Sea region was even better than that of the spirit beasts. In terms of time span alone, it would not be an exaggeration to say that they were the masters of the South Continent Sea region. For thousands of years, although the human cultivators in the South Continent Sea region and the spirit beasts in the South Island's boundary were only a short distance apart, they had always lived in harmony. Now, this rule had been broken because of the Vermilion Bird's selfishness. Could the human cultivators in the South Continent Sea region be convinced? As the saying goes, every man for himself. For the sake of worldly possessions like the spiritual jades, many people would even lay their hands on their own brothers. No one would hand over the spiritual jades in their hands. Even if the human sex came over to collect taxes by force, it was impossible for the South Continent Sea region to not be in turmoil, let alone the spirit beasts who were on opposing sides. Once they suddenly started collecting taxes, it could be foreseen that a fierce battle would be unavoidable. Even if the human cultivators in the South Continent Sea region were no match for the spirit beasts, there would always be people who could not help but rise in revolt if they really had no way out. With the spirit beasts' overwhelming strength, it was more than enough to crush the human cultivators in the South Continent Sea region to death. However, it was unknown whether the vermilion bird and the azure dragon had thought that a single spark could start a prairie fire. Once this kind of thing started burning in the South Continent Sea region, it would be impossible to extinguish it in the South Continent Sea region. In the end, it was inevitable that the human cultivators from the other Heaven Stage Islands would be involved. Chapter 45-26. For example, if the Spirit Beast clan forced the Hong Chamber of Commerce's branch to pay taxes, would the headquarters of the Hong Chamber of Commerce not react at all? Even if the Hong Chamber of Commerce was not so hot-tempered as to start a war directly, what about the other major forces whose interests would be affected? There were ambitious people like the Vermilion Bird and the Azure Dragon among the Spirit Beast clan. Similarly, there were many such people among the human cultivators, perhaps even more than the Spirit Beast clan. Please be prepared. Perhaps they had been eyeing the Spirit Beast clan for a long time, but they had not been able to find a suitable excuse. Now that the Spirit Beast clan had taken the initiative to hand over their weakness, how could they let it go? If the human cultivators really started a war with the Spirit Beast clan, it would inevitably be a waste of manpower and resources. The powerful ones could make a fortune from the war, while the weaker ones could at least flee far away. In the end, the truly unlucky ones would always be the ordinary people who had not advanced to the heavenly Tao or built their foundation. The world was difficult, and the strong preyed on the weak. This was the eternal and unchanging law of nature. If one did not have enough strength to protect oneself, no matter what happened, the final outcome would always be extremely miserable. However, this had nothing to do with Lin Yi for the time being. Lin Yi had always been protective and would often see injustice, but he was never the kind of person who took responsibility for the world. To Lin Yi, as long as it didn't affect the people around him, it didn't matter even if the spirit beasts and human practitioners started a war. He wouldn't be so righteous as to stop this war. It would be fine if he was strong enough, but he didn't have that strength right now. There was no point in saying anything. Let's go. The ghostly thing sighed and suddenly said after a moment of silence. Not going to watch anymore? Lin Yi could not help but be slightly stunned. It was normal for him to stay out of this because he was an unrelated outsider after all. Not only did he have nothing to do with the Spirit Beast clan, but even the human cultivators might not be his original camp. He came from the secular world, and the cultivators on the heavenly island had never acknowledged people like him. However, the ghostly thing was different. This was the former Azure Dragon Elder of the Spirit Beast clan. Even if he could let go of the Spirit Beast clan, he definitely could not let go of it. Now, the Spirit Beast clan was about to be pushed into an abyss by the Vermilion Bird. How could he just turn around and leave so easily? I already know the Vermilion Bird's intentions. What's the point of staying here? Since it's useless anyway, why should I stay here and spoil my mood? The ghostly thing laughed bitterly and said, "Besides, their attention is on the stage now. This is the best time for you to escape unscathed. Otherwise, you'll be in danger when everyone leaves. Could it be that I've been discovered?" Lin Yi's heart suddenly tightened. This kind of thing was not a joke. In that case, the best course of action was to leave. He couldn't stay for a moment longer. Not necessarily, but have you forgotten where this place is? Even you human cultivators who claim to be civilized are constantly killing each other, let alone the spirit beast. The ghost laughed bitterly and continued, "Don't be fooled by the fact that so many spirit beasts can live in harmony now. That's because there are beings like the Vermilion Bird above them. However, once they leave the public sight, they will devour each other repeatedly. In their eyes, you're just a golden core stage snack. Any spirit beast could devour you for a meal." "Oh, that's true." Lin Yi shrunk his neck in fear. He was so worried that his identity as a human would be exposed that he almost forgot about this threat. Spirit beasts would never truly live in harmony with each other. Even if he was treated as a spirit beast, he would still be in danger. Taking advantage of the fact that all the spirit beasts were unable to extricate themselves from the Azure Dragon's incitement and were all cheering at the high stage, Lin Yi immediately began to retreat stealthily. If he was occasionally seen by a spirit beast next to him, he would stop and pretend to shout along with them. Furthermore, he was originally standing at a very outer position, so the entire retreat process was rather smooth. However, just as he was about to retreat into the dense forest and leave smoothly in the next moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. A cold voice suddenly exploded from the high stage. "Who's so bold as to leave without permission when I, the elder, am making an announcement?" As soon as the voice finished speaking, all the spirit beasts present focused their attention on the vermilion bird. Then they followed the vermilion bird's gaze and shifted to the top of Lin Yi's head. Suddenly becoming the center of attention, Lin Yi could not help but feel his scalp go numb. His back was instantly drenched in cold sweat. If this was a human public event, even if there were many experts, he would not feel so pressured. However, the problem was that this was the spiritual beast convention. Being stared at by so many powerful spirit beasts made him feel like a lamb that had mistakenly entered a wolf's den. At the very least, Lin Yi could still maintain his composure on the surface. If it was someone with an average mental fortitude, they would have been so frightened that they would have collapsed on the spot. Not only Lin Yi but even the ghost could not help but break into a cold sweat for him. At the same time he could not help but feel a little regretful. His decision to quickly escape before the end of the convention was not wrong. However, he had never considered that the vermilion bird was actually using its divine sense to monitor the entire venue. After all, even for a primordial soul grandmaster like the ghost, using its divine sense to monitor the entire venue was definitely not a small burden. He never thought that the vermilion bird would not hesitate to waste so much energy in order to completely control the spiritual beast convention. It was no wonder that Lin Yi had been detected by the vermilion bird's divine sense before he even arrived here. It turned out that this guy had been monitoring every corner of the venue. The vermilion bird shot a cold gaze at Lin Yi. He was just about to take over the Azure Dragon's words and appoint a governor of the Demon Lung City in front of everyone. However, he did not expect this brat to turn around and leave at this time. Wasn't it obvious that he was not taking a top-notch elder like him seriously? Under the watchful eyes of so many powerful spirit beasts, Lin Yi could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He suppressed the nervousness in his heart and carefully turned around saying, in reply to Elder Vermilion Bird, "This lowly one is only going to relieve himself. I did not leave the venue without permission. Please understand, Elder." In response to Lin Yi's quick-witted answer, the crowd of spirit beasts revealed a look of understanding. As the saying goes, humans have 3 urgent needs. Naturally, spirit beasts were no exception. Since he was going to relieve himself, he naturally had to find a secluded place. This was a logical answer. Although spirit beasts were not as particular as humans, and it was not a problem for them to relieve themselves in public under normal circumstances, it was clearly inappropriate for them to do so in this situation. Moreover, most of the spirit beasts present had transformed into their human forms. It was somewhat shameful for them to do such a thing in public. Like a book, the home of reading books. Unique website. Chapter 4527. However, even though the spirit beasts present did not care about Lin Yi's words, the vermilion bird, a top-notch elder, would not be fooled so easily. Today's spirit beast convention was directly related to the vermilion bird's grand ambitions, so it could not afford to make any mistakes. Even if there was only the slightest hidden danger, it had to be nipped in the bud. What's more, before this, it had already spoken to the higher-ups of all the big and small families in Enluo Cultivation City. It had strict requirements for the venue's discipline, and it clearly remembered that this golden core brat was already late. Now he wanted to leave early? This was simply outrageous. Convenient. The vermilion bird narrowed its long and narrow eyes and snorted in an unfriendly tone. "Humph, which clan does this spirit beast belong to?" Clan elders stepped forward. Similar to human cities, the spirit beast forces in a cultivation city were also based on clans, such as the Big Fire Lion clan and the Big Spider clan. Every spirit beast clan naturally had a clan leader, elders, and other higher-ups. For a top-notch elder like the vermilion bird, as long as it controlled the higher-ups of the clan, it could control all the spirit beast forces, or even the entire spirit beast clan. Because of the difference in their clans, under normal circumstances, it was obvious which spirit beast belonged to which clan. However, if a spirit beast transformed into a human, it would be difficult to identify its original form. This had nothing to do with strength. Unless they were familiar with each other, even the vermilion bird would not be able to identify it. As soon as the vermilion bird finished speaking, not a single spirit beast stepped forward to respond. Lin Yi was a human cultivator who had come to fish in troubled waters. It would be strange if a spirit beast stepped forward. Seeing that the atmosphere had fallen into an awkward stalemate, Lin Yi knew that something was going to happen if this went on, so he quickly replied, "Elder Vermilion Bird, I don't live in Enluo City. I just happened to pass by, so I came to join the convention." My hometown is actually Lufeng Forest. Lufeng Forest was the only place that Linny was relatively familiar with. Because it was an abandoned area, it was on the outskirts of the Spirit Beast clan. As the leader of the Spirit Beast clan, the Vermilion Bird would not care about a country bumpkin who came from such a place. Since there were so many Spirit Beasts present, there must not be any acquaintances from Lufeng Forest. What? Lufeng Forest? The Vermilion Bird raised her eyebrows upon hearing this, but then her tone became even more unfathomable. How is that possible? How did a mere gold core stage cultivator manage to travel such a long distance? What exactly do you do? At the same time, all the spirit beasts present looked at Lin Yi with suspicion. The South Island was different from the human society. In the human society, as long as one didn't make trouble, even if he was only in the gold core stage, he could go to many places. But it was different here. Every spirit beast had a deep-rooted sense of territory. Under normal circumstances, if a weak spirit beast dared to cross a powerful spirit beast's territory, it would usually end up being eaten. This was a matter of course among the spirit beasts, so nobody would interfere. Therefore, in the eyes of any spiritual beast, it was simply impossible for a golden core stage spiritual beast to traverse all the way from Lufeng Forest to here. Looking at the suspicious expressions of the spirit beasts, Lin Yi's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He subconsciously used the human's thinking just now, but he forgot that although many of the spirit beasts could transform into humans, they were fundamentally different from humans. I think he's a spy who was bribed by a human cultivator. Left and right, take him down. Azure Dragon, who was next to him, immediately ordered. Yes. The guards that were guarding the area shot up into the air. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but jump in fright when he felt the terrifying aura coming from the guards. The momentum of these spirit beast guards was even more majestic and vast than that of the giants in the mountain opening stage. The insufferably powerful evil cultivator giant elder sect of West Mountain couldn't even compare with these guards. This was simply incredible. It was even more ferocious and horrible than the mountain opening stage. What realm was this? At this moment, Lin Yi's heart was in turmoil. The mountain opening stage was already the highest realm he had ever seen, but he didn't expect it to be an eye-opener in the territory of the spirit beasts. A few random guards that jumped out were already stronger than the mountain opening stage, not to mention the high and mighty top-notch existences like the Vermilion Bird and Azure Dragon. Wasn't the spirit beast too ridiculously strong? It was only at this moment that Lin Yi finally realized that the spirit beasts had been able to compete with human cultivators for a long time. This was not without reason. It was no wonder that the Vermilion Bird was so ambitious to amass wealth wantonly. No matter who controlled such a frighteningly huge force, they would most likely be as confident as the Vermilion Bird or even more unscrupulous. As mentioned before, the strength of the spirit beasts was far above any human sect. In the past, Lin Yi more or less had a trace of prejudice against the spirit beasts. He always felt that without the strong deterrence of the former king of the spirit beasts had fallen apart day by day. But now it seemed that even though the overall strength of the spirit beasts was not as strong and invincible as before, it still couldn't be underestimated. If an all-out war really broke out, human cultivators would definitely pay a huge price. Even if they could laugh until the end, it would probably be a Pyrrhic victory. In an instant, a myriad of thoughts ran through his mind, but this was not the time for Lin Yi to be in a daze. With his strength, he couldn't even face the elder sect of West Mountain, let alone facing these terrifying spirit beasts that were superior to the elder sect of West Mountain. Lin Yi knew that this time he was probably really finished. Once he was caught, his identity as a human would inevitably be exposed in front of the various means of these powerful spirit beasts. When that time came, it was easy to imagine what would happen to him. Even death would probably be an extravagant hope. Once a person was unlucky, even drinking water would be difficult. Lin Yi felt that this was his current state. There was always a piece of bad luck lingering on top of his head. It was not easy to get rid of the elder sect of West Mountain, but in the blink of an eye he had encountered these even more ruthless existences. While Lin Yi was feeling helpless, the ghost was tangled and hesitating. In this kind of situation, it was impossible for Lin Yi to escape unscathed. The only way to have a chance was to stand up in front of everyone. As the former elder of the Azure Dragon clan, the ghost believed that it should have some influence in the Spirit Beast clan, especially in a public place like the Spirit Beast Convention. Even the Vermilion Bird might not dare to do anything to it. If it stood up for Lin Yi, the pressure would naturally shift from Lin Yi to it. Of course, the premise was that it had the strength to do so. But now, what if the Vermilion Bird didn't buy it? R1152. Chapter 45-28. Now that everything was under the control of the Vermilion Bird, it would not be a big deal to kill a ghost like him in public. Moreover, the new Azure Dragon had appeared. It would be strange if the Vermilion Bird would let the former Azure Dragon live. Perhaps once the ghost stood up, Lin Yi would die even faster. When had the ghost ever regretted it before? Even when it was reduced to this miserable state because of its death in the secular world, even when the Vermilion Bird took advantage of the situation and took the position of Azure Dragon Elder, it had never regretted it. However, now that it was related to Lin Yi, it could not help but feel a little remorseful. If it had not been for the fact that it wanted to know what had happened to the spirit beasts, it would not have continued to advance to the core hinterland of the tranquil area after successfully scaring off the West Mountain Elder. It should have immediately found an exit to escape from the dangerous South Island. In that case, Lin Yi would not have ended up in this near-death situation. Could be said that if Lin Yi died here today, it would be because of the ghost. Although the ghost had always been unruly and free, it was often very protective of its own people. In its eyes, Lin Yi was already one of its own, but now it had caused him to die. It would be strange if it did not blame itself and feel remorseful. Senior, life and death are decreed by fate. If it wasn't for you, I would have been captured by the West Mountain Elder and made into a puppet. Besides, I wanted to come to this place so you don't have to blame yourself. Lin Yi, of course, could guess what the ghost was thinking and immediately comforted it with a smile. Boy, you're really open-minded. The ghost could not help but look at Lin Yi again. For a moment it was a little nervous and lost, but now it had disappeared and it was as calm as usual. This boy was really a person who was born for big occasions. Influenced by Lin Yi, the ghost quickly regained its composure. It could be said that it had also accepted that it would fight to the death at most. It had not been defeated in the secular world and had been tenaciously holding on until now. Now it had returned to the territory of the spirit beasts. Could it admit defeat and admit defeat? Lin Yi and the ghostly thing were no longer nervous, but the fatal crisis was still right in front of them. It was true that they were unafraid of death, but it didn't mean that they wouldn't die just because they had this awareness. The terrifying coercion of several spirit beast guards fell on the top of Lin Yi's head at the same time. Before they did anything, the grass under Lin Yi's feet suddenly sank a lot. Everything visible within 3 meters was instantly squashed, and the grass and stones were crushed into dust that was hard to be seen by the naked eye. This was the terrifying coercion that was above the giants of the mountain opening period. Back at the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency, the Divine Nun of the East Sea had used her aura alone to kill the late Golden Core Chen Qitian. But now Lin Yi was facing the same danger as Chen Qitian, and the pressure was much stronger. After all, this was an existence that was above the giants of the mountain opening period, and it was even a few spirit beast guards attacking together. If it was any master of the Golden Core stage, even if it was an evil cultivator like Cheng Haonan who suppressed his strength, if he was in Lin Yi's current position he would definitely die. Even if he didn't die on the spot, he would at least be seriously injured. However, Lin Yi didn't say a word, and he forcefully resisted this inhuman powerful oppression. This kid is tough enough. The group of spirit beasts who originally disdained a small character like Lin Yi, praised him in their hearts. They knew the strength of the spiritual beast guards clearly. Even if it was them, it would be difficult for them to withstand it. They didn't expect that this kid with only the strength of the Golden Core stage could actually withstand it. However, the group of spirit beasts looking up to him wouldn't change Lin Yi's fate. What could he do even if he was tough? Those who angered Elder Vermilion Bird would still die in the end. Moreover, this kid's answer was indeed very suspicious, so it was reasonable to kill him. Seeing that the 2 top elders, Vermilion Bird and Azure Dragon, were indifferent, several spiritual beast guards suddenly understood that they would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. Although the possibility of this Golden Core stage kid being a human spy was slim, the matter announced today was of great importance. If the news was leaked in advance, it would easily cause trouble, so they had to guard against it. Since Vermilion Bird and Azure Dragon both meant this, the spiritual beast guards naturally wouldn't disobey their immediate superiors for Lin Yi who they didn't know. They immediately revealed a strong killing intent, and they wanted to obliterate Lin Yi. The shadow of death enveloped Lin Yi's whole body. His blood was instantly solidified and he couldn't move. In the face of such an enemy with Lin Yi's current strength, let alone resisting and escaping, he couldn't even move. When facing the West Mountain Elder he could still use the extreme butterfly microstep to fight, but now it was simply an extravagant hope. He could only wait for death. I'm not willing. No one would be willing to die here inexplicably, and Lin Yi was no exception. However, the disparity in strength between them was so great. What else could he do but wait for death? Seeing that he was about to die, A hoarse voice suddenly came from the high platform, causing several spiritual beast guards to stop their movements. Let him go. I think he seems to be a member of the Big Fire Lion clan. He does live in the Lufeng forest. Today is such a good day. It's not auspicious to kill your compatriots. Let's get back to business. Don't waste everyone's time on irrelevant trifles. The person who spoke was the spiritual beast king who hadn't spoken. As the new spiritual beast king, he was theoretically the absolute protagonist of the spiritual beast clan. However, from just now until now, this spiritual beast king could be said to have no sense of existence at all. The focus and the right to speak were in the hands of Vermilion Bird and Azure Dragon. He was like a puppet. However, it was such a puppet that suddenly spoke at this time and was ready to pardon Lin Yi. This was really beyond the expectations of all the spiritual beasts present. Vermilion Bird and Azure Dragon were stunned. Even Lin Yi and the ghostly thing were stunned. They did not know this new spirit beast king at all. In fact, they even suspected that he was a fake and did not possess the bloodline of the spirit beast king at all. He was merely a fake that the Vermilion Bird had found to deceive them. However, they did not think that such a suspicious fellow would suddenly open his mouth to help them. Just what kind of situation was this? Yes. Vermilion Bird was the first to react. An obscure haze flashed across her long and narrow phoenix eyes, but she appeared respectful on the surface. As the king commands, you can all leave. Chapter 45-29. Lin Yi let out a long sigh of relief and reached out to wipe the beads of sweat off his forehead. If the Vermilion Bird had stayed for a while longer, he would have been crushed into a pile of minced meat by the Vermilion Bird's coercion. This time he had truly escaped death from the gates of hell. Kit, hurry up and thank the king. Otherwise, based on your suspicious identity, you will certainly die today. The Vermilion Bird glared coldly at Lin Yi with an obvious hint of anger in its eyes. The Vermilion Bird was furious not because of Lin Yi, a nobody like him, but because of the fact that the spiritual beast king had dared to go against it in public. After all, this so-called new spiritual beast king was a puppet that the Vermilion Bird had single-handedly groomed. He must act according to the Vermilion Bird's will at all times and on all occasions. Previously, he had behaved himself, but today, he had suddenly interfered with the Vermilion Bird's orders. It could even be said that he had publicly slapped the Vermilion Bird in the face. Was he trying to rebel? However, what angered the Vermilion Bird even more was the fact that although it could order the new spiritual beast king around in private, it could not do so in public. Since the new spiritual beast king has been crowned, everyone in the spiritual beast clan, including the Vermilion Bird Elder, must bow down to the new spiritual beast king and must not show the slightest bit of disobedience. Even though the Vermilion Bird was holding the emperor in order to command the nobles, it must still be done on the surface. Everyone was well aware of the situation, but it could not be exposed in public. Otherwise, this so-called emperor would lose his legitimacy, and the so-called emperor in order to command the nobles would naturally be out of the question. Therefore, even though it was furious, the Vermilion Bird had no choice but to endure under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Not only did it have to endure, it also had to support the spiritual beast king more than any other spiritual beast. It was not allowed to hesitate at all. When the spiritual beast king speaks in public, the other spiritual beasts may have some room for doubt. However, only the Vermilion Bird must treat it as the king's order and carry it out to the letter. Otherwise it would become a laughing stock. After all, the Vermilion Bird had single-handedly supported its master. If it did not take it seriously, how could it expect anyone else to take it seriously? Of course, once the spiritual beast convention is over and the Vermilion Bird closes its doors, it does not matter how it plans to teach the spiritual beast king a lesson. It would all depend on the Vermilion Bird's mood. Thank you, my king. Lin Yi quickly bowed and cupped his fists. At the same time, he took the opportunity to take a good look at the noble being who was shrouded in the rainbow-colored bamboo hat. He was pondering the same question as all the spirit beasts present. Why did this guy suddenly speak up to help him out of this predicament? Others might not have noticed it, but the other party had intentionally mentioned the Great Fire Lion tribe. Could it be that he was referring to something else? Although Lin Yi wasn't a great flame lion, it was one of the only two species among all the spirit beasts that had a close relationship with him. If there wasn't any evidence, how could the other party be so sure that he was a member of the Great Flame Lion clan? Lin Yi was completely confused. However, it was obvious that no one would clear his doubts on such an occasion. The mysterious new spiritual beast king fell silent after he had finished speaking. No one knew what it was thinking, and because it was covered by the rainbow-colored bamboo hat, even its expression and eyes could not be seen. It gave people a feeling of mystery. It was mysterious. If this had been any other time and occasion, Lin would have wanted to find out more about the new spiritual beast king. Perhaps he would be able to gain some unexpected gains. However, that was no longer possible now. He could not stay in such a troublesome place for long. Before the vermilion bird and the other spirit beasts regretted their decision, he quickly turned around and left. He watched helplessly as Lin Yi's figure disappeared into the dense forest. On the other hand, the other spirit beasts did not react much, but the vermilion bird's face could not help but turn gloomier. It simply could not understand why the puppet king which it supported would suddenly interfere in this matter. No matter how it looked at it, this was simply an insignificant matter. To any of the spiritual beasts present, killing a mere gold core stage cultivator was not a big deal at all, not to mention the high and mighty king of spiritual beasts. For such an insignificant character, what was the point of the king of spiritual beasts specifically speaking out and even going against the azure dragon and himself in front of everyone? Ever since it was raised to the position, this king could be said to be tactful. It had always listened to the vermilion bird's words and basically never spoke. Even if it occasionally spoke, it would definitely follow the script that the vermilion bird had given in advance. Therefore, the vermilion bird had always been very satisfied with this. However, the vermilion bird also knew that no matter who was in the high and mighty position of the spiritual beast king, once it had tasted the taste of power, it would never be willing to be a puppet that it could manipulate. At a certain time, there would always be various kinds of disobedient attempts and actions. This was inevitable. The vermilion bird was already mentally prepared for this. However, in its opinion, even if the puppet king wanted to get rid of its control, it would definitely choose to speak out on some important matters. After all, only then would it have the opportunity to promote the authority of the spiritual beast king. But now this was an insignificant matter. Why should it interfere? Even if the vermilion bird had to make a concession in front of the public as the spiritual beast king, what benefits could it get? Perhaps only the gold core stage spirit beast that was released would be grateful to it, but this kind of small character was not even qualified to be cannon fodder. Even if it was roped in, what use would it have? The azure dragon turned its head and looked at the vermilion bird. It was also bewildered. Avoiding the eyes and ears of all the spirit beasts present, it immediately connected its divine sense to the vermilion bird. It pointed at the spiritual beast king and said, "What is this guy trying to do? Could it be that he wants to take advantage of this spiritual beast convention to make his presence known in front of everyone and let everyone think that he, the king, is caring for his people and wants to win people's hearts? Isn't he a little too naive? Benevolent policies may work on humans, but in the spiritual beast clan, which held strength in high esteem, it was not feasible at all. If one's strength was not enough, regardless of whether the spiritual beast king was benevolent or not, those powerful spirit beasts would have already bitten him and he would not even be able to keep his life." Chapter 45:30. The vermilion bird suddenly felt that the puppet king that it had found was not as simple as it thought. This fellow's schemes were much deeper than it had expected. Unspecified currency, however, even though it had seen through the other party's intentions, the vermilion bird could not disobey the order in public for such a small matter. After all, it was in public and the other party was the absolute ruler of the spiritual beast clan. The vermilion bird could not lose the bigger picture because of a small matter. As a matter of fact, if one were to think about it carefully, they would realize that the puppet king's move seemed meaningless and inexplicably useless, but it was actually a trick that had its own meaning. If the vermilion bird chose to tolerate it in public, it would give the other party room to take a yard after taking an inch. In other words, it would give the other party the capital to negotiate with the vermilion bird. In order to prevent the other party from meddling in the crucial issues in the future, the vermilion bird had to make a certain degree of concession. It had no other choice. If the vermilion bird chose to disobey the order in public, the problem would be even more serious. Even if it and the azure dragon joined forces to control most of the forces of the spiritual beast clan, one should not forget that there were still two other top-notch elders eyeing them covetously. They were both ambitious and powerful characters. They did not dare to act rashly now, but once they caught hold of the vermilion bird's weakness, they would definitely not hesitate to use the banner of purging the emperor. That would be a headache. Thinking of this, even the vermilion bird could not help but be secretly shocked and broke out in cold sweat. It was clearly just a seemingly meaningless impromptu move. In the end, it did not expect such a deep scheme to be hidden behind it. It was really a little scary. The vermilion bird could not help but take a deep look at the spiritual beast king under the colorful bamboo hat. It hoped that it was thinking too much. Otherwise, it was afraid that there would be endless troubles in the future. The vermilion bird and the azure dragon were secretly on guard, but the spiritual beast king was as calm as water. It did not have the slightest intention of interfering with the appointment of the governor of Demon Ling City. It just sat there quietly with its face mask facing the direction where Lin Yi had left. No one knew what it was thinking. After leaving the venue of the Spirit Beast Convention calmly, Lin Yi immediately went all out without any hesitation. He risked his life to use the extreme butterfly subtle steps that he had yet to master. His figure turned into a ghost that shuttled through the dense forest, quickly distancing himself from the large group of extremely terrifying spirit beasts. Even though he was pardoned by the spiritual beast king, Lin Yi knew that he did not have the chance to dawdle. His excuse of leaving was to find a place to relieve himself. Naturally, he could not drag it out for too long. If he did, the spiritual beast would definitely notice that something was wrong and he would not be able to escape. But even so, Lin Yi's actions were actually very risky, because the vermilion bird had been using its divine sense to monitor the entire scene. Once it sensed that Lin Yi was rapidly escaping, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fortunately, the vermilion bird was now wholeheartedly pondering how to deal with the king of spiritual beasts. For a short period of time, it wouldn't continue to monitor the entire area with its divine sense. Moreover, an insignificant character like Lin Yi wasn't within the scope of its attention. Thus, it wouldn't deliberately search for Lin Yi's position. Even if he ran away, it would only think that he was afraid and didn't dare to come back. This continued for a full incense stick of time. At least 100 miles away from the spiritual beast convention, Lin Yi's heart, which was suspended in the air, calmed down a little. He let out a long breath with lingering fear. This time he really escaped from death. It was purely a fluke. But even so, Lin Yi did not dare to stop completely. Instead, he used the super butterfly subtle steps to continue running. He didn't know whether the vermilion bird had locked onto him or not. He also didn't know how far the vermilion bird's divine sense could cover. To be on the safe side, of course, it was better to escape as far as possible. As for not continuing to use the super butterfly subtle steps, this was something that couldn't be helped. This kind of state of extreme stimulation was destined to pay a great price. If it continued for a little longer, a large number of cells in the body would immediately die of overwork. That was an act of self-harm. Even though Lin Yi had the ability to heal himself, he didn't dare to mess around like this. Good steel should be used where it mattered most. He could only use the super butterfly subtle steps when it was necessary. Normally, it was better to maintain the super butterfly subtle steps. Anyway, this speed was already very fast. While running away, Lin Yi exclaimed in his heart, "I didn't know that this new spiritual beast king is really a good person. Oh no, a good spiritual beast." When he was suppressed by the pressure of the spiritual beast guards just now, he didn't move at all, as if he wouldn't change his expression even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. In fact, how could that really be the case? Just now, his heart almost exploded from fear. If he had been a second late, he would have died without a burial place. It was really too fucking thrilling. That new spiritual beast king is a little strange. Could it be that you know him? At this moment, the ghost was also puzzled. This time, even he felt that he would definitely die. He didn't expect that he would survive the disaster, and in this way it was really puzzling. Pfft. Lin Yi almost choked. With a strange expression, he said, "Senior, even you, the former Green Dragon Elder, don't know him. I'm just a human cultivator who came from the secular world. How could I know the spiritual beast king?" That's true. The ghost also thought that it was quite impossible, but the doubt in its heart still lingered. But if it doesn't know him at all, what did it mean just now? And it said that he's from the Great Fire Lion clan in Lufeng Forest. Could it be pure guesswork? It doesn't make sense. In its position, there's no reason for it to come out and save you. That I don't know. Maybe it's really guesswork. I mentioned Lufeng Forest, and there really aren't many spiritual beasts in Lufeng Forest now. In the whole clan, there are probably only great fire lions and big spiders there. It's not completely impossible to guess. Lin Yi thought for a while, then said, "Besides, even if it knows me, it can't recognize me like this, right? I'm still wearing the thousand silk mask." It's true that you're wearing a mask, but you've only changed your appearance. Your body and voice haven't changed at all. You might be able to fool strangers, but it's impossible for you to fool people with your true intentions, the ghostly thing denied. That doesn't make sense. I've never had any interaction with this new spiritual beast king. It has never seen me before, and I've never seen it before. I don't even know what kind of spiritual beast it is. Lin Yi shook his head, then his eyes suddenly lit up. If we really have any interaction, it's more likely to be you, Senior. Could it have sensed your aura? Chapter 45-31. Then he realized that the king of spirit beasts seemed to help Lin Yi out of trouble, but in fact, it was also helping him out of trouble. In any case, it was more likely that the ghost thing had an intersection with the new king of spirit beasts. Maybe it had really sensed it. Plus or minus, what was more, at the spirit beast conference just now, the spirit beast's breath on Lin Yi was disguised by the ghost thing. Although ordinary spirit beasts were unlikely to see through this trick, it might be possible for the king of spirit beasts. Even if it was just a puppet king hired by Vermilion Bird to deceive people, it should have some skills. The new king of spirit beasts sensed the ghost thing's breath, and then suspected that Lin Yi was the ghost thing's man, or even the ghost thing itself, so it suddenly helped Lin Yi out of trouble. This was probably the most reasonable explanation. As for why the king of spirit beasts did this, it was the same as what Vermilion Bird and Azure Dragon were worried about. The new king of spirit beasts might not be willing to be a puppet manipulated by others. In any case, it was very lucky to escape successfully. After being scared, not only did Lin Yi not dare to stay in the South Island for a long time, but even the ghost thing, which had originally wanted to walk around, was forced to give up the idea. This time it was lucky that the king of spirit beasts helped it out of trouble, but if it had to do it again, it would really die without knowing how it died. Therefore the ghost thing did not dare to take it lightly. After escaping, it instructed Lin Yi to find a way to escape from the South Island, and Lin Yi obviously had no objection to it. It was true that the South Island was a natural treasure house for human practitioners. If there was a chance to adventure here, there should be a lot of unexpected gains, but the premise was that one must have the strength to do so. With Lin Yi's current strength, he could be regarded as a top master in the South Sea, but he was nothing in the South Island. If he did not have the consciousness of sacrificing himself to be the food of spirit beasts, it was better to think less about treasures of heaven and earth. The more he thought about it, the faster he would die. The more he thought about it, the faster he would die. There was only one thing on Lin Yi's mind now, and that was to escape from the South Island as soon as possible. However, he came in through the dark cold sea's turbulent whirlpool this time, so it was impossible for him to go back the way he came, because it was only a one-way passage. Even the West Mountain Elder Master couldn't go against the current, let alone Lin Yi. The ghost had pointed Lin Yi to another exit that was closer to the verdant arc waters. It was not a whirlpool but a teleportation array. However, if Lin Yi wanted to reach the exit teleportation array, he would have to cross at least 2 large cultivation city districts. One could imagine how dangerous it would be. Because of the Spirit Beast Convention, passing through the settlement area was not a big problem. After all, the slightly stronger spirit beasts had already been summoned by the Vermilion Bird. The remaining spirit beasts were only at the gold core stage or even weaker. Moreover, they were generally not aggressive. The only reason for these weak spirit beasts to exist here was to become the food of those powerful spirit beasts. Naturally, they could not pose any threat to Lin Yi. However, after leaving the settlement area, Lin Yi would be in trouble. Next, he would have to face the spirit beast. They were all powerful existences above the nascent soul stage. The spirit beast clan was a gathering of masters. In this area alone, there were many who were comparable to the masters of the profound ascending stage. Some dangerous places even had mountain opening stage giants. If Lin Yi dared to step into their sphere of influence, he would definitely die. Fortunately, with the ghost's constant guidance, he could always avoid those existences that he couldn't afford to provoke. Otherwise, if it was just Lin Yi alone, even if he had 100 lives, he would have to suffocate to death in this South Island. Not to mention him, even the West Mountain Elder Master, the evil cultivator giant. They had been tossing and turning in the South Island for more than a month. They had gone around the gates of hell several times before they finally stumbled and escaped from death. Switching back and forth between the Super Butterfly Microsteps and the Extreme Butterfly Microsteps, Lin Yi's whole person turned into a ghost, shuttling quickly in the vast jungle of the South Island, and it took him a whole month to do so. The South Island was vast and the forest was so big that people who had not experienced it personally could never imagine it. In this month, Lin Yi had been moving at high speed from beginning to end, except for the most basic rest time. Especially when he used the Extreme Butterfly Microsteps, his speed was so fast that it made people's hair stand on end. Even so, he could barely cross 2 areas. Of course, he couldn't keep walking in a straight line in the jungle. He had to avoid special terrain such as rivers, mountains, and swamps in advance. According to the ghost, any of these places had an owner. The spirit beasts that could occupy these places were far from what Lin Yi could provoke now. At the same time, Lin Yi also had to avoid the places covered by the miasma. Although he could avoid being eroded by the miasma with his true chi, the problem was that the miasma would greatly affect his perception. In a place like the South Island, once his perception was limited and he continued to wander around, he would die no matter how many lives he had. In addition, he naturally had to try his best to avoid the gathering places of those spirit beasts. If he was only discovered by 1 or 2 spirit beasts, as long as their strength was not too strong, Lin Yi could always escape with his speed. However, if he provoked a large group of spirit beasts, not to mention Lin Yi, even the West Mountain Elder Master couldn't fight his way out of the encirclement. Super fast speed, the ghost's guidance, in addition to the third crucial condition, Lin Yi could finally successfully escape from the South Island, and that was the spirit beast's aura disguised by the ghost. All spirit beasts were extremely sensitive to human cultivators' auras. In fact, they were even more sensitive than sharks in the sea when it came to the smell of blood. Even though Lin Yi was very good at hiding his aura, hiding was different from camouflage. There would always be an unnatural sense of abruptness. Human beings might not be able to detect it, but the extremely sensitive spirit beasts could always see through it. It was impossible for Lin Yi to cross the 2 areas without leaving any flaws. In this case, Lin Yi was basically like a light bulb in the dark in the forest of the South Island. It was impossible for him not to attract attention. Fortunately, the spirit beast's aura disguised by the ghost perfectly solved this flaw. Lin Yi would only be able to make it through the 2 zones if he had all 3 of them at the same time. He wouldn't be able to escape if he didn't have any of them, since he wasn't as strong as the West Mountain Elder. If it was really the last resort, the West Mountain Elder Master could use his strength to make up for it, but Lin Yi would only end up in one way, which was to wait for death. Therefore there was no room for error in him at all. One mistake would lead to death. Chapter 45-32. Fortunately, the worst-case scenario didn't happen. After a whole month of tension, Lin Yi finally made it to the exit transmission array. But even so, he was still in a mess and even injured. Crossing 2 whole areas, no matter how careful Lin Yi was, there were still a lot of powerful spirit beasts encountered on the way. Fortunately, most of them ignored Lin Yi. First, Lin Yi had a ghostly disguised spirit beast aura on his body. For those powerful spirit beasts, a human gold core stage master was a delicious dish, but a gold core stage spirit beast was only enough to fill the gap between their teeth. Second, the speed that Lin Yi showed was really extraordinary. Even if those powerful spirit beasts saw him, they were too lazy to chase. A spirit beast like Lin Yi was definitely the most unwelcome prey. A small character in the gold core stage was not even an appetizer in the eyes of those powerful spirit beasts. But he ran very fast. Not to mention whether they could catch up. Even if they could catch up, it would take a lot of effort. The consumption in the process alone could not be made up for even eating 10 Lin Yi. It was absolutely not worth the loss. So, although the aura on Lin Yi's body was weak, there were really not many spirit beasts that really attacked him. Even if he was occasionally unlucky, the other party often tried a little bit. When they saw that it was not easy to catch up, they simply did not chase. However, walking in the dark for a long time, there would always be times when you would see a ghost. In this month, although most of the time it was smooth, there were a few times when it was really dangerous. The degree of danger, even if it was not as dangerous as the pursuit of the West Mountain Old Sect, was definitely not much worse. Every time Lin Yi used all his trump cards and risked his life to barely escape. Being injured was still a small matter. To be able to smoothly reach the exit transmission array, and at the same time to not break his arms and legs, Lin Yi could be said to be blessed. In this month there was endless sadness and frustration. Lin Yi was so shocked that he lost a lot of weight. Looking back at the path he had taken, he felt like crying tears of bitterness. Back then, when Tang Sung and his disciple went to the West on a pilgrimage for Buddhist scriptures, they were probably no better than this, right? In theory, the physical strength of a cultivator at the gold core stage was already at a monstrous level. However, they could not withstand a whole month of running for their lives. Not only was it a huge test of endurance, but at the same time, they had to be constantly on guard against sneak attacks from spirit beasts. If it was an ordinary person, they would have long been driven crazy. Even a cultivator of a higher level would not be able to withstand it. However, not only had Lin Yi persevered, but he had also treated all of this as a rare opportunity to cultivate. Pressure was motivation. It was not easy to find so many powerful spiritual beasts to supervise one's cultivation. Of course, it wasn't realistic to directly break through, but once one's body and will reach the limit, they could become more pure and powerful. This was without a doubt. At the same time, Lin Yi had completely mastered the extreme butterfly subtle steps after a month of hard training. The corresponding super physical technique and extreme physical technique had also become more handy. This was at least equivalent to half a year of hard training. Not only that, now even Lin Yi's temperament had faintly changed compared to a month ago. Although he was still calm and restrained, his bones were more tenacious. However, his bones were even more tenacious and indomitable, like a pine tree deeply rooted in a boulder. On the surface, there didn't seem to be any difference, but his roots had already expanded from 100 feet to 200 feet, or even more. The deeper the root, the more stable the foundation, which meant that the foundation was more abundant. The gains he'd made this month were far more valuable than a breakthrough on the surface. He'd been forced to run for his life, but from a certain perspective he'd gained quite a lot this time. There was an empty space in front of him without any spirit beasts guarding it. There was a teleportation formation not far ahead, which was similar to the teleportation formation that he had seen in Lufeng Forest. This situation made Lin Yi feel relieved. If this teleportation formation was heavily guarded by the spirit beasts, it would really be fucked. Fortunately, the situation was much better than expected. While there was no one around, Lin Yi quickly walked into the teleportation formation. Unlike the teleportation formation in Lufeng Forest, that teleportation formation could be activated with a token. However, this teleportation formation obviously didn't have a token, and it required ready-made spirit jades. In principle, each activation of the teleportation formation required a large amount of heaven and earth's spirit. Although basically every teleportation formation was designed with a formation that could collect the surrounding heaven and earth spirit to maintain the normal operation of the teleportation formation, it could only ensure that the teleportation formation didn't break down. It was obviously unrealistic to use it to satisfy frequent teleportation. Therefore, every time before using the teleportation formation, high-quality spirit jades had to be added to the core of the teleportation formation. At the very least, it needed a few hundred, and at the very most, it needed thousands of spirit jades. This depended on how exquisite the teleportation formation was and how far it could be teleported. But this teleportation formation required a total of 3,600 spirit jades to be activated. Lin Yi couldn't help but feel lucky that he had the space in his jade pendant. If someone else saw this requirement, they would be dumbfounded. It wasn't that they couldn't afford this amount of spirit jades. The problem was, who would have so much time on their hands and run around with so many ready-made spirit jades? Even if they had brought them with them in the beginning, they would have definitely thrown them away when they were running for their lives. Now they could only watch helplessly. If they wanted to cry, they would have no tears. There were originally spirit jades in the core of the teleportation formation, but they had no spiritual chi. Obviously they had been used. Lin Yi moved these waste jades into the space in his jade pendant. At the same time he replaced them with 3,600 spirit jades and put them in. Then he quickly stood in the teleportation position and the teleportation began. Lin Yi had experienced the teleportation process more than once or twice. However, every time he experienced it, he always had an inexplicable feeling. It was like a talented primary school student facing obscure and difficult mathematics questions. Although he couldn't understand them at once, after seeing them many times, he would unconsciously understand them in his own way. Every time he could make a little progress. Maybe one day he would be able to understand all of them. The whole teleportation process was extremely short. After a blink of an eye, Lin Yi had already appeared in a new place. Naturally, under his feet was the teleportation formation. In front of him was still the symbolic dense forest of the South Island. However, the scene behind him was really a bit scary. It was a huge swamp. In a primitive place like the South Island, swamps were not strange. During the previous month's escape, Lin Yi had seen them many times. Even earlier, he had to rely on the swamp to get rid of the pursuit of the old master of West Mountain. However, it was the first time for Lin Yi to see such a terrifying swamp behind him. Chapter 45-33. The other swamps were uniformly black, but the swamp behind him was colorful. From a distance, it looked like a natural dye vat. The point was that this was not an ordinary dye vat, but a boiling dye vat that was bubbling with steam that could distort space. Smelling the strange smell that made people feel dizzy, Lin Yi could not help but frown. Before he was teleported, he thought that this place would be shrouded in miasma, but there was no miasma. Instead, it was a strange swamp. "Senior, what is this place?" Lin Yi covered his nose and asked curiously. There must be something wrong with this abnormal situation. He had been suffering from sequelae for the past month, so he was much more vigilant than before. His intuition told him that there must be something wrong with this swamp. "This is the 5-poison swamp," the ghost answered. "Poisonous?" Lin Yi was slightly stunned. It was normal for this swamp to be so poisonous. However, Lin Yi not only noticed this appearance but also a more critical feature. But the spiritual chi in this place seems to be very abundant. Hideous and ugly was his first impression of this 5-poison swamp. However, if he looked closely, he would find that the density of the spiritual chi in this place was simply outrageous. Although there were many places with abundant spiritual chi on Heaven Stage Island, it was extremely rare to see such a density. At least, Linny had never seen it in a natural environment. Almost every bubble that bubbled out of the swamp contained extremely rich spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Of course, it was not just spiritual chi of heaven and earth, but also some other poisonous gases. Otherwise, it would not live up to the name of the 5-poison swamp. Well, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth here is indeed abundant. Looking at the whole South Island, there are only a few places with a higher concentration of spiritual chi than here. If this place was not so dangerous, there would be a lot of spirit beasts coming here to freeload the spiritual chi. Maybe they would even fight to occupy this place and blood would flow like a river, the ghost said. This place is dangerous? Linny raised his eyebrows. Although the smell was indeed a little unpleasant, if it was just poison, it shouldn't be enough to make people flinch. Especially since many spirit beasts were talented and even had the innate immunity to poison, they wouldn't be afraid to come here just because of a little poison, right? Jia kid, don't underestimate this 5-poison swamp. Its poison isn't the kind that ordinary people know of. It's because this swamp naturally contains the power of the 5 elements. Basically, spirit beasts and human cultivators who don't get close to it will be attacked by it. The 5 elements kill each other and entering it means death. It doesn't matter if you're immune to poison, the ghostly thing explained. I see. Lin finally understood, but he didn't continue to pursue the matter. No matter how rare this 5-poison swamp was, it had nothing to do with him. Now that he had survived a disaster, what he wanted to do the most was to quickly return to the verdant Arc Sea. Then he turned around and went back to North Island. Through this dense forest you'll reach the verdant Arc Sea. As for how to get to the verdant Arc City, it's up to you, kid. The ghostly thing knew that Linny was eager to return, so it immediately pointed out with a smile. Okay. Linny was immediately overjoyed. Immediately, he stopped looking at the 5-poison swamp and performed the super butterfly microstep to pass through the dense forest in front of him. As expected, after a short while he saw the vast sea. Although it was hazy under the sea mist, Linny was in a good mood at this moment. But Linny was in a great mood right now. If it weren't for the fact that he was afraid of attracting the nearby spirit beasts, he would have yelled out loud to relieve the pressure. After all, the pressure in the past month was really great. Fortunately, he finally escaped. According to the ghostly thing, the verdant Arc Sea was in front of him, but after all, Linny was still standing on the cliff of the South Island. There was no way he could get a free ride. No ship dared to get so close to the South Island, not even the overlord of the South Continent's escort agency. Therefore, the only way for Linny to leave here was to go into the sea. Going into the sea was risky. If he was unlucky, he might encounter terrible sea beasts like the Ghost Ray. But compared to what Linny had experienced in the past month, this was nothing at all. Without any hesitation, after a little estimation of the direction, Lin-Yi directly wrapped his whole body with genuine chi and jumped into the vast sea. Although it was not realistic to swim directly back to Verdant Arc City, jumping into the sea was the first step to leave the South Island. Only after a certain distance could he have a chance to get a free ride. Others were scared to jump into the sea, but Lin-Yi was very calm. As long as he didn't encounter any difficult sea beasts, with his ability he could stay in the sea for a month. As long as he didn't make a mistake in the direction, he could swim back to Verdant Arc City even if he swam in such a long time. From the time he'd been hunted by the West Mountain Elder to the time he'd mistakenly entered the Soul Beast Conference. Lin Yi's luck had been so bad that he couldn't even get a sip of water to get stuck between his teeth. But now that it had been a month, he wasn't as unlucky anymore. After swimming about 20 miles away from the South Island, Lin Yi found a passenger ship, and the destination was Verdant Arc City. After paying 100 spirit jades, he finally got a free ride. Returning to the Verdant Arc Pier and looking at the familiar scene in front of him, Lin Yi couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He was really lucky to be able to come back alive this time. Now in retrospect, even Lin Yi himself felt a little strange. Being chased by the West Mountain sect, entering the Spirit Beast Convention by mistake, crossing the 2 major areas of the South Island, any one of which would have led to death, but Lin Yi managed to get through all of them. He didn't lose an arm or a leg. It was really sweet after suffering. Other than the fact that there were more people and the docks were busier than before, everything else in Velvet Arc City looked very normal. There weren't any obvious differences from before, and this was something that Lin Yi wasn't expecting. After all, as early as a month ago at the Spirit Beast Convention, Vermilion Bird had already publicly determined the strategy to levy taxes on the various cities in the South Continent Sea area, and even the selection of the city lord had been decided. He didn't expect that a month had passed and no action had been taken. But on second thought, at that time the settling district was responsible for the Devil Lung Sea area, and the Vermilion Bird appointed the city lord of Devil Lung City. Maybe the Devil Lung City had already taken action, but it hadn't affected the Verdant Arc Sea area yet. In any case, this had little to do with Lin Yi. This was a matter between the Spirit Beast clan and the South Continent Sea area. If there was a large-scale conflict, it was definitely not something that could be solved by one or two people. Not to mention Lin Yi, even the strength of the West Mountain sect was far from enough. Chapter 45-34. They had to be at least as powerful as the entire West Mountain evil sect in order to have the right to intervene in this matter. However, that was all they had. It was almost impossible for the ambitious Vermilion Bird to stop just like that. This kind of big event, which could easily affect the overall situation of the entire Heaven Stage Island, could only be handled by the big figures of the famous sects after the matter was blown up. With Lin Yi's current strength, he could barely protect himself. Of course, he couldn't get involved in this mess. It was the right thing to do to return to the North Island before it happened. Although everything was normal in the Wayark Sea area, Lin Yi didn't dare to act rashly. The training in the past month had made him much more vigilant. Unless he was sure that nothing would go wrong, he wouldn't appear in public in front of everyone. Even though Wayark City was far less dangerous than the South Island, Lin Yi still clearly remembered that West Mountain Old Sect clearly said that he would come to the Dragon Boat Escort Agency at the South Continent Escort Agency's conference. Before figuring out West Mountain Old Sect's movements, appearing rashly was tantamount to asking for trouble. Because of all the previous legendary deeds, Lin Yi could be regarded as a well-known celebrity in Wayark City. It was estimated that he would attract a large group of people if he stood in any corner. Fortunately, Lin Yi was now wearing the Thousand Silk Mask. In the eyes of ordinary people, he was just a vulgar person from the martial artist path. Naturally, he wouldn't attract attention. After entering the familiar Wayark City, Lin Yi didn't do anything for the whole day. He just found a restaurant, ate something and rested. At the same time, he pricked up his ears to listen to the discussions of other diners around him. This was also a kind of experience in Jianghu. If you wanted to know what had happened in a place recently, the best way was to sit in the local restaurant for a day. Basically, even the slightest movement of grass in the wind could be known clearly. As expected, almost all of the three most talked about things around him were directly or indirectly related to Lin Yi. One was the various legendary deeds of Lin Yi, and the second was the new hegemon of the South Continent's Equal Escort Agency. The third one was the evil cultivator giant, West Mountain Elder Sect, who was in charge of the Dragon Boat Escort Agency. The first two items were just for show, but the last one was extremely valuable to Lin Yi. It was fortunate that he didn't show his face to the public, otherwise once the news of his return got out, with the old sect's unrelenting attitude, they'd be the first to come after him. That'd be troublesome. Lin Yi waited in the restaurant until the sky turned dark before he left. Under the cover of the night, he made his way to the Equal Heaven Escort Agency. Initially, he wanted to enter the agency through the main entrance. However, when he saw a few vendors glancing at him from time to time, Lin Yi immediately gave up on the idea. Instead, he climbed over the wall in the backyard. This was not the night market in the secular world. After dark, there were basically no stalls on the street. After all, this place was chaotic during the day and it was even more chaotic at night. Those who were not brave would not even dare to stay on the street, let alone set up a stall. At this time, there were only two kinds of vendors who would still stick to their posts. One was that they were really in need of spiritual jades, and the other was that they had ulterior motives. The few people opposite the Equal Heaven Escort Agency were not dressed shabbily. They did not seem to be in dire straits, and it was obvious that they were not in need of spiritual jades. It was obvious that they were the latter. In the entire Velvet Arc City, there was only one force that would be so sneaky as to keep an eye on the Equal Heaven Escort Agency. That was the Dragon Boat Escort Agency. Lin Yi was 80% sure that these spies were placed here to keep an eye on him. Once he appeared, the West Mountain Elder Sect would be the first to receive news. He had stayed in the Equal Heaven Escort Agency for a long time. Lin Yi was very familiar with the internal structure of the Equal Heaven Escort Agency. Although it was the overlord of the escort agencies in the South Continent seas, the security of the Equal Heaven Escort Agency was much stronger than before. However, no matter how many people were on duty, they could not stop Lin Yi from sneaking in. After a month of intense training, the heavily guarded Heaven's Equal Escort Agency was practically defenseless to Lin Yi now. There wasn't even a shred of difficulty in the slightest. It was another day of socializing. Qi Wenhan rubbed his head as he staggered back to his room. He reeked of alcohol. He had no choice. Ever since he became the overlord of the South Continent's escort agency, there would be big customers coming to visit him every few days. As the young master of the escort agency, he naturally had to come out and entertain them. Drinking with them was something he couldn't refuse. I have to entertain customers again tomorrow. I have to accompany them all day long. Fuck, I used to be the young master of an escort agency, but now I've almost become a prostitute of the drunken flower brothel. Chi Wonhan sat on the edge of his bed in a daze. He smiled bitterly as he complained. In the past, he had dreamed of becoming the overlord of the escort agency. However, now that his dream had come true, he felt that it was no longer as easy as before. It looks like Brother Chi is very familiar with the drunken flower brothel. Come, have a cup of spirit tea to relieve your hangover. A figure had appeared at a table not far away from him. He smiled faintly at Chi Wonhan and poured a cup of tea for Chi Wonhan. At the same time, he poured a cup for himself and took a sip in satisfaction. He did not treat himself as an outsider at all. Sure, thanks a lot. Chi Wonhan subconsciously got up and walked toward the table. He only realized after walking halfway. His drunkenness instantly dissipated and turned into a cold sweat. As if facing a formidable enemy, he said warily, "Who's there?" Chi Wonhan immediately sobered up. He could not stop the lingering fear in his heart. He wanted to give himself 2 tight slaps. He did not even know that someone had entered his room. He must have drunk himself into a drunken stupor. Fortunately, the other party did not attack him immediately. Otherwise, even if he had 100 lives, his neck would have been sliced off. What? It's only been a month, and Brother Chi has already forgotten about me? That person turned around with a smile. It was none other than Lin Yi, who had snuck in silently. However, this was not his original appearance, and he was still wearing the thousand silk mask. Brother Ling? Chi Wonhan was immediately overjoyed when he heard this voice. However, looking at this completely unfamiliar face in front of him, he was suddenly stunned. Looking at his incredulous eyes, it was obvious that he had already guessed Lin Yi's identity. He just did not dare to be 100% sure. Brother Chi need not be suspicious. It is indeed me, Lin Yi. Lin Yi nodded with a smile. Ah, it really is you, Brother Ling? Only then did Chi Wonhan completely confirm Lin Yi's identity. Although his appearance had changed, his voice and figure had not changed. That was enough. It's been a month since we last met. Brother Chi, how have you been? Lin Yi nodded affirmatively. At the same time, he gave Chi Wonhan a look, indicating that he should not make too much noise. Chapter 45-38. How have you been? Chapter 45-35. Oh, I trust you've been well since we last met. Chi Wonhan looked at Lin Yi excitedly, unable to hide the ecstasy on his face. He suddenly hugged Lin Yi, and although he tried his best to keep his voice low, he could not help but exclaim, "I told you, Brother Ling, you're definitely fine. Ha, this is great, this is great." Looking at Chi Wonhan's incoherent and excited expression, Lin Yi could not help but feel moved. He first joined the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency to find a place to stay. Rather than saying that he got along well with Chi Wonhan, it would be more accurate to say that it was because of benefits. However, after experiencing so many trials and tribulations, Lin Yi knew that he had not only gained an ally, but also a brother who treated him with sincerity. This was the most precious thing he had gained from this trip to the southern state. Ah, I'm fine. I've made you worry. Lin Yi patted Chi Wonhan's shoulder and laughed. The two then sat opposite each other. Chi Wonhan was excited for a long time, and after a long time he finally calmed down. Looking at Lin Yi's current appearance, he could not help but ask curiously, "Brother Ling, how did you suddenly become like this?" "In order to deceive people, I deliberately wore a mask. I heard that the West Mountain Elder is now in the Dragon Boat Escort Agency?" Lin Yi said. "That's right. They've only been back for a few days. Although they've told everyone that Brother Ling has been buried on the South Island, they still haven't given up on their evil intentions. They've sent a lot of spies outside our escort agency, and I'm guessing that they're here for Brother Ling. It's a good thing that you're wearing a mask. These spies were very annoying. They basically monitored every movement of the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency inside and out. However, Chi Mingyuan and he did not dare to say anything about it. If the other party was only the Dragon Boat Escort Agency, these spies would have been caught and killed long ago. However, the other party's backer was the West Mountain Elder. Even though the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency's current status was like the sun in the sky, it still could not provoke the mountain opening period evil cultivator. If they really provoked the other party into action, there was really no way. The old monster of Shishan Mountain didn't make things difficult for the escort agency, did he? Lin Yi asked. There was nothing for him to worry about, but if the West Mountain Old Master took his anger out on the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency, that would be a real problem. Not yet, Qi Wenhan said confidently. He just sent someone to keep an eye on us. He didn't do anything drastic. I think he's worried about the status of our escort agency. Normally he wouldn't dare do anything to us. That's good. Lin Yi nodded. His reputation as the overlord of the South Continent Escort Agency was not for nothing. Even if the other party was a giant evil cultivator at the opening of the mountain, he would have to think twice before making a move. After all, this influence was not small. If he was not careful, he might attract the attack of the righteous path. As the two of them were talking, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from outside the room. Lin Yi and Qi Wenhan looked at each other and kept quiet at the same time. After all, this was a matter of life and death. The news of Lin Yi's return must not be leaked, even if he was wearing the thousand silk mask. He had to make sure that no one else noticed. The footsteps suddenly stopped at the door of the room. Then a familiar voice sounded, "Wenhan, you're not asleep yet, are you?" "It's my father." Qi Wenhan looked at Lin Yi and asked, "Brother Qi, do you want to see him?" "Of course. I can see the others, but how can I not see Chief Escort Qi?" Lin Yi smiled slightly. His whereabouts needed to be kept a secret from 99% of the people, but he could not leave without even seeing Qi Mingyuan. If that was the case, there would be no need for him to make a trip back to the escort agency. "Okay, I'll call him in." Qi Wenhan nodded excitedly and hurriedly went to open the door. He led Qi Mingyuan in. "Wenhan, I'm going to discuss the alliance with Zhao Shanning tomorrow, so I'll leave the family to you. Make arrangements for the representatives of the Chamber of Commerce. They're all rare customers." Qi Mingyuan was halfway through his sentence when his expression suddenly changed. Only then did he realize that there was a stranger in the room that he had never seen before. Qi Mingyuan couldn't help but stare at Qi Wenhan reproachfully. "Why didn't you say so earlier that there was an outsider in the room?" What he had just said was confidential and related to the entire South Continent Escort Agency alliance. If it was leaked in advance, it was very likely that there would be unexpected twists and turns, or even a premature death. "Father, this isn't an outsider." Qi Wenhan shrugged and didn't explain further. "Not an outsider?" Qi Mingyuan couldn't help but be stunned. He carefully looked up and down and felt that this person was vaguely familiar. However, he was sure that he had never seen this face before. As the chief escort of the Equal of Heaven Escort Agency, his eyesight was far superior to that of ordinary people. He could only tentatively ask, "I wonder if you..." "Chief Escort, long time no see." Lin Yi smiled slightly. "You are." Hearing this familiar voice, Qi Mingyuan was instantly stunned. He looked at Qi Wenhan beside him in disbelief. It wasn't until he saw Qi Wenhan nod in affirmation that he finally said with surprise and joy, "Young Hero Ling?" "That's right, it's me. I've troubled you all this time, Chief Escort." Lin Yi nodded with a smile. "You're too kind. It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. Young Hero Ling, it's a joyous occasion for you to be able to return safely." Even Qi Mingyuan, who had always been mature and steady, couldn't hide his excitement at this moment like Qi Wenhan. At the same time, he said with some embarrassment, "The Equal of Heaven Escort Agency's success today is all thanks to you, Young Hero Ling. In comparison, we couldn't help it all. We feel ashamed to see you." "You're too kind, Chief Escort. I'll always remember everything the agency has done for me. There's no need to say anything unnecessary. We're on the same side after all." Lin Yi smiled as he glanced at Qi Wenhan beside him. His relationship with Qi Mingyuan could still be considered as a business-like alliance. However, as long as Qi Wenhan was around, he could always maintain his trust. At the end of the day, it was because of Qi Wenhan that Lin Yi was so close to the Equal of Heaven Escort Agency. Compared to the Equal of Heaven Escort Agency, he valued Qi Wenhan more. Birds of a feather flocked together. After all, both of them were passionate people. Young Hero Ling is right. We're on the same side, so I won't waste any more words with Young Hero Ling. Qi Mingyuan nodded repeatedly in agreement, and then said seriously, "Young Hero Ling's safe return is a great thing for our entire Equal of Heaven Escort Agency. However, the West Mountain Sect Master is currently at the Dragon Boat Escort Agency, so it's best that the news doesn't leak out. It's best that we avoid conflict for now." "You're right, Chief Escort. I was thinking the same thing. To tell you the truth, I've come back this time to bid farewell to the two of you," Lin Yi said. "Farewell?" The Qi father and son were both shocked. Qi Wenhan hurriedly asked, "Brother Ling, could it be that you're leaving the southern lands?" Chapter 45-39, Farewell. Chapter 45-36. Yes, I came to South Continent this time to hunt down Wu Baoliang, the evil cultivator. Now that the task has been completed and I've been out for more than half a year, it's time to return to the North Island, Linny explained. Speaking of which, his experience in the past half a year in the South Continent could be said to be wonderful. Regardless of what he should or should not have experienced, Linny went through all of them. His realm of strength skyrocketed from the early stage of the Gold Core realm to the present peak of the middle stage of the Gold Core realm. He caused a lot of life and death grudges, and at the same time he made a friend like Qi Wenhan. Now it could be said that he had completed his mission and could retreat unscathed. That's true. Now Wei Arc City is guarded by the old devil of West Mountain sect. It's really dangerous for you, Brother Ling. You can take shelter when you go back to the North Island. Qi Mingyuan pondered for a moment and nodded. Brother Ling, are you sure you can report back empty-handed? Qi Wenhan was a little worried. Normally, for this kind of wanted mission you have to at least bring back a head, right? Only with a head could report back. This was an unwritten rule in many sect missions. After all, there was no proof. If Lin Yi went back empty-handed and said that he killed Wu Baoliang, what if people didn't believe him? Qi Mingyuan couldn't help but frown when he heard this. Although Wu Baoliang was killed by Lin Yi, his head was not cut off. That's easy to say. If I killed Wu Baoliang in private, it's really hard to explain. But this time he was killed in public in the arena of the South Continent's escort agency grand event, and everyone knows that I killed him. After I go back, let them investigate a little and the truth will come to light. Lin Yi waved his hand indifferently. Now, with his status in the three major pavilions of the North Island, he was a person who was recognized by the Pavilion Master of Towering Pavilion, Shanghai Tianhua, in public, and the Pavilion Master of Blue Cloud Pavilion, Yu Xinjiang, also looked up to him. Unless they had eaten the heart of a bear or the heart of a leopard, who would dare to make things difficult for Lin Yi in this kind of matter? That would be for the best. Qi Mingyuan and Qi Wenhan both nodded. It's not convenient for me to make a public appearance this time, and I can't bid farewell to all of you in public. I'll have to trouble Chief Escort and Brother Qi to apologize on my behalf after I leave, Lin Yi requested. Well said, well said. Now that the situation is special, everyone can understand. Qi Mingyuan agreed. By the way, there's one more thing I'd like to trouble Brother Qi with. There are too many people at the Hong Chamber of Commerce. It's not convenient for me to bid farewell to Manager Chai, so I'd like to write a letter for Brother Qi to deliver on my behalf, Lin Yi said. No problem. It just so happens that I've invited shopkeeper Chai to accompany me for tomorrow's meal. It's no trouble at all. Leave it to me. Qi Wenhan patted his chest and nodded as he prepared a brush, ink and paper for Lin Yi. Lin Yi immediately took the pen and paper and started writing. There weren't any unnecessary pleasantries, just a few words of advice and comfort. It was enough to let honest Chai know that he and Hong Zhong were always paying attention to him. After writing in one breath, Lin Yi asked Qi Wenhan to put away the letter. He was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something. He immediately said to Qi Mingyuan and Qi Wenhan, "This time at the South Island, I accidentally heard a piece of news. If nothing goes wrong, it will affect the situation of the entire South Continent. I think you need to be mentally prepared." Young Hero Ling, please speak. It was rare to see Lin Yi so serious. Qi Mingyuan and Qi Wenhan's expressions instantly turned solemn. They secretly wondered what kind of news could affect the situation of the entire South Continent. According to the internal news of the Spirit Beast clan, they're already preparing to levy taxes on all human cultivators in the South Continent. As for when exactly it will start, it's still unknown. But it should happen sooner or later. So you better quickly discuss a strategy to avoid becoming cannon fodder, Lin Yi warned. This news was too shocking. Lin Yi didn't want to reveal it. However, he couldn't just stand by the side and watch the Heavens Equal Escort Agency. Even if he couldn't be of much help, he could at least warn them. What? The Spirit Beast clan is going to levy taxes? Qi Mingyuan and Qi Wenhan were instantly shocked. Their faces were full of shock, and they couldn't help but reveal a terrified expression. How could this be? There hasn't been such a precedent in the past thousands of years. There really hasn't been such a precedent in the past. However, the Spirit Beast clan's authority had just undergone a huge change not long ago. This proposal to levy taxes was brought up by the person who was in power at the Spirit Beast gathering. It can't be as simple as drawing a pie in the sky. They must be serious, Lin Yi explained. This news. It's too shocking. Qi Mingyuan and Qi Wenhan slumped into their spacious armchairs at the same time. It took them a long time to digest the shock and panic brought about by Lin Yi's news. In reality, if Lin Yi hadn't said this, they would never have believed that the Spirit Beast clan had the idea to levy taxes. Were they trying to provoke a war between humans and beasts? It was true that the native human cultivators of the South Continent Sea would never be able to fight against the insufferably powerful Spirit Beast clan head-on. However, this didn't stop them from asking for help from the human sects on the other Heaven Stage Islands. Due to the abundance of real estate in the South Continent Sea, especially as it was close to the South Island, which was a primeval land blessed by nature, almost every famous sect on the Heaven Stage Islands had set up a stronghold here. If the Spirit Beast clan really touched their interests and incurred the wrath of the masses, no matter how many powerful Spirit Beast experts they had, they wouldn't be able to gain the upper hand. Just the sum of the human forces that had suffered losses was enough to make the Spirit Beast clan suffer. Based on the difference in strength between the two sides, it was hard to say who would emerge victorious on the day of the war. Suddenly, Qi Mingyuan rose to his feet and bowed deeply to Lin Yi. He nodded in gratitude and said, "Young hero Ling, you've saved our lives. If it weren't for your reminder, the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency might have been the first unlucky souls to be targeted. On behalf of the entire agency, I thank you for saving our lives." This wasn't an alarmist statement. Unlike before, the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency was now the flag-bearer of escort agencies in the South Continent Sea. Their business was expanding at an extremely fast pace. Almost every day, new sea territories would be added to the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency's business territory. In just over a month, the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency's escort ships frequently appeared in all the well-known sea territories of the South Continent. In this way, if the Spirit Beast clan's experts were to make a move, no matter which sea territory was the first to levy taxes, the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency would always be among the first to be taxed. If the Spirit Beast clan was not mentally prepared and acted rashly, the consequences would be unimaginable. After all, the Spirit Beast clan was not as cautious as the West Mountain Elders sect. Before they acted, they would weigh the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency's weight. In their eyes, the so-called overlord of the escort agencies of the South Continent was nothing more than dog's fart. If one dared to disobey them in the slightest, the Spirit Beast clan would kill their entire family without a second thought. They could also make an example out of them, killing two birds with one stone. Chapter 4540, Shocking News. Chapter 4537. Regardless of how things developed in the future, it was foreseeable that a large number of people would die when the Spiritual Beast clan began to collect taxes. After all, using blood to pave the way was the Spiritual Beast clan's style of doing things. The Heaven's Equal Escort Agency was originally on the list, but with Lin Yi's reminder, as long as they knew what was good for them and made preparations beforehand, they would still have a chance of survival. Since we're all on the same side, is there a need to be so polite? Lin Yi hurriedly helped Qi Mingyuan up. He purposely said this so that the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency could pass the tax without any problems, not so that everyone would be grateful. Father, Brother Ling, should we quickly leak this information so that the others can be prepared? Otherwise many people will die. Qi Wenhan still had a nervous expression on his face. Lin Yi glanced at Qi Mingyuan and did not say anything. He was only responsible for passing the information to the two of them as well as Honest Chai. As for the lives of the others, it did not matter much to him. More importantly, if this information were to spread, it would not necessarily be a good thing. No, unless the Spiritual Beast clan really starts to move. Otherwise, if we leak this information from our mouths, we will definitely become the target of everyone. The Spiritual Beast clan will look for us first, and that is a price we cannot afford to pay. Qi Mingyuan shook his head decisively. All right. Although Qi Wenhan was hot-blooded, he was not a brainless person. After thinking through the pros and cons, he did not dwell on this matter anymore. After all, no matter what it was, it could not be more important than the lives of his own Heaven's Equal Escort Agency. Wenhan, remember this, young swordsman Ling's information must be kept strictly confidential. Not even the slightest bit of it can be leaked out, even to our own people. I will make secret arrangements for what to do next. You just have to act as if this matter never happened, understand? Qi Mingyuan was still a little worried as he reminded Wenhan. This matter was very important. This matter had to be prepared early. More importantly, it had to be kept strictly confidential. If even the slightest bit of information was leaked, it would be a disaster for the Equal of Heaven Escort Agency. Of course, Qi Mingyuan was fine with it. What he was afraid of was that his son would do something stupid for the sake of his so-called loyalty. The consequences would be unimaginable. Father, don't worry. I know what's important. I won't joke around with the lives of so many people in our escort agency. Qi Wenhan nodded in a low voice. However, he would not be careless when it came to such an important matter. Otherwise, he would not be qualified to take over the Equal of Heaven escort agency. Since that's the case, I'll take my leave, Lin Yi said upon seeing this. He had said his goodbyes and warned them. Staying at the Equal of Heaven escort agency was unnecessary. Furthermore, there were so many spies from the Dragon Boat escort agency outside. To him, this place had become a troublesome place. It was not as safe as the outside world. Qi Mingyuan and Qi Wenhan looked at each other. Both of them wanted Lin Yi to stay for a few more days. They wanted to take this opportunity to properly thank this great hero, and then send him off in style. However, their current conditions did not allow it. Doing something unnecessary would only ruin things, so they did not dare to make him stay. Now that the situation is special, we don't dare to keep you. We're on the same side, so let's not be so formal. However, young hero Ling, you must remember that you will always be a part of the Equal of Heaven escort agency. If there's anything you need, as long as you give us a word, whether it's a mountain of swords or a wok of boiling oil, we'll do anything for you. Qi Mingyuan said solemnly. That's right. The escort agency's current foundation was built by you, brother Ling. There's nothing much to say about us brothers. We'll share blessings and misfortunes together. If you have to shoulder everything alone, that's not very loyal, Qi Wenhan said seriously. Don't worry. If there's a need, I won't stand on ceremony with you. Lin Yi smiled and nodded. He could not help but feel a surge of warmth in his heart. The Heaven's Equal escort agency's current strength was naturally nothing compared to the 5 great islands of the Heaven rank. However, it was still one of the overlords of the South Continent's seas, especially now that its strength had skyrocketed. If it could smoothly survive the upcoming calamity, it definitely wouldn't be looked down upon in the future. This was a force that couldn't be underestimated, and it might come in handy in the future. After bidding farewell to Qi Mingyuan and Qi Wenhan, Lin Yi immediately climbed over the wall and escaped under the cover of the night. He avoided the many spies of the Dragon Boat escort agency and found a remote inn to stay. However, he did not stay in the inn for long. In less than 6 hours, he left the inn when the sky outside began to brighten. He immediately went straight to the Crescent Pier. Of course, it was impossible to return to the North Island by sea. Not to mention the fact that there was no direct route to the North Island. Even if there was, it would probably take at least half a year at sea. Lin Yi did not have that much free time. Therefore, there was only one way to return to the North Island, and that was to ride a flying spirit beast. Coincidentally, Huang Xiaotao's large spirit bird was being kept here. When the Morning Star Academy came to Crescent City to select disciples, Huang Xiaotao could have taken the spirit bird with her. After all, it was a loyal companion that she had relied on for many years. However, in order to make things easier for Lin Yi, she eventually left it behind. Still wearing the Thousand Silk mask, Lin Yi did not attract any special attention during the entire process of receiving the spirit bird. Only the servant who received him looked at him in surprise. This was because in the previous records, the owner of the spirit bird was a woman with the surname Huang, and it was said that she had a close relationship with the famous Ling Yi. However, the person in front of him was a crude country bumpkin, completely different from the norm. However, despite the doubts in his heart, the servant did not ask too many questions. For a small character like him with low strength to survive in the waters of the South Continent, he had to keep his mouth shut. Otherwise, with the atmosphere of killing people on the streets, it was easy for trouble to come from a loose tongue. Anyway, this bumpkin had a special number plate on him, and he had paid enough fees for the period of time. The servant quickly led Lin Yi to the side of the spirit bird. Spirit beasts were extremely intelligent. Although this spirit bird was not the one that Lin Yi had tamed, it was still very enthusiastic and excited to see Lin Yi again after such a long time. Of course, it knew that Lin Yi was its male owner. Moreover, before Huang Xiaotao left, she had secretly come to see it and told it to listen to Lin Yi's instructions. Chapter 45-38. I'm sorry to have wronged you these days. I'll reward you well when I go back. Lin Yi stroked the spirit bird's neck happily. The nursing station wouldn't embezzle the spirit beast's food, but that was all. Spirit beasts, like humans, needed companionship and communication. After returning to the North Island, Lin Yi had to spend more time on this spirit bird. Otherwise, how could he repay Huang Xiaotao's kindness? The spirit bird responded clearly, bending its head and rubbing against Lin Yi intimately. It seemed that it was very satisfied with its male master. Lin Yi smiled slightly and then jumped onto the spirit bird's back. After a loud cry, the spirit bird spread its wings and flapped them slightly. Immediately, it rose quickly and steadily into the air. It was true that the spirit bird was a flying spirit beast made for human cultivators. Feeling the whistling wind in his ears and looking at the rising red sun in the distance, Lin Yi was in a good mood. After being out for so long, he was finally going back. The spirit bird was very intelligent. It could clearly remember any route it flew over once. Therefore this time Lin Yi didn't even need to point the way. The spirit bird could find the way back to the North Island by itself, and it was more accurate and reliable than Lin Yi. Therefore he only needed to sit on the back of the spirit bird and practice. Lin Yi stretched comfortably on the back of the spirit bird. When he was about to sit down and practice, the jade pendant suddenly sounded a warning. Even the spirit bird seemed to sense some danger and became very panicked. Lin Yi's heart suddenly tightened. He quickly looked around vigilantly. What's going on? Why Ling Yi Jr., you really didn't die? A cloud of black fog appeared behind him out of thin air. At the same time, it was accompanied by the West Mountain Patriarch's sneer and exclamation with some disbelief. Even I was covered in dust and almost died in that damn place. With your insignificant strength, you were able to escape. How lucky are you? Looking at the West Mountain Patriarch who was gradually becoming visible in the black fog, Lin Yi was so shocked that his heart skipped a beat. His expression changed. The reason why he had been so cautious on his return this time, even going to the Equal Heaven Escort Agency in the middle of the night without showing his face, was to guard against this West Mountain Old Sect Master. Who would have thought that he would still end up like this? How did this guy know about him? However, Lin Yi quickly understood. Not only did the Dragon Boat Escort Agency have spies around the Equal of Heaven Escort Agency, but they also had spies at the docks. Perhaps even the manservants at the Spirit Beast Nursing Station were their people. Lin Yi's actions could not be said to be careless, but there was a hurdle that he could not bypass. He had to retrieve the spirit bird that Huang Xiaotao had placed here. This was the only flaw, and it was also a fatal flaw. Once he took Huang Xiaotao's spirit bird, it would be useless even if he changed his appearance. People could easily guess his identity just by looking at him riding on the spirit bird. The West Mountain Old Sect Master received the news. Naturally, he would rush over immediately like now. He was too careless. Lin Yi secretly regretted it, but he really had no choice. Even if it was to avoid the West Mountain Old Sect Master, he couldn't just give up Huang Xiaotao's spirit bird, right? If it wasn't for someone informing me, I wouldn't have been able to recognize you if you had changed into such a vulgar appearance. However, looking at your current performance, you're undoubtedly Ling Yi. This is really the will of the heavens helping me. Jia. The West Mountain Old Sect Master sneered complacently. He now hated Lin Yi to the core. This was not only related to the death of his two disciples, Wu Baoliang and Cheng Haonen, but also not just to refine the trump card puppet. It was also for his own face. The last time he chased after Lin Yi under the watchful eyes of the public, he did not expect to be defeated. Lin Yi could neither kill him nor catch him. Instead, he was embarrassed in the South Island. How could he, a dignified evil cultivator tycoon of the opening period, endure this? As a tycoon of evil cultivators, to be honest, West Mountain Old Sect Master did not care much about his disciples being killed. Anyway, he had always regarded human life as grass. If a disciple died, he could take another disciple. It was no big deal. But at his level, he could never lose his face no matter what the occasion was. Otherwise, he would not only be laughed at, but it would also greatly affect his deterrent power. If a tycoon of evil cultivators could not scare people and control the situation, what was the point of showing up? The sudden appearance of West Mountain Old Sect Master made Lin Yi, who was in a good mood, feel as if a bucket of ice water was poured on his head. But fortunately his nerves were tough. After seeing West Mountain Old Sect Master, although he was inevitably stunned, he quickly reacted and hurriedly drove the spirit bird to escape. The flying speed of the spirit bird was extremely fast. It was first class among all flying spirit beasts. In terms of absolute speed, it was at least comparable to Lin Yi's extreme butterfly microsteps on the ground. Although West Mountain Old Sect Master seemed to be able to fly, compared with real flying spirit beasts, he could only be regarded as floating at most. His speed in the air was certainly not comparable with the spirit bird. It was a pity that West Mountain Old Sect Master didn't need to be very fast to chase people. As long as his divine awareness locked on Lin Yi's position like last time, he could directly catch up with him in an instant. This kind of amazing skill couldn't be gotten rid of by speed alone. One of the key reasons why he could escape last time was that Lin Yi was covered with swamp mud, which successfully isolated him from the West Mountain Old Sect Master's divine awareness. That was why he could escape with the help of the ghost. Otherwise, no matter how fast he was, No matter how hard he tried to use the extreme butterfly microsteps, it would be useless. During the month in the South Island, Lin Yi collected some swamp mud with the same effect in the space of the jade pendant. But now he was in a hurry, and it was impossible for West Mountain Old Sect Master to give him the chance to apply swamp mud on his body. Besides, it was useless to apply swamp mud on himself. West Mountain Old Sect Master only needed to lock on his spirit bird. What was worse was that today happened to be a good day. Originally, the sea fog could more or less obstruct the West Mountain Old Sect Master's divine awareness. But now it was a rare clear sky. Even if there was no divine awareness, he could see Lin Yi with his eyes. Don't be afraid. Run in the direction of the 5 poisons swamp. The ghost's voice sounded in his mind at the right time. Okay. Lin Yi immediately nodded decisively. It seemed that he could only use the same trick again. He escaped to the South Island like last time and scared the old devil away. Looking at all the surrounding places, perhaps only those spirit beasts in the South Island could make West Mountain Old Sect Master flinch. Chapter 45-39. With a sneer, the West Mountain Elder's signature black mist appeared above Lin Yi's head like a shadow, but this time he wouldn't use the soul hook hand. A horrifying bone claw reached out from the black mist. It wasn't a human, but it wasn't a beast. It looked like it was made out of human and beast bones, and the killing intent it exuded was something Lin Yi had never seen before in his life. Bang! With a horrifying whistling sound, the bone claw instantly streaked across the sky like a bolt of lightning. With lightning speed, it went straight for Lin Yi's head, vowing to crush him with one claw. Before the bone claw arrived, the terrifying killing intent it exuded was already too much for Lin Yi to bear. The spirit bird he was sitting on could not even move its wings as it fell straight down. Explode. Fortunately, Lin Yi was already prepared for this. At the critical moment, he hurriedly condensed a super bomb in his hand. It just happened to meet the ferocious bone claw above his head. Boom. A loud noise suddenly resounded through the entire Wei Arc Sea. Tsunami suddenly rose and the weather changed. Everyone in Wei Arc City showed a look of horror at the same time. Those people in Devil Ling City were already familiar with this destructive sound, but it was the first time they experienced it. At the edge of the air wave, the spirit bird rushed out with Lin Yi, desperately flapping its wings to escape. At the moment at the center of the explosion, although the bone claw was caught off guard and suffered a fierce blow, it only paused for a moment. It was not damaged at all. Jia, with this little strength you want to plot against me? What a fantasy. West Mountain Old Master sneered as he retracted the bone claw. Lin Yi's super bomb was enough to kill a high-level nascent soul stage master. Even if a profound ascending stage master was caught off guard, he would still have a long way to go if he wanted to deal with West Mountain Old Master. Listening to the laughter of West Mountain Old Master behind him, Lin Yi's heart could not help but tremble. Although the time he condensed this time was very short, the super bomb was after all his last trump card. Even the violent Fire Thousand Bursts fist did not have such power. But even so, there was nothing they could do to the West Mountain Old Master. Lin Yi's timing just now could not be said to be bad, but his strongest killing move still could not hurt his opponent at all. He only barely interrupted his opponent's attack and that was all. The disparity between the two of them was really despairing and speechless. Hurry up and run. If that crooked path catches up to you before we reach the 5 poison swamp, you're dead for sure. The ghostly thing urged in his mind. Needless to say, Lin Yi shook his head with a bitter smile. He would run to the South Island desperately even if the ghost didn't urge him. Besides, this time was much more dangerous than last time. Last time, the West Mountain Elder Master wanted to refine him into a trump card puppet and didn't dare to hurt his body easily. But this time he didn't have such scruples. He used a killing move from the get-go. The super bomb could barely block it once, but it definitely couldn't block it a second time. However, knowing that the other party could use their divine sense to lock onto them and follow them like a shadow, how was it possible to rely on the speed of the spirit bird to get rid of the other party? Don't worry, as long as you can get rid of that crooked path with absolute speed, you don't have to worry about his sudden arrival. He can't use his divine sense to lock onto you anymore. The ghostly thing suddenly laughed. But I didn't use the swamp mud? Lin Yi was stunned. I'm here, you don't need to use the swamp mud. The ghostly thing said angrily. Although the West Mountain Old Master was arrogant, if he was at his peak, he was just a good-for-nothing in front of the former Azure Dragon. In front of the former Azure Dragon he was nothing more than a piece of trash. Even though he had fallen to such a miserable state, it was still a piece of cake for him to stop the other party's divine sense from locking onto him. Lin Yi just remembered that the ghostly thing was a primordial spirit grandmaster. In terms of the use of divine sense, he was at least 10 streets ahead of the West Mountain Old Master. But then he smiled bitterly and said, "If you knew this, why didn't you make a move last time? I thought I was dead for sure several times. Last time this guy didn't directly use a killing move. Why would I make a move rashly?" The ghostly thing curled its lips disapprovingly and said, "Boy, you have to remember, every time I make a move, there will be an increased risk of being seen through by others. Once people know that I'm on you, then the two of us will really not have a good life anymore." "I'll remember." Lin Yi nodded in a deep voice and immediately did not say anything more. He urged the spirit bird to fly quickly to the 5-poison swamp. At the same time, the West Mountain Old Master, who was shrouded in the black mist, laughed grimly. He habitually wanted to descend on the top of Lin Yi's head, but after a while he found that he didn't even move a fart at all. He was still suspended in the original position. The West Mountain Old Master frowned and subconsciously wanted to redetermine the position of Lin Yi, but then his face suddenly changed. Lin Yi had actually disappeared from his divine sense. Not only that, even the spirit bird had disappeared with him. Wasn't this the same as seeing a ghost? In such good weather, not to mention within a radius of 5 miles, even a blade of grass and a tree within a radius of 100 miles could not escape the West Mountain Old Master's divine sense. But for some reason, the breath of Lin Yi and the spirit bird had indeed disappeared. This strange and evil feeling seemed to have been erased out of thin air by some kind of exquisite method. Such a method was something that even the West Mountain Old Sect Master had to admit was absolutely impossible to achieve. It was simply incredible. "Why Ling Chen, don't think that you can escape like this. Today I will kill you." The West Mountain Old Master suddenly flew into a rage, but he quickly calmed down. His eyes focused and he looked into the distance. Then, the black mist suddenly shot out a powerful stream of vital energy, and his whole body shot out like an arrow toward the direction in which Lin Yi had escaped. After all, he was a great evil cultivator of the mountain opening period. If the West Mountain Old Master really burst out with speed, it would be no small matter. Especially now that he was consuming vital energy without caring about the cost, his flying speed was even faster than the spirit bird. Seeing the black dot behind him getting closer and closer, Lin Yi, who had just breathed a sigh of relief, was once again faced with a great enemy. He had already overestimated the strength of the West Mountain Old Master, but he didn't expect the other party to be able to catch up with him. He flew even faster than the spirit bird. Was this guy even human? Faster, faster. At this time, Lin Yi pinned all his hopes of survival on the spirit bird. Now that the ghost thing had made it impossible for the other party to follow him like a shadow, if he still couldn't escape, then he could only say that this was his fate. Chapter 45-40. Senior, are we going to enter the forest of the South Island from the previous transmitting formation? Or are we going to fly there directly? Lin Yi asked quickly. Chapter It took some time to prepare to start the transmitting formation, and the Elder of West Mountain was likely to catch up with them. However, if they flew there directly, they would be easily targeted by nearby spirit beasts. No matter what choice they made, they had to take the risk in order to survive. That transmitting formation is a one-way transmitting formation. You can only go out but not in, the ghost answered. What? Damn it. How can I escape to the South Island? Senior, you're kidding me? I'm going to die. Lin Yi was shocked. This was the only way to get rid of the Elder of West Mountain in his eyes. How could it be a one-way transmitting formation? As for the other option of flying directly into the forest of the South Island, it was not feasible at all in his opinion. First, it was impossible to avoid those extremely dangerous spirit beasts. Second, even if there was a way to avoid them, they could not get rid of the Elder of West Mountain, who was faster than them. Wrong. Who told you that we flew here to enter the South Island? Do you think the South Island is your backyard, and you can enter whenever you want? Have you forgotten the pain you suffered before? The ghost smiled calmly and curled its lips. But what should I do if I don't enter the South Island? Are you going to scare the old monster away like last time? Lin Yi's eyes lit up, but then he denied it. No, this kind of thing can't be done again. The Elder of West Mountain is not a fool. How can he be fooled twice in a row? Of course, although he is a crooked person, he is not a retarded child. How can he be fooled twice in such a short time? If even the second in command is this kind of person, the West Mountain crooked sect would have been wiped out long ago. The ghost said. Retarded child. Lin Yi could not help complaining in his heart. It seemed that this trip to the secular world was not in vain. Not only did it end up in such a miserable situation, but it also learned modern vocabulary, The reason why I let you escape here is not to let you escape to the South Island, nor to bluff to scare away this crooked Taoist. But there's something here that can save your life. I'm sure this monster of West Mountain can't do anything about it. Seeing the elder of West Mountain getting closer and closer, the ghost was confident and did not panic at all. Even West Mountain Old Master can't do anything about it? Could it be that your friend is here? Lin Yi's spirit was suddenly refreshed. If it was before, he might not believe that there was a spirit beast that could stop a giant evil cultivator at the mountain opening period, but after seeing the scene at the spirit beast convention last time, he had already seen the powerful foundation of the spirit beast clan. With the level of this ghost, if it really found a friend, it should not be a problem to deal with the West Mountain Elder. No, I don't have many friends. Even if I did, they are not in the South Island now. The ghostly thing's reply caused Lin Yi's heart to sink, and the next sentence shocked Lin Yi even more. If you want to escape the pursuit of that crooked path, you must enter the 5 poison swamp. What? Senior, didn't you say that the 5 poison swamps' 5 elements kill each other? No matter who enters, they will die without a doubt? Lin Yi said in shock. That's right. That's why you have to use all of your true chi to protect yourself and this spirit bird as much as possible. You just have to fly all the way down. The ghostly thing pointed out. That works too? Won't I die without a doubt? Lin Yi couldn't help but be surprised and suspicious. When talking about the 5 poison swamp before, even the ghostly thing had a lingering fear in its tone, and vowed that even the old master of West Mountain was helpless. But now it asked him to jump down with the spirit bird. Wasn't it courting death? If he had known that he would die anyway, he might as well stay and fight with the old master of West Mountain. Why did he deliberately escape here and choose such a strange grave for himself? It was really superfluous. It was better to be buried in the sea, at least it would be cleaner. You can rest assured about this. If it were someone else, they would die without a doubt, but you, boy, probably won't die. The ghostly thing laughed. Senior, don't joke. If this 5 poison swamp can make a giant evil cultivator at the opening period helpless, how can I have the ability to jump down and not die? Lin Yi said with a wry smile. He had always been very confident, but he would never be overconfident. This kind of thing was unrealistic no matter how he thought about it. If you die, I will inevitably be unlucky. Do you think I will joke about this kind of thing? Although the ghostly thing didn't have a physical form, its tone showed what was called curling its lips. When the Heaven Stage Island was opened, you didn't even die under the pressure of the 5 elements attack. What's more, you are now at the peak of the middle stage of Gold Core Realm. Your strength is no longer what it used to be. How can you die in this trivial 5 poison swamp? Yes. Lin Yi's eyes suddenly lit up. The horror of the 5 poison swamp was the killing of the 5 elements. The 5 elements of heaven and earth circulated endlessly. Even the strongest master couldn't bear it, but he was different. He had the attribute of the 5 elements. Why would he be afraid of the 5 elements attack? Seeing that the old master of West Mountain was already in front of him, the ferocious bone claw in the black fog appeared again, and the dense evil chi, which was almost substantial, was overwhelming. Lin Yi couldn't help but hesitate a little. He quickly followed the ghostly thing's instructions and used his genuine chi to protect himself and the spirit bird. Without saying anything, he rushed into the 5 poison swamp. Gulp, gulp, gulp. Watching Lin Yi and the spirit bird sink into the 5 poison swamp in an instant, leaving only a series of terrible bubbles, the old master of West Mountain was dumbfounded. He had been chasing too fast and too fiercely all the way. He almost didn't have time to stop and rushed into the swamp. Fortunately, at the critical moment, he used all his genuine chi to barely stop his body. However, the old master of West Mountain was lucky to not fall into the 5 poison swamp. The ferocious bone claw that he had condensed did not stop in time. It was almost close to Lin Yi's back and the claw went in. An ear-piercing sound instantly tore through the sky and broke the silence in an area of a few hundred kilometers. At the same time, the 5-colored mud that was soaked in the bone claw suddenly exploded, and the great power contained within it actually caused the entire world to pale in comparison. The bone claw, which had not been damaged in the face of Lin Yi's super bomb before, just after coming into contact with the mud, broke into pieces like broken rock weathering. Then it was swallowed by the 5 poison swamp below, not even leaving a trace of bone residue. The old master of West Mountain suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. This was a sign that he had suffered a serious backlash. The ferocious bone claw was a killing weapon that he had spent countless efforts to condense. It was absolutely indestructible, and its strength was no less than any divine weapon. Lin Yi's super bomb was a good proof. R1152. Chapter 45-41. This was one of the trump cards of the West Mountain sect's evil cultivators. However, before this extremely ugly 5-poison swamp, it collapsed upon contact and was completely unable to withstand a single blow. Such a horrifying scene, even the West Mountain Old Master couldn't help but feel his scalp go numb. His originally strange face suddenly became pale without any color, and his heart was extremely frightened. Novel, this is the legendary 5-poison swamp. The West Mountain Elder hurriedly flew into the air with a lingering fear in his heart, and only stopped after retreating for a few miles. He was afraid that he would follow in the footsteps of the Bone Claw, and be swallowed by this ugly swamp without leaving a trace. Because very few human cultivators came to this place, there were not many people in the South Continent Sea who knew about the 5-poison swamp. However, the West Mountain Old Master was obviously a master who knew his stuff. Even if he didn't recognize it at first glance, if he still couldn't react after suffering such a big loss, then he would really be unworthy of his title as a big evil cultivator. After all, masters at the level of the West Mountain Old Master were often people who cherished their lives. They could be unfamiliar with any place or environment, but they must be familiar with those things that could pose a fatal threat to them. Just like the 5-poison swamp in front of them. Cultivators kept saying that they could go against the heavens and change their fate, but in fact, the higher the level, the more they were in awe of the power of heaven and earth. Because the stronger they were, the more they knew how small they were, and the more they knew the vastness and terror of heaven and earth. Fighting against the power of heaven and earth with the power of one person was a realm that many people dreamed of. Unfortunately, this would always be a beautiful fantasy. In fact, such a possibility would never exist. Any place that showed the power of heaven and earth was an absolutely dangerous and forbidden place for cultivators. No matter how strong one was, whether it was the mysterious ascending stage, the mountain opening stage, or even stronger, it was useless. If one wanted to go against the heavens in these places, there would always be one end, and that was death. No matter from which point of view, the 5-poison swamp in front of them completely met the definition of a dangerous place. Not to mention that the West Mountain Old Master had accidentally been cheated until his face was bleeding. Even if he had successfully stopped the Bone Claw just now, he would absolutely not dare to go near the 5-poison swamp. Why, Sinister Jr., before you die, you actually want to drag this sect down with you. Truly vicious to the extreme. The West Mountain Elder finally managed to heave a sigh of relief from his internal injuries. He was so angry that he stomped his feet and cursed. In his opinion, Lin Yi must have known that he was going to die, so he wanted to drag him down with him. At this moment, the West Mountain Elder's heart was filled with shock and fear. He sighed in his heart. Fortunately, he was careful enough and stopped in time. That was why he was lucky enough to escape. Otherwise, if he had really rushed in with Lin Yi without hesitation, it would have been useless no matter how strong he was. Even his indestructible bone claws could not withstand the 5 elements' attack, let alone his own flesh and blood body. At that time, he would definitely die together with this little bastard. Moreover, his body would be smashed into pieces and his soul would scatter. He would be deader than dead. A few miles away, the West Mountain Elder looked at the 5-poison swamp in front of him with a changing expression. He knew that this time Lin Yi would not be able to come out alive. After all, this was different from the last time. Although the South Island forest was also extremely dangerous, if one was extremely lucky, there would be a chance of survival in the end. However, once one fell into the 5-poison swamp in front of him, death was not a matter of probability, but a matter of certainty. There could not be any accidents unless the world had gone mad. Bah! Death cannot wipe out all his crimes. He deserves to die without a corpse. The West Mountain Elder spat at the place where Lin Yi fell. Although he did not kill Lin Yi with his own hands, he died anyway. This time, his goal was finally achieved and he did not end up with a dirty face like last time. The only thing that made the West Mountain Elder feel a little regretful was that Lin Yi did not even leave a bone residue, let alone a complete corpse. It was rare to encounter a good material that might be used to refine a trump card puppet, but he missed it. It would be a lie to say that it was not a pity. It could only be said that it was God's will. Although this place was very remote, it was the territory of the South Island after all. After the last bloody lesson, the old master of West Mountain did not dare to stay here for a long time, for fear of attracting the attention of some powerful spirit beasts. After cursing, he immediately turned around and left. The West Mountain Elder would never have thought that Lin Yi, who he thought must have died without a corpse, not only did he not die under the 5 elements attack of the swamp, but also had no injuries on his body. Not only that, but even the spirit bird was the same. His whole body was tightly protected with genuine qi. Since entering the 5-poison swamp, Lin Yi and the spirit bird had been falling rapidly. This process lasted for a long time, and it felt like the bottom could not be seen. Although this process was long and boring, it was not easy at all. The extremely strong 5 elements killing intent was hovering in all directions. Even though Lin Yi was wrapped in his genuine qi, he could clearly feel it. Thinking of the scene where the West Mountain Elder's bone claw was easily strangled by the 5 elements killing intent, the horror of the scene in front of him was really chilling. If it were other people, including the West Mountain Elder, who was an evil cultivator at the opening period, they would have already turned into a pile of powder in Lin Yi's current position. However, Lin Yi was surprised to find that although these terrible 5 elements killing intent had been hovering around from beginning to end, they did not mean to attack him at all. This feeling was that the surrounding 5 elements killing intent seemed to be immune to the genuine qi around him and the spirit bird. Such a strange situation. Lin Yi thought about it and understood. It was probably because of the 5 elements attribute that his genuine qi naturally carried the 5 elements attribute. Maybe he was mistaken by the 5 elements killing intent in the 5 poison swamp as the same kind. This was the only possible explanation. After all, the strength difference was more than 1,000 times. If he was not mistaken as the same kind, with the strength of Lin Yi's genuine qi, it was tantamount to a fool's dream to block the attack of these 5 elements killing intent. As he sank deeper and deeper, Lin Yi clearly felt that the 5 elements killing intent in all directions was getting heavier and heavier. The quantity was not as heterogeneous as at the beginning, but the strength was not the same as before. Logically speaking, the 5 elements killing intent should be the same as genuine qi, invisible and formless. However, the 5 elements murderous qi in front of him had already become a tangible existence. Each of them was like a rapidly swimming 5-colored flood dragon. Half of them were illusory while the other half were real. The terrifying pressure that they emitted was even more terrifying than the pressure that he had experienced in the Spiritual Beast Convention. R1152. Chapter 45-42. What is this? Is this the murderous aura of the 5 elements or some kind of spirit beast? This time even Lin Yi was somewhat stunned. From the secular world to the Heaven Stage Island, he believed that he had seen a lot of things, but he never knew that a kind of natural existence similar to the spiritual qi of heaven and earth could be so similar to a spiritual creature. Legend has it that when any kind of natural force is strong to a certain extent, it can give birth to a spiritual nature, and then become a unique life form. Therefore, it is not wrong to say that they are spirit beasts, but they are only like spirit beasts. They have not been able to transform into real spirit beasts. The ghostly thing explained in a deliberately calm tone, but at the same time, there was also an inexplicable feeling of shock. Although he was the former Azure Dragon Elder of the Spirit Beast clan, it was his first time entering the 5 Poison Swamp, especially in such a deep place. Naturally, it was also his first time seeing such a powerful murderous aura of the 5 elements. Too amazing. Lin Yi couldn't help but be dumbfounded. He hadn't felt anything before, but now that he had seen it? No. Wrong? After seeing these flood dragon-like murderous auras of the 5 elements, he suddenly felt that this was not a place that could be casually entered, including human cultivators and spirit beasts, no matter how strong they were. The power of any one of the 5 elements' murderous auras here was at least comparable to that of a spirit beast guard, or even stronger. Even a heaven-defying existence might be able to withstand 1 or 2 of these murderous auras, but what about hundreds or thousands of them? There were more than tens of thousands of the 5 elements' murderous auras here. How could he resist them? The reason that Lin Yi could not be attacked here was purely because of his unique 5 elements attribute, which deceived these flood dragons formed from the 5 elements' murderous auras, causing them to mistakenly think that he was one of their kind, so that he could barely escape the calamity. But looking at the whole world, how many people were born with the 5 elements attribute? Other than Lin Yi himself, there wouldn't be a second person like him. Boy, you don't need to be too shocked. With your growth speed, I believe that you will reach their level in a few years. No, it should be said that you can reach their level with just a single wisp of your true qi. 5 elements and 7 attributes. With your aptitude, you are destined to have a bright future. There was a hint of excitement in the ghostly thing's voice. As the former Azure Dragon, there was basically nothing in this world that could make him lose his composure. However, Lin Yi's talent was truly unprecedented, especially his astonishing performance of getting stronger and stronger against strong opponents. Even the ghostly thing could not help but be dumbfounded and overwhelmed with emotions when he thought about it. In time, he had no doubt that Lin Yi would grow to an unprecedented level. He could summon clouds with a flip of his hand and rain with a flip of his hand. At that time, nothing would be able to stop him. The king of spiritual beasts had always been an unsurpassable pinnacle in the ghostly creature's mind. However, after spending so much time with Lin Yi, this notion had quietly collapsed. With Lin Yi's heaven-defying talent and luck, the ghostly creature believed that one day, he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the invincible king of spiritual beasts, or even surpass it. What? Any wisp of true chi can reach their level? Lin Yi did not think as much as the ghostly creature, but when he heard this, he was completely shocked. Just thinking about it made his blood boil to the point that he could not control himself. They are the 5 elements killing aura, and yours is the 5 elements true chi. In essence, they are actually the same. As long as you are strong enough, nothing is impossible. The ghostly creature paused for a moment, then immediately smiled and said, "Of course, the current you is still too weak. All your true chi combined is not even comparable to a strand of their hair. Don't think too much about it." Hearing this, Lin Yi looked at the half-real and half-illusory flood dragons, and could not help but curse in his heart. Did these things have hair? He did not know how long it had been. He only knew that as he continued to sink, Lin Yi suddenly felt that his surroundings were empty. This feeling did not feel like he was falling through the swamp at all. Instead, it felt like he was falling from the sky, and the speed of his descent suddenly increased by a large margin. Then, with a muffled bang, his feet actually landed on solid ground. Fortunately, Lin Yi had been using true chi to cover himself and the spirit bird. Otherwise, he would have been caught off guard and would have been injured. Fortunately, it seems that the ancient records about the 5 poison swamp are true. Boy, you can withdraw your true chi now. The ghostly creature said. That's it. Lin Yi could not help but feel a little surprised. At the same time, he raised his head and looked around. This was an extremely empty underground space, and about 100 feet above his head, there was a mottled, colorful scene. In addition to the swamp mud everywhere, he could clearly see the solid 5 elements murderous aura constantly hovering above. However, what made Lin Yi feel strange was that whether it was the swamp mud or the murderous aura of the 5 elements, they seemed to be blocked by an invisible layer of cover. This scene made Lin Yi unconsciously think of the large aquariums in the secular world, and it was quite unreal and dreamy. It's fine. According to the ancient records I read before, this should be the source space of the 5 poison swamp. Not only is it absolutely safe, but there are also unexpected benefits. As the ghostly creature explained, it tried to use its divine sense to scan the surroundings. Unexpected benefits? Lin Yi was slightly stunned when he heard this. Without waiting for the ghostly creature to give him a hint, he immediately reacted. The density of the spiritual chi in this place was simply unprecedented. In fact, as early as the last time he passed through the 5 poison swamp, Lin Yi already knew that the spiritual chi in this place was dense, but he did not pay much attention to it at that time. After all, the spiritual chi he saw at that time was only much denser than other places on the Heaven Stage Island. Compared to the space in the Jade Pendant that Lin Yi had always relied on, it was still a lot worse. But this time was different. The density of the spiritual chi in the space below was more than 100 times denser than above. Lin Yi even found that the spiritual chi here could actually cover his space in the Jade Pendant. It was incredible that there was such a unique treasure land in the world. If he had not experienced it himself, Lin Yi would not even dare to believe that there was such a space under the dangerous and ferocious 5 poison swamp, a holy land that all cultivators and spirit beasts dreamed of. This was the first time the spirit bird had felt such dense spiritual chi, and it immediately cried out in excitement. It happily flew around Lin Yi and began to play, without the slightest trace of its previous exhaustion. Seeing this, Lin Yi wanted to stop it. Although this place was mystical, it was still an unknown place. Who knew what strange things might be entrenched here? After all, there was a flood dragon formed from the killing intent of the 5 elements above his head. According to the ghostly creature, this was the source space of the 5 poison swamp, so there might be some terrifying existence guarding it. Chapter 45-46. Unexpected Benefits. Chapter 45-43. The more blessed a place was, the more dangerous it was. This was an unchanging truth. It was just like searching for treasures in primitive places. Once he relaxed, he would inevitably pay a heavy price. Lin Yi always remembered this law of survival. It was never a bad thing to be careful. The spirit bird's frolicking might attract something it couldn't resist, so it was better to let it be a little more patient. It's okay, let it play by itself. As long as it doesn't fly far, there shouldn't be a problem. I've used my divine sense to scan the surrounding 100 miles and didn't find any signs of living beings. The ghost thing interrupted. For spirit birds, frolicking is cultivation. This is a rare opportunity for it. Okay then. Lin Yi nodded. Since the ghost thing said so, there shouldn't be a problem. He continued to look around and asked, "Senior, how big is it down here?" Why does it feel like it's much bigger than the 5-poison swamp above? Since the 5-element killing aura was all colorful, it was a natural light source. Although it wasn't as bright as the ground, the visibility wasn't bad. With Lin Yi's eyesight, it wasn't hindered at all. But with one look, it was endless and he couldn't see the end of it. It should be, but I'm not too sure about the specific situation. The ancient books only said that there was such a source space, but it didn't say the specific situation. The ghost thing wasn't sure about this, but one thing was for sure. At the very least, its divine sense was far from reaching the end. Compared to the 5-poison swamp above, it was obviously many times bigger. Oh, speaking of which, did you specifically go to ancient books and documents? Is it related to this 5-poison swamp? Linny couldn't help but ask curiously. The ghost thing had never been here before. Its understanding of the 5-poison swamp obviously came from ancient books. Under normal circumstances, it wasn't strange to occasionally glance at it in ancient books. But with such a detailed understanding, it must have specially looked it up. Yes. I've spent several years investigating this 5-poison swamp, and I've read through all kinds of ancient books and documents. Although I can't directly enter like you, I'm afraid that no one in the world can compare to me in terms of understanding this 5-poison swamp. The ghostly thing said confidently and firmly. Why is that? Could it be that Senior is like the other spirit beasts and wants to take this 5-poison swamp for yourself? Linny joked with a smile. That's not the case. Other than a freak with unique talents like you, no other spirit beasts or human cultivators can withstand the 5 elements' murderous aura. It's the same for me. Actually, it's because of a rumor. The ghostly thing kept him guessing. What rumor? Lin Yi's interest was piqued. Rumor has it that a flood dragon appears in the 5-poison swamp, and it has been seen by other spirit beasts on more than one occasion, the ghostly thing said in a faint voice. Flood dragon? Upon hearing this, Lin Yi was startled and subconsciously raised his head to look at the murderous aura of the 5 elements swimming back and forth. If he had not felt it up close, anyone would think that these were definitely genuine flood dragons. The flood dragons are under the jurisdiction of my dragon clan. Moreover, if there really is a flood dragon, then it's definitely not weak. When I left Heavenly Stage Island, I actually wanted to train a deputy elder of the dragon clan to help me handle matters here. However, in the end I didn't find a qualified one, so I had to look for one. However, after spending a few years, I ended up with nothing in the end. The ghostly thing paused for a moment, then smiled bitterly and said, Now, it seems that the flood dragons they saw were clearly these materialized murderous auras of the 5 elements. They just happened to swim to the surface of the swamp. That should be the case. Linny nodded. Ever since he entered the 5-poison swamp, he had not seen a single living creature. It could only be said that this was a natural land of death. It would be abnormal if a 5-poison flood dragon suddenly appeared. After a pause, Linny asked hesitantly, Senior, what should I do next? This place was a natural treasure trove. The concentration of spirit chi was even denser than in the space of the jade pendant. Perhaps he would never have the chance to encounter such a place again in his lifetime, so Linny did not plan to go up just like that. Of course he could not go up now. After all, he couldn't fly like the West Mountain Elder Sect Master, and even if he could enter the 5-poison swamp at the top, it would be difficult for him to overcome the huge resistance of the swamp and swim up. Moreover, he couldn't leave Huang Xiaotao's spiritual bird here. Unless the spirit bird did not move like it did when it came down, Linny could barely use his true chi to protect it. However, if the spirit bird did not move, how could he go up? Once it moved, with Lin Yi's current strength, it was very easy for an accident to happen. If an accident really happened in the process, then he would regret it endlessly. Moreover, if he rashly went up now, there was a chance that the West Mountain Elder would not give up and would be guarding the edge of the 5-poison swamp. If he found out that Linny could enter the 5-poison swamp without dying, then he would definitely not rest until he died. In this lifetime, Linny would not be able to take a step out of the 5-poison swamp. However, if he did not go up, then he could only stay in this strange underground space. It was true that the density of spirit chi was extraordinary, but the problem was that who knew what dangers there were in this place. Although Lin Yi did not believe in the existence of a 5-poison flood dragon, his many years of experience made him understand another principle. The risks were always proportional to the benefits. Was such a unique super treasure trove really so safe and harmless? The possibility of this was even lower than the 5-poison flood dragon. If it was in the past, Lin Yi would definitely try to explore this vast and boundless space below. After all, the opportunity was rare and there might be unexpected surprises. However, after seeing the West Mountain Elder and the super existences of the Spirit Beast clan, Lin Yi's strong self-confidence had long been shaken. As a master at the peak of the middle stage of the Gold Core realm, Lin Yi was now at least 100 times stronger than when he first came to the Heaven Stage Island. However, he did not feel that he was very strong at all. Under the premise that there were no clues, if he dared to explore with this little strength, then he was really tired of living. The space below was much larger than the 5-poison swamp above. God knew if he could find it after going far, and he did not know if he could go up. Or if he went up, maybe there would be other unexpected situations. This place was full of too many uncertainties. What? Do you want to go around now? The ghostly thing said in a mocking tone. Chapter 45-44. Senior, don't joke around, I'm not stupid. Lin Yi couldn't help but smile bitterly. Curiosity not only killed the cat but it also killed people. Since ancient times, many top experts had died because of curiosity. Since you're not stupid, why don't you hurry up and start practicing? This place is blessed by the heavens and it's simply the best place for you to practice. If you don't seize the time to practice now, it'll be a waste of the opportunity that the heavens have given you. The ghostly thing said with envy. What do you mean? Lin Yi was slightly stunned. Although he still didn't understand, he faintly felt that this might be an excellent opportunity. An opportunity that could make the ghostly thing, the former Azure Dragon, jealous was definitely something that could only be encountered by chance. This is the 5-poison swamp, and you happen to be a person with 5 spiritual roots. Maybe you're the only one in the world. What do you mean? The ghostly thing asked. Hearing the ghostly thing's reminder, Lin Yi had a flash of inspiration and grasped the key point. He became excited, but he still said with some uncertainty, but isn't this the mutual destruction of the 5 elements? These 5 elements' murderous auras at most won't attack me, so how can I use them to practice? For others, the mutual destruction of the 5 elements is absolutely fatal, but for a gifted freak like you, the 5 elements' murderous auras are very useful. It's not as simple as not attacking you. The ghostly thing paused and couldn't help but sigh in its heart. To be honest, it's extremely rare to have 5 spiritual roots at the same time on the Heavenly Island. I've lived for so long, but I've never heard of a human cultivator with 5 spiritual roots other than spirit beasts. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's unique. Lin Yi slightly raised his eyebrows. He had long known that he had 5 spiritual roots and 7 attributes, but he didn't think that there was anything special about it. At most he had more spiritual roots and at most he could choose a wider range of cultivation methods and martial skills. It was impossible for him to make full use of every spiritual root. Even when he participated in the Morning Star Academy selection. After knowing the advantages of having a multi-elemental spiritual root, he didn't think that his spiritual root of the 5 elements and 7 elements would be so rare and unique. Even those 5 elements mediums that open the Heavenly Island are just pawns in the end. In the end, they won't be able to hold on and will be destroyed. You're the only exception. At this point, the ghostly thing's voice couldn't help but sigh. Your inheritor girlfriends, in order to prevent you from being hurt, each and every one of them risked their lives to protect you. They would rather die themselves to bear the pain for you. This kind of love is really touching. You were able to successfully enter the island in the end because they fought for you. As the former Azure Dragon, the values of this ghostly thing could be said to be very different from those of human cultivators. In particular, he had always scoffed and disdained human relationships. However, this time, the actions of Lin Yi's inheritor's girlfriends had truly moved him for the first time. He had never known that the love between a man and a woman could be so selfless and great. It was truly inconceivable. This kind of thing would never happen with spiritual beasts. Perhaps this was the biggest difference between humans and spiritual beasts. Yeah, I wonder how they are now, the ghostly thing couldn't help but sigh. At the same time, Lin Yi's thoughts were also drawn to the common world. It had been more than a year and a half since he had landed on Heavenly Island. If it was possible, he would fly back to the common world right now. He wanted to see how his girlfriends were doing with his own eyes. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have spent a huge sum of money to get the Central Chamber of Commerce to send a letter at the Zhongdao auction house without hesitation. He didn't know if his letter had reached the common world, and he didn't know if he would receive a reply. Heavenly Island and the common world were 2 different worlds. There was no way he could get a reply. In the past year and a half, although Lin Yi's strength had increased by at least 100 times, he was still far from achieving his most important goal. He didn't even get to see Zhang Liju, let alone find a way to save his girlfriends. This was a result that made Lin Yi very depressed. However, it wasn't as if there was no progress at all. At least, Lin Yi had established a deep relationship with the 2 disciples, Kai Zhongyang and Ho Guanqi. This meant that he had opened up a path to meet Zhang Liju in the future. All he needed to do was wait for the right opportunity. Other than that, Lin Yi also received another piece of exciting news. It was the information that the Central Merchant Group revealed. All the signs pointed to the same thing. There was a possibility that there was a two-way path between Heavenly Island and the common world. Those goods were the best proof. These two things were very important to Lin Yi. Zhang Liju meant that he could save people, and a two-way path meant that he could go back to the common world. As long as he was strong enough and had both, then all problems could be solved. Although it wasn't as easy as it sounded, at least Lin Yi wasn't as lost as he was at the beginning. As long as he could find the direction with his incredible potential, everything would come true one day. Lin Yi couldn't help but fall into deep thought. The ghost's voice rang in his head, its tone a little complicated. Don't think about useless things like that. There is indeed a two-way path between Heavenly Island and the common world. I can tell you this very clearly, and that Zhang Liju that you're looking for, I actually know him too. What? You know him too, senior? Then why haven't I heard you mention him after so long? Lin Yi couldn't help but be surprised. Looking for Zhang Liju was his most important mission on Heavenly Island. Compared to this, everything else was like floating clouds. It was a pity that miracle Dr. Dan St. Zhang Liju was a legendary figure. Even though he had stayed in Middle Island for so long and had such a close relationship with Kai Zhongyang and the others, he still didn't get the chance to meet him. It could only be said that the time wasn't right yet. Lin Yi didn't expect that the ghost that stayed in his jade space all day and night actually knew Zhang Liju, but after so long, it didn't even mention a word about him. How secretive. Say my ass. The ghostly thing snorted and paused for a long time before explaining in a faint tone, I had a fight with that old bastard and we've already gotten into a conflict. I can't be bothered to talk about this with you, brat. Chapter 45-45. Had a fight? What do you mean? Lin Yi's interest was piqued, so this thing had fought with Zhang Liju. One of them was the former Green Dragon Elder, the other was the Saint Dan Doctor. Both of them were top-notch existences in the whole of Sky Division. The battle between the two of them would definitely be exciting, but from the tone of the ghost, it didn't seem to have gotten anything out of Zhang Liju, otherwise, it wouldn't have been so quiet. This wasn't surprising at all. Even if this thing was a top-notch master of the Spirit Beast clan, Zhang Liju was still very famous. Even if Zhang Liju was famous for his elixir refinement and medical skills, he wasn't weak at all. In the entire 5 islands of Sky class, there were only a handful of people who could take him down with ease, perhaps even uncountable. Lin Yi wasn't a gossipy person, but this was related to the battle between the ghost and Zhang Liju, and his curiosity was ignited. Humph, it's nothing, we just fought once. The ghost humphed. It didn't want to say much, but seeing how excited Lin Yi was, it finally said, back then that old bastard Zhang Liju found a way to go to the common world, but he needed the help of all 7 of his wives to open the path. Wait, 7? How could there be 7? Didn't he only have 2 wives? Lin Yi froze. Zhang Liju's 2 wives were Master Shuer and Master Ice. This was something everyone knew. Even when he came to Sky Division Island, the locals said the same thing. Why were there so many? Even a disciple like you, who you've never met before, has so many girlfriends, how could that old bastard only have 2? The ghost laughed weirdly and said with envy, to be honest, that old bastard's luck is off the charts. He only had 2 wives before he came to Sky Division Island. In the end, he had all kinds of luck with women and found 5 wives in a row. What was even more amazing was that all 7 of his wives had spiritual roots of the 5 elements and 7 attributes. What kind of luck do you think this is? As a spiritual beast, this ghost wasn't interested in how many wives a human could have, but Zhang Liju's 7 wives were all of the 5 elements and 7 elements. This was something to be envious of. After all, this was something that could be put to good use. Lin Yi couldn't help but be speechless as he listened to the ghostly thing's strange laughter. These 7 wives of Zhang Liju's really made one speechless. This cheap Sherfu that he'd never met before couldn't have found them based on the 5 elements and 7 elements, right? Otherwise, how could there be such a coincidence? But when he thought about himself, forget it, it was better not to talk about others behind their backs. Could it be that he is also a 5 elements cultivator? Otherwise, even if his 7 wives gathered the 5 elements and 7 attributes, without a medium, they wouldn't be able to open the formation channel, right? Lin Yi asked. No, he isn't a 5-element cultivator. Didn't I tell you? You're the only freak that has gathered all 7 elements and 7 attributes. The ghostly thing curled its lips. Then how did he? Lin Yi couldn't help but wonder. Unless this cheap Sherfu of his had really created a revolutionary formation channel, otherwise no matter what he did, he couldn't do without the 5 elements as a medium. It's simple. That old bastard isn't a 5-element cultivator himself, but he has a 5 elements divine stone. The ghostly thing explained. 5 elements divine stone? What's that? Linny raised an eyebrow. It's a rare treasure that can be used as a medium to replace the 5 elements. Other than the one in the old bastard's hand, I'm afraid there's no second one in the world. The ghostly thing's tone was a little bitter. If he had a 5 elements divine stone, perhaps he wouldn't have had to beg that old bastard back then, and so many things wouldn't have happened. Oh, I see. Linny nodded. He didn't show much interest in the 5 elements divine stone. After all, he could be the medium himself. He didn't need the 5 elements divine stone. And then, why did you guys start fighting? I spent a great deal of effort to finally find this old bastard, and I humbly asked him to help me open the formation passageway so that I could make a trip to the mortal world. In the end, this old bastard actually didn't agree. Even today, the ghostly thing was still angry when he talked about it. As for why he wanted to go to the common world, it didn't need to be said that it was to find the bloodline of the spirit beast king. What? Did you guys have a conflict before? Linny found it strange. Miracle Dr. Dan Zhongliju was so famous, how could he be a petty person? Even if he wasn't selfless enough to help others, this ghostly thing was still the green dragon elder of the spirit beasts. He shouldn't have no value at all, right? Conflict my ass, this old bastard isn't like the other human practitioners who kill spirit beasts. All he does is concoct pills and save people. What conflict could there be between us? The ghostly thing paused and sighed. The reason why he didn't agree was because he wanted to protect his people. He said that every time the channel was opened, his 7 wives would have to pass out. Even he couldn't guarantee that he could wake them up every time. The risk was huge. Couldn't guarantee? Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Didn't that mean that even if he got Zhang Liju's help, his wives might not be able to wake up? You don't have to be so nervous. It's just an excuse from the old bastard. The miracle Dr. Dan Zhang Liju is not someone who doesn't deserve his reputation. Although he said he wasn't confident, when have you ever seen him fail? Not even once. That's not confidence, my ass. The ghostly thing consoled and said angrily. In order to get him to help, I tried so hard to convince him to think for the sake of the spirit beast. As long as he's willing to open the channel, the spirit beasts will always remember his kindness. Will pay any price for it. And he still didn't agree? Linny was speechless. With this ghostly thing's identity as the Green Dragon Elder, making a promise like this was basically the same as getting the entire Spirit Beast clan's approval and support. The Spirit Beasts were a force far above the human sections. This was a benefit that no big boss would reject. Even someone at Zhang Liju's level wouldn't be able to ignore it. Chapter 45-46. What the hell, why am I involved in this all of a sudden? Linny was speechless as he smiled bitterly. Did he help you after that? I think so, or else how did you get to the common world? The ghost went silent for a while and said faintly, I guess he helped me half. At half? What's that supposed to mean? Linny paused. Nothing much, I just kept bugging him and that old thing got annoyed by my nagging so he agreed to fight with me. If I won, he'd help me, but if I lost, then there's nothing left to talk about and I'd never bother him again, the ghost explained. And then? What happened? Linny asked impatiently. He really wanted to know who was stronger between the ghost and Zhang Liju, these two peak existences. We fought for 3 days and nights, from the sky to the ground to the sea, and in the process, we even destroyed 5 small islands and neither of us won. It was a draw. The ghost's tone was a little excited as it talked about this. After all, an opponent like Zhang Liju who was almost undefeatable, was hard to find in this world. Ugh, that was really intense. Linny couldn't help but be speechless. From what he knew, the stronger the practitioner, the more they would focus on killing in one hit, especially at the level of this ghost and Zhang Liju. Normally, they would be able to decide who was stronger in one move, but the two fought for 3 days and 3 nights without a clear winner. It was obvious that they were on par with each other. It was indeed intense. Other than Zhang Liju, I've never met an opponent like this before. Even Vermilion Bird wasn't this difficult to deal with, and it was a piece of cake. I have to say, that old thing is really something. The ghost nodded and sighed. As the previous green dragon, he had always been proud and arrogant, and other than the spirit beast king, he rarely respected anyone like this. Zhang Liju was a rare exception. What happened after that? Linny continued. After that? No one lost and no one won. The previous bet can't be counted. Since we fought to a draw, I can only help half of it. That old thing didn't help me open the formation passage, but he lent me the 5 elements divine stone so I can go to the secular world. However, the price I have to pay is that I've been tortured by that huge pressure. I've ended up like this. The ghostly thing said in a self-deprecating manner. I see. Lenny nodded. He already knew what happened next, so there was no need to continue asking. But after some thought he asked, wait, if Zhang Liju didn't open the portal because he didn't want his 7 wives to get hurt, then why did he go to the common world? The reason why he asked this was because Linny suddenly remembered that the cauldron in the tomb had disappeared for some reason. If he was right, it should be Zhang Liju's doing. This meant that he had been to the common world at least once. Could it be that he ran into some emergency that he couldn't even care about his 7 wives? With the protective nature that the ghost described, that didn't seem possible, right? He did tell me. Since it was a tie, he could help me open the formation channel after a while. However, the prerequisite was that he had to wait until his wife's strength had increased to the same realm. Only then would he be able to open the formation channel. At most, they'll just use up some pure chi and they won't all get hurt or fall unconscious. They'll recover after a few years of rest, so there's no need to take any risks. The ghost said. So that's what you mean. His wives have all fulfilled the requirements, and that's why he can go back and forth between the common world and Sky-class island. Lenny nodded. Isn't that a good suggestion? We just need to wait for a few years and we won't have to take any risks. Senior, could it be that you can't even wait for a few years? Although the lifespan of a high-level cultivator, especially a top-notch spiritual beast like the ghost, was not endless, it was still extremely long. A few years was just a blink of an eye, and it could be gone by casually in closed-door cultivation. Why would it take such a huge risk to fight for a few years and end up like this? No matter how one looked at it, it was not worth it. Of course not. The ghostly being's voice was scorching, then it smiled bitterly. If it wasn't for the fact that the Spirit Beast clan's situation was already in dire straits, based on my personality, why would I lower my pride and ask a human for help? Even when I was facing the Spirit Beast King, I've never been so submissive. If I had waited a few more years, I wouldn't have had any problems, but the Spirit Beast clan has already fallen apart. You've seen how ambitious the Vermilion Bird is, so how could I possibly wait? That's true, but haste makes waste. From what I see, if you hadn't been so impulsive back then and listened to Zhang Liju and waited a few more years, things wouldn't have gotten out of hand like this. At least, with you in the Spirit Beast clan, even if Vermilion Bird got a puppet to become the new Spirit Beast King, it wouldn't be able to do whatever it wants like this. Lenny analyzed. Before the situation was clear, it was better to stay put than to take action. This was his experience over the years. However, everyone had a different personality, so naturally, their style of doing things was also different. If the ghost did as he said, then it wouldn't be a ghost. That's true. It's too bad that I didn't meet you back then, kid, or I wouldn't be where I am today. To be honest, you may not be strong, but there are many things that I can learn from you. The ghost sighed. This wasn't just being courteous, it was the truth. Linny was able to grow at such a shocking speed in just a few years, and it wasn't just because of his talent and luck, but also because of his style of doing things. If it were anyone else, even if they had the same talent and luck, they would have been killed a long time ago. Chapter 45-47. The ghost was actually a little embarrassed, and after a long pause he said weakly, "It's just that this experience is a little embarrassing. What's there to announce? Besides, we weren't that close back then. I didn't have the nerve to tell you about this. My God, if you had told me about this earlier, I wouldn't have had to live in fear for so long." Linny held his forehead, speechless. He had been living in fear for the past 1.5 years, not because of the pressure from his enemies, but because he had been worrying about Zhang Liju. What if Zhang Liju didn't have the confidence to save his women? Or what if Zhang Liju had the confidence to save them, but couldn't go back to the common world? With Lin Yi's personality, he wouldn't get angry no matter how strong the enemy was, just like how he was facing Shishan Elder right now. At most, he would find a place to hide, and when he was strong enough, he would come back to settle the score. It wasn't a big deal. But the two things he was worried about couldn't be solved with just hard work and practice. Whether or not he could succeed depended on Zhang Liju, and Lin Yi himself couldn't help at all. This feeling of helplessness was the most torturous thing. For the past 1.5 years, Lin Yi couldn't help but worry whenever he closed his eyes, afraid that he would get a negative answer. If it weren't for his strong mental fortitude, any other person would have been tortured to the point of having a nervous breakdown. But at the very least, these two questions were answered by this damn thing, and they were both positive answers as well. It was a cause for celebration, and Lin Yi's heart could finally be at ease. Although Zhang Liju said that he didn't have the confidence to save the inheritor, as the ghost said, he had never failed before, so one could see that he was very confident. As long as there were no accidents, it shouldn't be a problem for him to save the inheritor. Other than that, Lin Yi didn't have to worry about not being able to go back to the common world. Even if he couldn't get a conclusion from the Central Chamber of Commerce in the future, as long as he could find Zhang Liju, there would definitely be a way to open the portal to the common world. This news was like a reassuring pill for Lin Yi. However, after knowing these two pieces of news, Lin Yi wasn't in a rush anymore. Zhang Liju had opened it once 2 years ago, and according to the ghost, his 7 wives needed to rest for a few years before they could recover. He wouldn't be able to open it again in the near future, so there was no point for Lin Yi to worry now. He might as well focus on accumulating his strength. Of course, if there was a chance in the future to explore the secret passageway of the Central Chamber of Commerce, that would be a pleasant surprise as well. However, with Zhang Liju as a reliable option, Lin Yi didn't have to be too insistent on it. He didn't have to worry about it. After all, the Central Chamber of Commerce was full of masters, and it wasn't a place to be messed with. Now that both of his worries had been resolved, Lin Yi's spirit was lifted. There was an obvious change in his spirit compared to before, and although he was still as calm and reserved as before, there was now a sunny aura around him that made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. You can't blame me for this. I'm not a gossiper. Why would I keep this kind of embarrassing thing on my lips all day long? You're lucky that you're able to hear it now. I was planning to keep this to myself and never tell anyone else. Now that I've made an exception for you, what's there to be dissatisfied about? The ghost laughed coldly. At the same time, the ghost couldn't help but feel a little emotional. When he was in the common world, he didn't have much interaction with Lin Yi, let alone a close relationship. So when they first came to Sky Class Island, the only thing he did to protect Lin Yi was to keep him alive. Other than that, he didn't care about anything else. But in the past year or so, the two of them had been through thick and thin together, and Lin Yi's temperament was to his liking. Their relationship was completely different from before, and the things he wouldn't say or do in the past weren't strange at all. In fact, he felt that it was only natural for him to do so now. Alright, then I'm really flattered. Lin Yi couldn't help but smile and nod. No matter what, the stone in his heart had been lifted, and the next step was clear. He had to increase his strength as much as he could and find Zhang Liju. Other than that, everything else was secondary. Of course. The ghostly thing snickered and returned to the topic at hand. Alright, I've said all that needs to be said. Hurry up and start cultivating. Don't waste this great opportunity. Alright, do you want to scout the surroundings first? Lin Yi didn't plan on exploring this place alone, but at the very least he needed to know the surroundings like the back of his hand. Otherwise, he might be targeted by some scary being in the middle of his practice. That's not necessary. I'll use my divine sense to keep an eye on the surroundings, and I'll let you know if anything strange happens. The ghost said. In his current state, he didn't dare say anything else, but at least he had absolute confidence in his divine sense. Not only did it not deteriorate, but it had also improved quite a bit compared to when he was at his peak. After all, this was the only thing he could rely on. Alright, I'll leave it to you then, senior. Lin Yi nodded. In fact, even if the ghost didn't keep watch for him, he still had the jade space to warn him. No matter what happened, he would be able to react in time. There was nothing to worry about. After that, Lin Yi turned around and told the spirit bird not to go too far away. Then he leaped onto a high platform next to him. Not only was this underground space empty, but the terrain was also quite strange. Every 100 or so feet, there was a tall narrow platform. Some of them were directly connected to the top of the swamp, while others were a bit off. The platform that Lin Yi chose just happened to be able to reach the swamp. Standing on the high platform, Lin Yi's body was only a foot away from the swamp. Although he didn't sink into it, the murderous aura of the 5 elements would emerge from time to time. Sometimes it would affect Lin Yi's body. Lin Yi didn't wrap his body with chi like he did when he first came down. After all, the murderous aura of the 5 elements would ignore him and he wouldn't be able to practice. However, he didn't dare to touch the murderous aura of the 5 elements too rashly, so he didn't go deep into the swamp. Instead, he chose this high platform that was just a little bit above ground. Chapter 45-48. The murderous aura of the 5 elements did not completely come out, but only a small part of it came out from the mud like a dragon swinging its tail. At the same time, it did not directly touch Lin Yi. Lin Yi was just touched by the edge of it. However, it was just a little bit, but it was enough to make Lin Yi feel that he could not bear it. Don't look at the insignificant aftermath at the edge, even invisible to the naked eye, but Lin Yi could still clearly feel the terrible power of the murderous aura of the 5 elements. At this moment, there was only one emotion in his heart. No wonder the murderous aura of the 5 elements could kill everything. Even the existence of the ghost did not dare to go deep into it. No wonder the ghost just asked him to use genuine qi to protect his body, otherwise he would have been killed. The murderous aura of the 5 elements reinforced and restrained each other. The 5 basic attributes of the murderous aura were integrated into one. This was not as simple as 1 plus 1. Just take the aftermath of the impact on Lin Yi's body. If each attribute of the murderous aura was taken out separately, even if Lin Yi did not use any protection with his current physical strength, these attributes of the murderous aura could not hurt a hair on his body at all. It could be said that it was insignificant. But now, after these 5 attributes of the murderous aura were all integrated into the 5 elements of the 5 elements, the power increased more than thousands of times. Even if Lin Yi was very careful, he still almost could not bear it. He was about to fall from the high platform on the spot. Fortunately, he held it with his hands in time and gritted his teeth to bear it. What did it feel like to be sliced into 1,000 pieces? Lin Yi had only talked about it casually before, but this time he was experiencing it for real. Even if his body was strong and his heart strong, he wouldn't be able to endure it if he didn't have the resolve to do so. Without this resolve, it didn't matter how strong he was. The time when the murderous aura of the 5 elements touched him was actually only a short moment, not even a blink of an eye. But in the eyes of Lin Yi, this moment was extremely long, and other people felt that a day was like a year. However, for Lin Yi, whose body felt like it was being sliced by knives, every second felt like a year. In just a short moment, Lin Yi felt as if he had just taken a shower. His entire body was drenched in cold sweat from head to toe. Phew. Finally successfully withstanding the first close contact with the murderous aura of the 5 elements, Lin Yi let out a long breath of turbid air as if he had survived a disaster. Even the pressure that the West Mountain Elder gave him was nothing more than this. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. This murderous aura of the 5 elements is really terrifying. There is actually such a terrifying thing in the world. This time I have learned something new. You brat, just be content. The power of the 5 elements murderous qi is not something that any human or spirit beast can resist. If it was another expert, let alone a mere gold core stage, even if it was a nascent soul stage cultivator, you would have died without a doubt. Only a freak like you with the 5 elements spiritual root can withstand it without missing an arm or a leg. There was a hint of envy in the ghostly thing's tone. Even in his previous heyday, he would never dare to use the murderous aura of the 5 elements to temper his body like Lin Yi. This was something that he didn't even dare to think about. Only a freak like Lin Yi could have such an opportunity and luck. It must be known that the stronger the tempering, the faster the improvement. This was an unchanging truth since ancient times. Of course, the premise was that he could survive. Otherwise, it would be purely courting death. The murderous aura of the 5 elements is so terrifying. Senior, you should have said it earlier. Fortunately, I was careful enough and didn't jump in directly. I only suffered a little bit of aftermath. Otherwise, if I was directly hit by the murderous aura of the 5 elements, then I would be dead. Lin Yi spat out his tongue in fear. This was the truth. The experience just now had already made him understand that although his unique physique of the 5 elements spiritual root could use the murderous aura of the 5 elements to cultivate, it was simply a fool's dream to completely withstand it. At most, his endurance was much stronger than other cultivators. Hey, I don't have the attribute of the 5 elements, and I have never really touched the murderous aura of the 5 elements. How would I know that this thing is so powerful? The ghost thing curled its lips disapprovingly. Of course, it was also familiar with Lin Yi's temperament. It knew that Lin Yi would not rashly advance. Otherwise, it would not be so irresponsible. At least, it would remind him. Lin Yi was suddenly speechless. He looked up at the top of his head with lingering fear. With a little carelessness, the murderous aura of the 5 elements that would emerge from time to time could become the king of hell. This was not a joke. Don't be silly. Tell me, how is the effect? The ghost thing asked with interest. In such a short moment, what effect can it have? Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh when he heard the words. However, in the middle of the words, his whole body suddenly seemed to be struck by lightning, and he was suddenly stunned. It was reasonable to say that any kind of cultivation method was painstaking. It must be persisted for a long time to see obvious effects. There was no cultivation method in the world that could immediately see the effect. Even the evil cultivation method could not be so fast unless one took medicine, and it must be the best medicine to see the effect immediately. However, Lin Yi's deep-rooted understanding was shattered at this moment. He would have scoffed at this inconceivable thing if he'd heard it from someone else, but now that it was happening to him, he had no choice but to believe it. Although it was only a short moment, not even a blink of an eye, but Lin Yi felt the real effect. He dared not say much. At least the strength of the genuine chi in his body had obviously changed compared to just now, and the change was not just a little bit. This was simply impossible in the past. Even when he was cultivating in the space of the jade pendant, Lin Yi had never experienced such an exaggerated and amazing effect. He was now completely dumbfounded. Even if he took medicine, it would take a while for the medicine to take effect, right? How could there be such an immediate effect? Even a calm kid like you is shocked. It seems that the effect is just as I expected. It is indeed very exaggerated. The ghostly thing cackled when it saw Yi Shiwen's reaction. How could this be? This is too fucking exaggerated, isn't it? Apart from the shock, Lin Yi was not happy but worried. The effect came too fast and too sudden, and he was a little worried about whether he would be possessed. After all, in the understanding of ordinary people, more haste, less speed, and it was easy to have big problems if the cultivation progress was too fast. It's okay, this is within my expectations, it's quite normal. The ghost thing comforted with a smile. Chapter 45-49. Of course it's normal. You have the 5 elements spiritual root, so your compatibility with the 5 elements murderous aura can be said to be perfect. The 5 elements murderous aura is a natural tonic for you. If you cultivate in the 5 elements murderous aura, in the words of us spirit beasts, it's called natal cultivation. It's very normal for you to improve by leaps and bounds every day. There's nothing to be surprised about. The ghost thing was not worried at all. Natal cultivation? What does that mean? Lin Yi was slightly stunned. This was the first time he had heard of this term. As the name suggests, it's a cultivation method that God has given you. Any other cultivation method is going astray. Either your progress is too slow, or you'll be possessed by the devil. Natal cultivation is the good fortune that all spirit beasts dream of. Not even 1 in 10 million spirit beasts can truly realize it. It's something that can't be obtained even if you beg for it. The ghost thing sighed with emotion. What? According to what you said, natal cultivation should be the most suitable cultivation method for you. As long as a spirit beast has a little bit of comprehension, it shouldn't be that difficult to find the most suitable cultivation method for you, right? Lin Yi couldn't help but ask curiously. That's right, but we spirit beasts are different from you human cultivators. Even if you human cultivators have different physiques and talents, you're all of the same clan after all. You can learn from each other. However, there are more than 10 million spirit beasts, especially many high-level spirit beasts that are inherited from the same bloodline. How can there be so many templates for us to learn from? The ghost thing paused for a moment and continued, moreover, as long as it's a high-level spirit beast, its racial talents are often very unique. Even if it finds the natal cultivation method, it must have a corresponding unique cultivation environment. Unless it's extremely lucky, it's easier said than done to find such a perfect cultivation place. That's true. Lin Yi nodded in realization. If he was a spirit beast, if he hadn't been forced to escape into the 5 poison swamp, even if he knew that he had the 5 element spiritual root, he would never have thought that there was such a different world under the swamp. Natal cultivation was even more impossible to talk about. Originally, the sudden appearance of the West Mountain Elder was a calamity for Lin Yi. For Lin Yi, it was a calamity, but now it seemed like it was a blessing instead of a curse. In fact, recently Lin Yi had a feeling that the rich vital energy in his jade pendant space seemed to be faintly decreasing. He didn't know why. Maybe it was Lin Yi's own illusion, or maybe it was because after his strength continued to increase, the supply of genuine chi in the space of the jade pendant was not enough for Lin Yi. Anyway, one thing was very clear, and that was the effect of the space of the jade pendant on his cultivation was not as obvious as before. At the very least, his cultivation speed had unknowingly dropped by a large margin. However, even if Lin Yi was aware of this, it was useless. The effect of the space of the jade pendant becoming weaker was only relative to the past. If compared to the outside world, it was still incomparable. Therefore, Lin Yi could only continue to rely on the spiritual chi in the space of the jade pendant to practice as usual. But now, by chance, he suddenly found a place with a higher concentration of spiritual chi than the space of the jade pendant. Moreover, he could use the murderous aura of the 5 elements to carry out natal cultivation at any time. For Lin Yi, this was simply a unique treasure land. In the future, when he went out, he really had to thank the West Mountain Elder sect. While the two were talking, the warning sound of the jade pendant sounded again. Not far from the side, another murderous aura of the 5 elements surged out. Just like before, Lin Yi was still hit by it. His body still felt like it was being twisted by a knife. But even if Lin Yi had just persevered, now that he knew the great benefits, it was even more impossible for him to be discouraged midway. He was being tempered by the aftermath of the murderous aura of the 5 elements. The only thing Lin Yi had to do now was to clench his teeth and persevere. Every time he was tempered by the aftermath, the strength of his body's genuine qi would increase by a level. Even the strength of his physical body would also undergo earth-shaking changes. This kind of arduous tempering was even more effective than those elixirs. After taking elixirs, one's strength would be like a castle in the air. At the very least, one would need a period of time to stabilize one's strength. Otherwise, it would be extremely easy for one's foundation to be unstable, which would lead to the tragic consequences of qi deviation. However, this kind of tempering was different. Every bit of growth was real strength. Not only would one's foundation not weaken because of this, it would only become stronger. Once, twice, thrice. What Lin Yi did next was to keep repeating. Each time was an extremely difficult challenge, but each time he could benefit a lot. Of course, this was directly proportional to the risk. In just an hour, Lin Yi had been coaxed down the pillar of the high platform for a total of 3 times. It was not because his willpower had weakened, but because these 3 times he was too close to the murderous aura of the 5 elements. With his current strength, he could at most bear the aftermath, and it was still far from being tempered by the murderous aura of the 5 elements. Fortunately, Lin Yi had a physique of the 5 elements, and his tolerance to the murderous aura of the 5 elements was much stronger than ordinary people. Otherwise, just these 3 brushes with the murderous aura of the 5 elements would be enough to kill him. 3 days. Lin Yi had been persisting for 3 days. This time was insignificant for any cultivator. Could be said to be a snap of the fingers. However, for Lin Yi, who had been tempered and tortured by the murderous aura of the 5 elements, this might be the longest 3 days he had ever experienced. The test of physical and mental perseverance could be said to have reached the limit. But correspondingly, the benefits that Lin Yi had obtained were also unparalleled. When he came in, he was only at the peak of the middle stage of gold core. However, after these 3 days of baptism and tempering, Lin Yi had impressively touched the barrier of the late stage of gold core. He was only a step away from going further. This result made Lin Yi very happy. There was the covetous Shishan old sect outside. Every bit of strength was a bit more capital to protect his life. Every time he broke through a layer, it might be the distance between life and death. However, although he had successfully touched the barrier of the late stage of gold core, it was still difficult to break through in a short time. After all, Lin Yi had just reached the peak of the middle stage of gold core. Although he was the strongest gold core master who had a perfect breakthrough, it was impossible to break through the threshold of the late stage of gold core like drinking plain water. He still needed a suitable opportunity. This opportunity could be taking the gold core or other special circumstances. As long as the opportunity came with the strength of Lin Yi, the breakthrough was naturally a matter of course. Chapter 45-50. But good steel should be used on the blade's edge. Lin Yi didn't plan on using the fruit right now. After all, it was a treasure that was hard to find in this world, and he might not be able to find it again in this lifetime. He had to save it for the most crucial moment. Cent pound at the moment, Lin Yi felt that it was not the most critical time yet. He had a faint hunch that even if he did not use the myriad golden dan fruit, he would have a chance to break through to the late stage of gold core. Because every time he was tempered by the aftermath of the 5 elements' murderous aura, he could clearly feel the throbbing sign that he was about to break through. However, what made Lin Yi feel a little pity was that although the sign was very obvious and strong, he did not really break through after every time he endured the aftermath. It just remained at the level of the sign. It seemed that he could not break through successfully. Lin Yi knew that this state of eagerness to break through would not last long. If he could not break through before it disappeared, he would have to wait for the next sign to appear. Then he did not know when. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. There were many examples of people who could not break through when it was time to break through, and thus fell into a quagmire. Fortune comes from risk. It seems that you have to take a little risk. The ghost suggested. Understood. Lin Yi nodded. Although he had always been cautious, he would never refuse some necessary risks. Just like now, there were only 2 ways for him to take advantage of the situation to break through. The first was to take the golden dan fruit, but he did not have this plan, so he could only use the ready-made 5 elements murderous aura in front of him to force out his greater potential. If it was someone else, they would definitely not dare to do this, but Lin Yi could. Since he could bear the aftermath of the 5 elements murderous aura, he could naturally go further and try to get closer to the 5 elements murderous aura. Of course, the premise was that he had to master this degree, otherwise it would not be called stimulating his potential. It would be courting death. Taking a deep breath, Lin Yi moved to a high platform beside him. Originally, when he stood on this platform, he could only reach the 5 poison swamp above his head. But now he could directly enter the 5-poison swamp on this platform. Sure enough, Lin Yi was immediately targeted by a killing intent of the 5 elements. If the 5-poison swamp was a pond, and the 5 elements of murderous aura were piranhas, then Lin Yi was a living bait. When he was standing on the high platform, Lin Yi was still floating above the water. That was why the piranhas weren't aroused. At most they were splashed a little. But now the bait was directly thrown into the pond, and the piranhas immediately revealed their ferocious nature. Perhaps because Lin Yi had the attribute of the 5 elements to a certain extent, he had the same smell as the 5 elements of murderous aura, so the 5 elements of murderous aura did not gather in the distance. Otherwise, even if Lin Yi had 10,000 lives, he would still die without a burial place. But even so, just the 5 elements of murderous aura beside him was enough to kill him. Previously, when facing the aftermath of the 5 elements of murderous aura, Lin Yi was already suffering. Now he was directly facing the 5 elements of murderous aura. His whole body was trembling uncontrollably. This was the biological instinct when facing a fatal crisis. Even if Lin Yi wanted to control it, he couldn't unless he was already a dead man. Be careful. Don't go overboard. At this time, even the ghostly thing was frightened. Although this was his suggestion, even he couldn't stay calm when it really came to this moment. After all, he was on Lin Yi's body. He could feel the horror of the 5 elements of murderous aura. This thing could really kill someone if he was not careful. If Lin Yi died, even he would be unlucky. I know. Lin Yi responded in a deep voice. At the same time, the 5 elements of murderous aura slammed into his body. Lin Yi suddenly clenched his teeth so hard that they bled. All the muscles on his body trembled like a sieve. The tempering of the aftermath before was already like being cut by thousands of knives, but the pain at this moment was more than 100 times. It's coming. Under the extreme pain, the real qi in Lin Yi's body suddenly moved wildly spontaneously forming a confrontation with the 5 elements of murderous aura outside, and it skyrocketed uncontrollably. The opportunity for a breakthrough had come. The thick barrier in front of the late stage of gold core suddenly loosened under the crazy impact of the real qi. The breakthrough was close at hand. Lin Yi didn't dare to neglect it. He quickly lowered his body and withdrew from the 5-poison swamp. Without saying anything, he jumped down from the high platform and sat cross-legged, concentrating on the breakthrough. First, he was directly facing the tempering of the 5 elements of murderous aura. This moment was already the limit that he could endure. Second, the breakthrough process could not be disturbed at all. Otherwise, if it was light, he would be injured. If it was heavy, he would be possessed by the devil. There were many cases where he even died on the spot. The 5 elements of murderous aura could only be used to find the opportunity for a breakthrough. If he wanted to break through while enduring the tempering of the 5 elements of murderous aura, it was simply courting death. Even if he was courting death, he should not seek it in such a way. Everything was ready and the east wind had arrived. This time Lin Yi's breakthrough could be said to be a matter of course. In just half an hour he was reborn without any wind or danger, and his whole temperament was completely new. Although there seemed to be only a thin line between the peak of the middle stage of gold core and the late stage of gold core, the meaning of the two was completely different. Before he was just a typical gold core expert, but now he had reached a level where he could look forward to a higher realm. After entering the late stage of gold core, most cultivators had already begun to prepare for the next breakthrough to the Yuanying realm. Chu Bubi was an example. Ordinary cultivators were still like this, but Lin Yi, as the strongest gold core cultivator who had a perfect breakthrough, the process from the late stage of gold core to the great perfection of gold core was much faster than ordinary people. Stepping into the late stage of gold core meant that he was not far from the Yuanying realm. After carefully feeling the new power in his body, Lin Yi took a deep breath. From the peak of the middle stage of gold core to the late stage of gold core, he could clearly feel that the improvement in strength was not a little bit, it was simply a skyrocketing increase. Of course, Lin Yi did not show too much joy. Not being surprised by favors or disgraces, this had always been Lin Yi's style. Moreover, after seeing the West Mountain Old Master, who was an evil cultivator, and the even more terrifying Spirit Beast guards of the Spirit Beast clan, this little improvement in strength was not worth mentioning for those high and mighty super existences. Naturally, Lin Yi would not be ecstatic for this little breakthrough. Chapter 45-51. Of course, Lin Yi was not a person who was too ambitious. Advancing to the late Jedan stage was still a gratifying progress. According to his previous experience, his current strength was enough to fight with a master of the late Yuanying stage, and he had the confidence to win. However, if it was a master of the great Yuanying stage or a master of the higher Shenying stage, it was estimated that there was not much he could do. He could only rely on the super bomb as a trump card to survive. Yennefer Lin shook his head slightly. This result would have made others ecstatic, but he couldn't help but be a little disappointed. After all, the opponent he was going to face was not a master of the late Yuanying stage, but a giant evil cultivator. With his current strength facing the West Mountain Old Master, the result was difficult to be different from before. But fortunately, he didn't need to face the old monster of the West Mountain Old Master now. After all, the other party saw him rush into the 5 poisonous swamp with his own eyes. He should think that he had already died. This threat was temporarily ignored, but Lin didn't intend to go out like this. Now only 3 days had passed. God knew if the West Mountain Old Master had already left. With the old monster's hysterical state before, even if he saw Lin die in the 5 poisonous swamp with his own eyes, maybe he would stay and watch for a while. If Lin went out now, there was still the risk of being caught by the other party. What's more, this treasure land was so rare, and the excellent effect of cultivation could be said to be rare in the world. Even the space of Lin Yi's own jade pendant was far from this. How could Lin Yi easily miss this kind of opportunity? Of course, he had to stay here to cultivate for a while. Anyway, there were still 5 months before the deadline of the task of the 3 pavilions in the North Island. Lin Yi didn't need to go back so hurriedly. No matter what he did, only strength was the foundation of survival. And if he stayed here for a few more months, the West Mountain Old Master outside, even if he was cunning, must have thought that he had died long ago. Waiting for 10 days to half a month was the limit. It was impossible to stay here for a few months. If he was not mistaken, he should have long since forgotten about the fact that he had died without a corpse. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. After making up his mind, Lin Yi immediately struck while the iron was hot and continued to cultivate. Just like before, he stood on the high platform near the 5 poison swamp to accept the tempering of the aftermath of the 5 elements' murderous aura. Now that his strength had improved, Lin Yi's tolerance for the 5 elements' murderous aura was obviously much stronger. Now, facing the aftermath was not as painful and torturous as it was at the beginning. Instead, it became somewhat easy. However, when Lin Yi was gradually able to fully withstand the aftermath of the 5 elements' murderous qi, he found that the improvement effect was not as exaggerated as at the beginning, although it was still much better than the jade pendant space. But compared to before, it was clearly several times worse. This was a matter of course. After gradually adapting to the aftermath of the murderous aura of the 5 elements, the effect of the tempering would gradually weaken. When Lin Yi could completely adapt to it, it would be like eating and drinking normally. There would be no effect at all. Therefore, if Lin Yi wanted to go further, the only way was to increase the intensity. A little closer to the 5 elements' murderous qi. Little by little, the distance between himself and the 5 elements' murderous qi was what Lin Yi had been doing. Every time he got closer, it meant that his strength was stronger. If one day he could calmly face the 5 elements' murderous qi, and even casually wave a genuine qi that could be comparable to the 5 elements' murderous qi, then he must have stood at the peak of the entire Heaven Stage Island. Of course, this day was still far away. Cultivation knew no time. Day after day, Lin Yi used the 5 elements' murderous qi to temper his body. After he gradually adapted to this crazy closed-door cultivation rhythm, 3 months almost passed in the blink of an eye. Fleeting. Usually, Lin Yi would cultivate on the high platform close to the 5 elements' murderous qi. Every few days, when his strength increased, he would change to a high platform that was closer to the 5 elements' murderous qi. If he was close to breaking through, then he would take the risk to go deep into the 5 poison swamp and directly face the 5 elements' murderous qi to stimulate his own limit. Accompanied by a clear cry, a nimble shadow flew from afar and circled back and forth around Lin Yi's position. It was the spirit bird that Huang Xiaotao had left for him. Perhaps it was because the spirit qi here was very rich, but in the past 3 months, although Lin Yi had never seen the spirit bird actively cultivate and only cared about playing, if compared to 3 months ago, he would find that this guy had been reborn. Whether it was the momentum or the speed, they were a lot better than before. Even the originally docile and harmless eyes faintly had a few points of sharpness unique to high-level flying spirit beasts. This was an unexpected surprise. Phew. Lin Yi let out a long breath, stood up and stretched his body, a smile on his face as he jumped onto the spirit bird's back. There's 2 months left until the mission deadline, it's time to go back, he muttered to himself. At this moment, after experiencing a full 3 months of hard cultivation, Lin Yi didn't seem to be much different from before at first glance. If there was a difference from when he had just broken through to the late stage of Gold Core, it was that the aura around him was more profound and restrained. That was all. However, this was just the appearance. For the results of these 3 months of hard cultivation, even a freak like Lin Yi, who had long been used to jumping levels like a rocket, couldn't help but feel excited at the moment when he thought about it. There was no other reason. He was now a real master of the peak of Gold Core realm. From escaping into the 5-poison swamp until now, only 3 months had passed. However, Lin Yi's strength had broken through from the initial peak of the middle stage of Gold Core realm all the way to the current peak of Gold Core realm, which represented the limit of the Gold Core realm. If this matter was spread out, it would definitely subvert everyone's outlook on life. From the peak of the middle stage of Gold Core realm to the peak of Gold Core realm, let alone 3 months, even if it was 30 years, it would be a fool's dream. There were many people who were stuck for 300 years without any progress in the end. If they knew that this miracle happened to Lin Yi, their eyes would definitely bleed from jealousy. It had to be said that the mysterious and vast underground space of the 5-poison swamp was really a treasure land for Lin Yi. There was probably no place more suitable for him to cultivate in the world. Whether it was the high concentration of spirit chi or the unique murderous aura of the 5 elements, it was hard to find anywhere else except this 5-poison swamp. Chapter 45-52. However, being able to advance 3 levels in a row was not purely because of the unique cultivation environment here. In the process, Lin Yi refined the 10,000 crossing golden elixir fruit that he had previously harvested into a superb golden elixir. Taking it together with his cultivation could have such a terrifying effect. Of course, even so, it was enough to make people's jaws drop. The golden elixir great perfection was only 1 step away from the nascent soul stage, and the golden elixir had just been used up. Although Lin Yi could continue to choose to retreat here, this was different from the previous consecutive breakthroughs. It was not a success that could be achieved through tempering. Because he was the strongest golden elixir stage master who had a perfect breakthrough, and his strength was deep enough, coupled with the unique cultivation environment here, Lin Yi's extraordinary breakthrough was unexpected, but it was still reasonable. It was not as outrageous as it seemed at first glance. However, condensing the nascent soul was different. Strength, opportunity, state of mind, and elixir could not be lacking. Only after all preparations were made could there be a chance of success. Lin Yi had just broken through consecutively. Even if he did not need to specifically stabilize his strength because of the 5 elements killing chi, it was obviously not to the point where everything was ready. It was not impossible to continue to stay here and cultivate, but the cost-effectiveness was not as high as before. Lin Yi knew that blindly cultivating was definitely not the best way to cultivate. Only by relaxing could he get twice the result with half the effort. What's more, there were only 2 months left before the deadline. After deducting the time spent on the long journey, there was not much time left. After instructing the spirit bird, Lin Yi immediately covered himself and the spirit bird with his majestic chi. This kind of thing could not be done when he came in, but now that his strength had skyrocketed by 3 levels, it was no longer a problem. The spirit bird carried Lin Yi and immediately rushed into the 5-poison swamp above. Although the resistance of the swamp was great, with Lin Yi's chi and the spirit bird's improvement in the past 3 months, there was no sign of strain at this moment. At this rate, flying out of the 5-poison swamp would not be a difficult task. What was worth mentioning was that from the beginning to the end, the 5-elemental murderous aura that resembled a flood dragon completely ignored Lin Yi and the spirit bird. Even when they accidentally touched it, there was no reaction at all. It could be seen that they really treated Lin Yi's true chi as their own. The man and bird traveled through the swamp for about an hour, and Lin Yi could clearly feel that the resistance was getting weaker and weaker. It seemed like they would be able to see the sky again soon. The mysterious space below was still full of light, but Lin Yi couldn't help but feel refreshed. However, that feeling was obviously incomparable to the feeling on the ground. Only by returning to the ground could one truly experience what it meant to breathe freely. This was an innate human instinct. Finally, just as he was about to charge out of the 5-poison swamp, the ghostly voice suddenly sounded in his mind, "Stop. Senior, what's wrong?" Although Lin Yi did not know the reason, he hurriedly stopped the spirit bird and looked around vigilantly. He thought that he had been targeted by some dangerous existence, but the jade pendant did not have the slightest intention of warning him. Could it be that the West Mountain Old Sect Master was still guarding above? It had already been 3 months. It was unlikely, no matter how much the West Mountain Old Sect Master hated him to the bone, as an evil cultivator of the mountain opening period. As the number 2 figure of the West Mountain Evil Sect, it was impossible for him to be so idle that he would keep guarding this 5-poison swamp, right? Any normal person would also think that they had died without a corpse left. Could it be that evil cultivators were not only abnormal in terms of their cultivation methods? Even their brains were abnormal? There's someone above. The ghostly thing said in a deep voice. What? There's really someone guarding it? Could it really be that old monster of the West Mountain old sect? Linny was shocked. As the mud of the five-poison swamp could isolate divine sense, even if they were very close to the ground, he still could not sense anything outside at all. But he still couldn't sense the situation outside at all, and he couldn't help but ask curiously, Senior, could it be that your divine sense isn't affected by this swamp? Of course it's affected, but it's only weakened a lot. It's not to the extent where you can't feel anything at all and become a living blind. The ghostly thing laughed. This time it was Lin Yi's turn to be envious. Both of them used the same divine sense, but his divine sense was isolated at will. He could not sense anything from the five-poison swamp at all, while the ghostly thing's divine sense was only weakened. It was really infuriating to compare oneself to others. You don't have to look like this. If you want to break through the isolation of the swamp, the strength of your divine sense must reach an amazing level. Only a very few high-level spirit beasts and a small number of top human masters standing at the top can do it. Your current level is too low. You haven't even started the most basic divine sense skills. You're still far away from this step. The ghostly thing explained with a smile. I see. No wonder I was scanned by the vermilion bird's divine sense when I was in the dense forest of the South Island. At that time, for safety's sake, I clearly smeared the swamp mud on my body. I thought it was because the swamp mud had been smeared on my body for too long, and after getting rid of it, it couldn't block the perception of divine sense. Lin Yi smiled bitterly. That's indeed the case. However, even if the swamp mud didn't get rid of it, you couldn't have escaped the perception of the vermilion bird. Although I have always disliked this guy, I have to say that although this guy is inferior to me in every aspect, it is not inferior to me in the aspect of divine sense, which is what I am best at. The ghostly thing sighed. Lin Yi nodded. He didn't find it strange at all. After all, the vermilion bird was one of the most powerful beings in the spirit beast clan. If it didn't even have this much strength, how would it be able to control those wild and powerful spirit beasts? Senior, what's the situation up there now? Lin Yi pointed to the top of his head and asked. What he wanted to know the most now was whether the one guarding up there was the West Mountain Elder. Listen to it yourself. The ghostly thing snorted. If I could hear it myself, why would I need to ask you, Senior? Lin Yi was suddenly speechless. Of course you can't hear it by yourself. But with me here, if I want you to hear it, you can hear it. The ghostly thing smiled mysteriously. Then it used some kind of magical method, and Lin Yi actually suddenly heard the movement up there. Awesome. It's simply a magical skill. Lin Yi's eyes suddenly lit up as he praised repeatedly. He could not help but ask curiously, Senior, how did you do it?